Greetings ladies and gentlemen. Welcome to the Library of the Unwritten. I am the Archiver. Back with today's stories. Today's series is What If Deku Gains Red Hood's Memories. Before we start, give this video a like and subscribe to the channel if you want more content like this. Now let's get into it. I still don't see why I have to be here. Jason took a deep breath, suppressing his first instinct. And his second and maybe third too, come to think of it. You're here because I don't trust you, he growled, his helmet lending a rasping, metallic flavor to his voice. So quit your whining. Damien sneered at him, eyes glittering from behind the mask he wore clamped over his eyes, and Jason rested a hand on the butt of his pistol. Try me, kid killer. Damien's sneer turned into a teeth-baring snarl, his own hand dropping to the sword, and Jason dipped his chin, shoulders squaring in preparation. Hud, Nightwing, enough. We have a job to do and you two fighting won't help. It would help me, Jason rasped, but he dragged his glare away from Damien, turning his gaze onto the third member of their little party. Canary looked ragged, her jacket torn and patched roughly, but there was a fire in her eyes that wouldn't die. Damien scoffed, but this time Jason didn't rise to the bait. Besides, Canary continued, the kid has a point. Why bring him with us? And what exactly are we after? You just told us that you had something that might help with Superman before dragging us out here. Jason huffed, fingers automatically pulling at the collar of his jacket, making sure that it hadn't ridden up. He tucked it back into place before answering. You can thank Bruce for that. See, after Clark got thrown into jail for the first time, Bruce decided that the Batcave wasn't safe enough. So he stashed a whole bunch of gear in some other safe houses. Set up a system that would alert his allies if he didn't access it for a while. I got the message about 3 days ago. Gear? That's it. Damien asked, but his tone was a little less hostile. Jason shook his head. I'm pretty sure that the cache we're looking for right now includes the dimensional transporter. Wait, I thought that was destroyed. Yeah, well, apparently not. But now that Clark has his mind-controlled armies, it definitely needs to be. Plus, there might be some Luthor tech still in there that we can use. Something that'll break the brainwashing, if we're lucky. If not, we'll still get something out of it. And since you're so desperate to know, Kid Killer, I brought you along not just because I don't trust you, but because you're actually good at stealth. Think you're funny, don't you? Damien asked, bristling at the nickname. Jason gave him a grin that was all teeth. It was hidden behind his helmet, but he knew Damien would hear it in his voice. There's no thinking involved, kid. Now come on, we haven't got all day. I don't know who else Bruce might have set to be alerted, and I don't know who Clark's gotten his hands on. TCH. Hud is right, we need to move. Jason smirked at Damien as he took the lead again. It wasn't far now. The car he had stolen in Metropolis had gotten them most of the way into the forest, but it was still a fair hike. Bruce's paranoia once again, although this time it was probably worthwhile. Jason tilted his head as his earpiece crackled, Canary and Damien mimicking his movements. You got trouble, Red, Harley sang out, her tone deceptively carefree as ever. Some of the big blue tyrant's boys are headed out from Metropolis. Shit. You know where? Nah, sorry. But they're heading your way. Little Blue said she'd distract her cousin for you, though. Tell her to be careful, Damien snapped, she's not ready. Harley went quiet for a moment, her tone sharpening slightly. I know, kid. But we all gotta do what we gotta do, right? Damien whispered a curse as their earpieces went quiet again. Let's pick up the pace, Dinah said, we don't want to be late. Jason nodded in agreement and sped up, almost jogging along the forest path. Damien followed in sullen silence before he growled quietly and broke the quiet. I don't get it, Hud. Don't get what, kid? Jason asked. Normally he didn't have much time for Damien, what with, well, everything, but in this case the kid sounded genuinely confused. Maybe Jason would have to do the decent thing for once and act like an actual, responsible big brother. You're all off around me. I get it, Hud. But Harley, she's fine. What she's done is all cool with you. On a different day Jason would have replied snappishly, only hearing the whining in Damien's tone, like the kid thought he hadn't done anything wrong. On a different day Jason might have blown up at him. But today Jason felt off, today. There was something in the air, and he might not get another chance. Christ, he hated premonitions. His gut was almost as paranoid as Bruce. But still. Just in case. You want to know why you, a supporter of the regime for the best part of 10 years, is less trusted than Harley, former supervillain and loyal member of the insurgency? Damien growled, but it sounded uncertain. Yeah, Jason. Yeah. I want to know. I know what I did, if I could take it back I would. But she helped the Joker, Jason. She was his sidekick, his backup, she's almost as responsible for all those deaths as he is, but that doesn't seem to matter. Bruce never cared, and you don't either. Jason jogged on a few more steps, trying to find the right words. He was no good at this, but Canary wasn't jumping in to save him. Alright, kid. I'll level with you. You got a bad hand right from the start, yeah. Raised by the League, sent over to your old man, suddenly had to be a righteous hero. I get it. But you think you've had a bad hand, Harley's had a bad one too. She ain't exactly in her right mind even now. You can remember her back then, right? Yeah, Damien muttered, sour and sullen. Jason sighed. If there was any justice, Damien, Harley would be in a mental institute. You think she'll get justice from Superman and his regime? Diana almost killed her only a couple of months ago, she probably wouldn't even get a trial. And for the record, I think you did the right thing with Sass. You want to know what you did wrong there, though? Enabling Clark right as Bruce was trying to talk him down. You lost your head and look where it got you. You want to talk about losing your head, Damien muttered, and Jason grinned. Yeah, I know. Experience is the best teacher, or whatever. Look, kid. Everybody liked Dick, you know. Everybody. Even if it was an accident, you aren't gonna get away from killing him. That's gonna follow you forever, even with people who didn't know him. He's the golden boy now. Jason stopped talking to swallow against the harshness in his throat. He'd done his investigating, he checked his facts. Damien hadn't killed Dick on purpose. It had been an accident. But fuck, Dick had been a shining light in the superhero community. Sometimes, on his bad days, Jason could barely stand to look at Damien. Sometimes, on his bad days, all he could see was the blood on Damien's hands, even if he knew that Damien had been a traumatized kid, barely 18, who'd made a mistake. Hell, that summed up pretty much every one of the Bat family, even if Damien's mistake had been worse. But it was easier to remember that when he wasn't with the regime, denying he'd ever done anything wrong, clinging to Clark's cloak. Jason chanced to look at Damien, who had clenched his fist and was looking down. Chin up, kid. We'll have time to mope once we cleared out the cache. It's very sweet that you're getting over your issues, but is now really the time? Canary asked. Jason turned his head to her, hoping that she could sense his raised eyebrow through his helmet. This wasn't the best time, not a chance, but they might not get another. Oh, she said, a lot more quietly, that bad. Jason shook his head. Just a feeling. If you want to get out of here, now's the time. Normally he wouldn't have offered. Canary Dinah was a hero too. She knew the risks. But this had a lot of risks involved, and Dinah had a family. She had more to lose. He wasn't surprised when she shook her head, though. Sorry, Hood. You're stuck with me. Jason didn't do her the injustice of asking again, just nodding. They kept moving through the forest, steps quick and quiet. The kryptonite laser was locked behind DNA samples from 4 people. This isn't going to be the same, is it? Dinah asked. Jason shrugged. With Bruce, who knows? But I don't think so. He learned his lesson after his best weapon was inaccessible. I hope. Nice to see you so assured, Todd. Damien muttered. Jason clicked his tongue. No real way to know, kid, and I don't want to risk it. If we can't get through, we'll have to come back with some heavy gear. Explosives, probably. That dimensional transporter can't end up with the regime. Well, we agree on that, Damien muttered. Jason saw the kid frown, his head tilting. What? Noise, Damien hissed, dropping into a crouch. Sounds like voices. Aw shit, Jason whispered, too quietly to make it through his helmet. They all crouched, moving ahead in an awkward half-walk to cover the distance. The cache was hidden in a cave, and they huddled in the tree line, watching the entrance. There were 8 men in body armor and masking helmets, their regime stormtroopers. Superman hadn't wasted any time in rebuilding his paramilitary forces, even if he liked to use his mind-controlled forces more. Half a squad. Must have been dropped off by helicopter to search the area, Damien whispered. Jason nodded. We can take them. Just keep it quiet. Jason slid one of his pistols from its holster, drawing a knife with his other hand. A glance to his left showed Damien, sword already drawn. To his right, Dinah flexed her fingers, eyes narrowed. Jason nodded to them both. 3, 2, 1, go. Jason moved fastest, bursting from cover. The stormtroopers had their backs to him, and he took them completely off guard, plunging his knife into a neck before turning, the muffled bark of his pistol sounding twice. 2 more shots, punching through armor, and he pulled his knife free, ducked an instinctive swing of a rifle butt, pistol pressed against a knee and firing, and he planted his knee on the soldier's chest, knife coming down in quick disciplined thrusts, until the soldier stopped kicking. The body thumped on the ground next to him, blood spattering the loam, as Damien swiped his bloodied sword through the air, 2 more bodies behind him. Dinah was choking the last, grappling on the ground. Jason jerked his head at Damien, Dinah holding the man still as Damien walked across, a single slash across the throat ending the fight. Canary's face was curled in disgust. Easier to kill them. Safer, too, Jason said, refusing remorse. Dinah heaved the corpse off her and rolled to her feet, brushing at the blood on her jacket with a disgusted expression. Bruce wouldn't have killed them, she said. Jason froze, halfway through wiping the blood off his knife, and felt Damien tense next to him. No, he eventually said, he wouldn't have. And look where that's gotten him. Dinah grimaced but didn't say anything more. Jason finished wiping his knife and sheathed it, holstering his pistol. We won't have long before they fail to report in and we're busted, so let's go. We'll have to be quick. They left the bodies behind, moving quickly into the cave. It was a narrow passage, just wide enough for two of them at a time, but it wasn't long before they came to a dead end. Dinah turned around, keeping watch behind them, while Jason and Damien looked for something: a control panel, a hidden switch, anything. Damien was the one who found it. This crack here, it's not natural. Looks like it might be USB port. Jason sighed. I appreciate the thought, Bruce, but there have got to be better ways than this. It must need the file he sent me or hid on my computer, maybe. Not sure which, bloody paranoid. Lot of ways it could have gone wrong. But did it go right? Damien asked. Jason reached into his jacket and pulled out his thumb drive, holding it up. Let's find out. The crack had been a covering, he saw, one that Damien had pulled away to reveal the USB port. Jason delicately inserted the drive, narrowing his eyes at the green light that flashed on it. What are the chances that there'll be more than one layer of security? Dinah asked. Jason shook his head. More than excellent. The USB flashed again and red lines of light swept from hidden apertures in the wall, sweeping over them. Jason slowly raised his hands. That could be bad, Damien noted, given that the last father knew. Do not finish that sentence. If you tempt fate like that, I swear to Christ. Acknowledge. Red Hood, Black Canary. Confirm presence. Damien Wayne. He's with us, Jason said, helmet turning left and right as he tried to work out where the lights were coming from exactly. Some kind of automated defense system. That was most likely. Luther tech drones, probably. Confirmed. Initial defenses unlocked. Jason sighed. Must be smart enough to work out that you're not coercing us. Probably assessing your body language and tone, Damien agreed. Dinah blew a breath between her teeth. You two are far too calm. Jason snorted. You live with Bruce for a few years, you start to get used to his contraptions. Now come on. The three of them passed through the door that had slid back in the rock, Jason snatching up the thumb drive as they went. Once they were all into the brushed steel corridor beyond, the door slid back into place. Jason weighed the thumb drive in his hand, wondering if he would need it again. He reckoned the odds were about 50-50. Bruce could have been too careful to make the data important for bypassing more than one set of defenses. Equally, he could require it be used twice as a sort of riddle. Either way, Jason would have it. They walked down the corridor and to the next door, halting there. I know Bruce's was paranoid, but 3 fingerprint scanners seems excessive, Dinah commented. Damien shook his head. They're not all scanners. 2 are traps. Only 1 will work. Jason grumbled under his breath. I wish Tim was here. He's better at this sort of shit than me. Damien didn't bother to reply, kneeling and running his hand under the scanner. You've known him longer, Todd. What sort of sign would he use to mark the real scanner? Have you looked for a bat? Jason asked, tone absolutely unwavering. Damien grunted in annoyance. If you're trying to be funny, Todd, then you aren't doing a very good job of it. Touchy. Any ideas, Canary? Dinah chewed her lip, looking around the corridor. If Bruce was being paranoid, why would it be any of these? Wouldn't he use all of these as bait? Damien wriggled around, sitting with his back to the wall. That's a good point, actually. Jason tapped his thigh, thinking. Yeah, that's the sort of weird thinking that he'd like. So another one in the wall. Thermovision marked, maybe. Wouldn't that mean that Superman could see it? Damien wriggled out from under the scanners, shrugging. I doubt he cared to. If Superman was here, he'd just punch through all the walls and ignore the defenses. Yeah, good point, Dinah conceded. Hood. Jason reached up, tapping at the side of his helmet. When nothing happened, he frowned, slapping the plastic with the flat of his hand, his vision flickering as the filters began to work. I've been running from safe house to safe house recently, not a lot of maintenance time, he explained. Can't see it now though. Damien had produced a pair of visors from his belt, handing one to Dinah and sliding the other one on. It's a keypad. So, what, we just have to guess. Did Bruce have any codes that he used regularly? Jason snorted and Damien outright laughed. Father used a code regularly. I'm sure that he changed every password he had every 3 days or so. But we don't need to, he left a clue. Damien pointed at the wall just above the hidden keypad, where there was a scatter of dots and dashes. Morse code. Code 78. I know that one. Yeah, it's one of his emergency codes. Never used it before as far as I know, Jason agreed, leaning across and punching in the 16-digit code. He stepped away once he was finished, all three of them waiting with bated breath. You think we need to do something else, or? Jason was cut off as the floor moved under his feet, leaping back to the walls. Damien and Dinah replicated the action, jerking away from the movement as quickly as possible, all of them staring at the floor split, two panels sliding apart to reveal a set of stairs. Jason laughed disbelievingly. Really? Damien shook his head. His flair for dramatics was certainly intact when building this place. Jason shook his head. Secret stairs. How very Batman, he muttered. The level below wasn't lit, so he unhooked a torch from his belt and held it up, descending slowly. His night vision was still on, but just in case. There was another short corridor, brushed steel again, but the walls had nothing like the last, just plain steel. The three of them walked roughly 10 feet along the corridor, seeing nothing, until they reached a heavy vault door. There was one more fingerprint scanner locked into the door, and Jason doubted that this one was a fake. Well, Todd. You're better off than either of us. Dinah was actually part of the insurgency, kid. You were regime and I was rogue. But when Bruce built this place he probably assumed that I was dead. You're the only one it would accept, Dinah argued. Jason glanced at her, sighing. Yeah, alright. Hold the torch. Jason handed the torch to Dinah, pulling off his left glove and tucking it into a pocket. The fingerprint scanner was a full hand thing, with a recess for his hand to go in, so he leaned his right hand on the door, and set his left against cool glass. Not a second after restraint slid out of the scanner, holding his hands still, and Jason swore in surprise. It's fine, he grunted, just startled me. Must be a full DNA scanner. He grimaced at the prickling sensation that spread across his hand, something scraping lightly at the skin. Definitely a DNA scanner. Subject Red Hood, Robin 2, Jason Todd. Affiliation none, former insurgency. Security question. Robin 2. Damien snickered quietly. Shut it, 4, Jason growled. The robotic voice changed, becoming deep, gruff. Bruce's voice. Jason. What were the last words you said to me, before you left the insurgency? Jason blinked, letting his head tilt down, chin resting on his chest. I said, he started, quiet and sullen, that you weren't going to stop Superman while wearing kid gloves, and I wasn't going to stay around and watch you die trying. A frozen moment before the robotic voice returned. Voice print confirmed. Answer confirmed. Welcome Jason Todd. Jason sighed, long and slow. I wish you'd prove me wrong, old man. Jason, Damien started, voice uncertain over the noise of the vault door. Jason shook his head. Leave it, kid. Save it for later. Jason didn't give Damien a chance to argue, squeezing through the vault door before it was fully open and proceeding into the vault itself. There were doors along the sides of the circular room, a single computer sat in the middle. There was a slot for a USB drive front and center, and Jason snorted in faint amusement. The USB? Damien asked. Jason leaned on the computer desk as he inserted the thumb drive, grinning as a file opened up. It's a cargo manifest, he said, tapping at the screen. You funny sod, Bruce. Alright, that's clever enough. You know what we're looking for? Dinah asked. Jason shrugged. Yeah, more or less. Let me see. It didn't take him long to search through the manifest and find what he was looking for. Good news, people. The dimensional transporter is here. Even better, so is some experimental tech that we can use. Bad news, it looks like it's only 80% complete. Oh, that ain't the only bad news, Hood. Jason froze, hair standing up on the back of his neck. He heard Dinah and Damien turn around behind him and straightened from his bent-over position. He turned, shoving the computer from the desk as he went. It was one of the new kinds, the monitor integrated into the PC. It smashed to the ground, and Jason shrugged. Oops. Looks like you aren't gonna be looking through that anytime soon. We're in no rush. 1.5 squads of regime stormtroopers, 24 men, and 3 others. Metas are technically in that weight class. I would have thought you were better than this, Cold. The regime killed your sister, didn't they? Cole tilted his head in a shrug, his lips curling into a sardonic expression. Sure they did. Didn't think that letting them kill me would make it right, though. We can't all get a golden boy redemption arc like the kid there. Damien growled, his sword scraping softly as he drew it. Jason rested his hands on his guns, eyes raking across the regime forces. Cold. Not a meta, but equipped with his cold gun and heavily armored. Cybered. Deadly enough as an enforcer, metal limbs and plenty of weapons generating from his advanced body, but not unstoppable. And last of all, Bane. Massive, hulking, torso armor-plated. Super strength sufficient to tear a man apart with his bare hands. Not the best odds he'd ever seen. You'll never know if you don't try, Cold. Give it a shot. Cyborg can come too, if he likes. We're welcoming everyone these days. For a moment Jason thought Cold might bite, but then the man laughed. Sorry, Hood, but I got a good thing going here. I'm not gonna throw it away for your terrorist group. Jason sighed. Well, if you're gonna be like that, I've got plenty of bullets. And speaking of bullets, you've been waiting way too long. Damien. Do you think? Bane and Cold had just started to laugh when Damien held up pressed a button on his gauntlet, and detonated the explosive bird earrings he had scattered around the vault door as they entered. Jason moved, bounding forwards, a hand dipping into his jacket and pulling out a grenade. The walls of the vault echoed with sound as Canary added her cry to the explosion, the regime forces reeling, and an underarm toss sent the grenade into a cluster of stormtroopers. Bane and Cold had scattered, Cyborg staggering, and Jason saw Damien sprint past, sword in hand. Damien slid under Bane, getting into what stormtroopers remained, Canary running at Cyborg. Jason drew his left-hand pistol, firing 4 steady, evenly spaced shots into the 4 troopers that remained in his line of sight, before a roar drew his attention to Bane, and he switched fire. Bullets sparked and clanged against the heavy armor that covered Bane's chest, the man roaring as he broke into a pounding run. Jason just had time to see Damien slice down the last of the stormtroopers, and turn on Cold before Bane was on him. Come here, little man. No, I think I'm okay. Jason yelped, ducking under a swinging hand. He swung round behind Bane, unloading several more shots into his back, but Bane just roared and shrugged off the impacts. Jason didn't think the man was juiced up on the Kryptonian nanotic super pills. There were bloody marks on his arms from the earlier explosion, but maybe he was on something else. Even with the armor holding, those close-range shots should have left fractures in bone. Bane spun around, fast for such a large man, and Jason got busy dodging, ducking a heavy haymaker, dropping almost to the ground to avoid the following jab and rolling away, barely avoiding a massive stamp of a boot. We've done this before, Hood. We know how this ends. With a bullet in your skull and me walking away. Bane laughed. Brave, but foolish. Jason reached his free hand into his jacket and tossed a handful of shuriken as he rolled away, the bladed stars glancing pointlessly from Bane's helmet, but keeping him distracted long enough for Jason to gain some range. He hated to admit it, but Bane was right. Jason was faster, more skilled, but Bane was simply too strong. One blow would put Jason down for the count, and Bane had long since gotten wise to Batman's attempts to cut his venom supply. The pipes were armored now, running under clothes and plates. Too heavily armored to be worth it. He needed an opening. Jason let his gun fall back into its holster, slipping his hands into his pockets, and sliding them into a pair of brass knuckles that he'd inherited. He'd inherited them from the Batcave. Well, calling them brass knuckles was a little low. They were fully electrified and reinforced to deliver brutally punishing blows. Now he got to test them out. More trinkets, Hood. They didn't help Batman. Not against Superman, Jason agreed, bouncing on his toes and raising his fists, but I'm not Batman. And you're definitely not Superman. Jason weaved through 2 punches, retaliating with 3 quick jabs to the torso, staying close despite the danger. The brass knuckles crackled uncomfortably against his hands, but he heard Bane grunt, heard the grunt turn into a snarl, and he shifted his shoulders, ducked his head away from a swinging open-palmed strike, and threw a punch to the jaw, sending Bane staggering back. Bane recovered with a swinging backhand that kept Jason away before lunging forwards. Jason wasn't quick enough this time, and all he could do was cross his arms and take the hit. It hurt like hell. The impact rattled his bones through his bracers and gauntlets, and sent him staggering away. If he hadn't already been stepping back, it might have knocked him off his feet, but as it was. Jason weaved under an attempt by Bane to crush him under both fists, and swing a punch into Bane's side. The impact stung his arms, and Bane just shook it off. This wasn't working. Past Bane he heard Canary cry again and saw Dinah and Damien switch opponents, leaving Canary brawling with Cold and Damien closing in on Cyborg, but Jason couldn't spare a moment to do anything to help them, Bane coming in swinging again. Jason barely avoided a smashing downwards punch, slipping to the side, and ramming the heel of his boot into Bane's knee, in a perfectly executed move. Bane barely flinched and massive fingers closed around Jason's ankle. Oh shit. Bane wrenched him off his feet, his legs screaming in protest, Jason flailing in anticipation of being slammed into the ground. Damien saw his predicament, stealing a moment to flick out an arm. Jason saw the bird airing whip through the air a moment before it exploded against the back of Bane's helmet. The helmet held, but Bane himself was stunned, falling to one knee and letting Jason go. Jason grunted as he rammed into the ground, ribs and arms protesting, but he was alive. The save had cost Damien though. Cyborg had gained the advantage, knocking the sword from Damien's hand and forcing him to the ground, one hand raised with the fist converted into a sonic blaster. Jason heard Bane rise but ignored him, slamming the two electrified knuckles together hard enough to overload them and throwing. He saw them slam into Cyborg's head and burst in a crackling shower of electricity, just before Bane grabbed him by the head and rammed his face into the ground. Jason grunted in pain, his helmet only just holding, and Bane peeled him off the ground and to his knees. Jason scrabbled at his back, fingers curling around the hilt of his knife. Now, Red Hood, time to. The sonic cannon struck Bane in the skull with a wavering, bubbling echo of sound, and Bane went limp for a moment. Jason drew his knife, driving it into Bane's knee and rolling away, coming to his knees. He didn't bother with a witty one-liner, just drew his pistol and jammed it under Bane's arm, where the armor plate wasn't present. 4 bullets tore Bane's chest open, rupturing bone and pulverizing flesh. Bane was dead before he hit the ground, and Jason dragged himself to his feet, groaning. Damian rose from Cyborg's body, letting the sonic cannon slump to the ground before he retrieved his sword, bringing it into the air and stabbing down. 2 down, Jason rasped, turning. Canary had Cold on the defensive, his back to them. Jason waited until Damian was in position and fired a single shot. Cold went to one knee as the bullet punched into his thigh, the armor holding, but the impact dropping him, and Damian landed behind him, wrenching his head back and ramming a knife into his throat. Dinah grimaced at the blood but seemed to get over it. Alright, let's get this done. We might not have equals. We got problems, Red, Harley interrupted, Jason wincing as his communicator crackled. He rapped at the side of his helmet, walking quickly over to the side vault where his prize was stored. What is it, Harley? Superman must have realized something's up. He's made a move. Supergirl and Flash are distracting him, but it won't last. Shit. Yeah, what's hot said, Damian added. Jason swore again, pushing himself over to the vault and tapping a code into the keypad, the door sliding back. Tell them we only need a couple of minutes, Harley. We both know that. Yeah, I gotcha. Be careful, Red. Yeah. Do my best. Harley went quiet again, and Dinah muttered something. Hud, we both know that. Yeah, I know they can't stop him. Now come on, we have to hurry this up. We'll need to find AO. Oh, that'll do. Is that? Yeah, kid. That's a functioning teleporter. That'll do for me. And that's the control breaker in the corner, nearly complete. Grab it and we'll. There was a soft noise behind them, and Jason spun, pistol already coming out. He was too late. Dinah collapsed forwards, blood spurting from the gash across her throat, and Jason saw the last words her lips formed. Connor. Rage surged furious in his chest, and Jason whipped his gun up, firing, the recoil jarring his arm and the noise reverberating through the cracks in his helmet. His target half crouched, a cape swinging up to deflect the bullets before something flew from the dark figure, and the gun was swatted from his hand. Damian leapt in and an armored gauntlet deflected his sword, a fist catching Damian in the chin, before 2 hands closed across Damian's chest and flung him away, the smooth motion of the throw frighteningly familiar. Oh, fuck. Hello, Bruce. Jason swallowed as Batman rose to his full height, shaking out the hand that his pistol had been knocked out of. This was the first time he'd been this close to Bruce since Superman had won their final battle, and put Bruce under the spell of the mind control technology. In all honesty, he would have preferred to avoid this altogether. Jason wasn't a small man, but Bruce was taller, even if it was only by a fraction, and wider across the shoulders. Jason wore armor, but it was a battered Kevlar composite vest, vambraces and boots. Bruce wore armor across his whole body, chest piece, eyes, shoulders, arms, all of it, giving him even more of an edge in single combat. Jason had a knife, a gun, and about 6 shuriken. Bruce could well be equipped to fight a war. Some of the mind control could be broken out of it, destroy the device that was usually clamped onto the temple, and they might recover. Given Bruce's will, Jason didn't doubt that he would recover. The problem was that Superman had foreseen that. Jason had only heard rumors, but they were confirmed for him. Now Superman had put Bruce into surgery, building the control device into cybernetics. Jason could see the sick purple glow of the alien technology, shining from the eye sockets of Bruce's mask. Come on, Bruce. Don't make me do this, old man. I don't want to kill you. You couldn't even if you tried, Bruce replied, his harsh voice deadened and metallic. Jason gritted his teeth. Is it, Bruce? You're just another pawn now. Just another fucking zombie. Jason barely got his right hand up in time to block the first punch. It staggered him, knocked him into the wall, and the knee caught him in the gut, driving the breath out of his lungs. He doubled over, gagging for air, and Bruce rolled over him, wrapping an arm around his throat and squeezing. Jason choked, clawing at flat, hard armor with desperate fingers, lights flashing across his vision. Damian saved him again, coming in with a silent dropkick that hammered Bruce into the wall, and gave Jason a chance to roll away, coughing and spluttering. Batman rebounded without a word, hammering at Damian, fists moving with mechanical precision. Damian was talented in hand-to-hand combat, but he didn't stand a chance. Jason had seen it before. With their weapons of choice, all of Batman's Robins had a chance against their mentor. Reduce the fists. Foregone conclusion. Batman weathered 2 blows from Damian without flinching, catching a third and driving a fist into Damian's side, just above the kidney. Damian coughed in pain, and Bruce released his fist, sent a quick jab towards Damian's nose, and followed with a vicious punch to the chest, sending Damian reeling. The kid staggered back and Bruce caught his flailing fist again, tilting his free arm. 3 curved blades popped out of his gauntlet with a vicious-sounding click, Batman drawing his arm back, clearly intending to cut Damian down as he had Dinah. Jason dragged in a desperate breath and dashed across the empty space, locking his arm around Bruce's, arms interlinking to hold him still, before he drove a kick into Batman's knee and headbutted him. That got a reaction and Bruce twisted, turning his hip into Jason and flipping him to the ground. Jason rolled on impact, getting away from the boot stomp that followed, and hearing the grunt, as Damian broke free of the lock. "Damian," he rasped, snatching up the sword he had rolled over and throwing it. Damian grabbed it from the air and turned, blade blurring as he attacked. "He's too fast." Damian grunted, Batman blocking every blow with reinforced vambraces. Jason got to one knee, hauling in a labored breath. "Cybernetics," he gasped, lurching to his feet. Damian spun, a slash turning into a spinning kick that flowed smoothly into a second slash, steel scoring Batman's breastplate and sundering the symbol of the regime that now lay there. For a moment Jason had hope, until Damian made a mistake. Batman had staggered back and Damian got cocky, thought he had the advantage. The lunge went towards Batman's leg, not to kill but to cripple, and Bruce slid his hand down and caught it. The blade scraped off plate, trapped between arm and thigh, and Bruce twisted, the silvery snap of steel sounding far too loudly in the quiet. Damian reacted quickly, but not quickly enough, and the dry crunch of bone was the next sound, as Batman caught the hasty punch he threw and twisted his arm at a sharp angle. "Damian." "No, Bruce." The hand lifted and Jason reached into his jacket, threw his last shuriken, saw them swatted from the air by answering batarangs, sprinting forwards. Bruce moved towards him, but Damian grabbed his leg, held him for just long enough to distract him, paid for it as a boot dropped onto his chest and drove the breath out of him, and Jason took a wild risk and jumped, knee catching Bruce across the temple and sending his sprawling. Jason grabbed Damian and dragged him upright, shoving the kid behind him, determined that he wouldn't stand by and lose him. Not Damian. Not the last of his family. "Run, kid. Now." "Not without you," Damian whispered, his voice harsh with pain. Jason gritted his teeth as Bruce rose, although the purple light in his eyes seemed a little less virulent. "Yeah, Jason," Bruce whispered, voice harsh and ragged. For a moment Jason forgot to breathe, his heart forgot how to beat, his blood forgot how to flow. "Bruce?" he asked numbly, his pulse whispering harshly in his ears as it returned. Bruce doubled over, hands clutching at his skull, a low keening of pain tearing itself from his throat. Damian made a noise of horror from behind Jason as Bruce looked up, face twisted in agony. "Jason, please." Jason knew what he was asking. He just didn't know if he had the strength to do it. "Jason, what is he?" "Stay back, Damian," Jason said softly, so softly, walking slowly forwards. Batman looked up, the pain on his face transforming into a rictus of agony. Every part of Jason still hurt, but it was choked down by despair and a pulsing, icy numbness that invaded every part of him. Bruce snarled, teeth flecked with blood, froth dripping down his face, and lunged. Jason met him head-on, blocking 2 quick punches and returning a straight left to the nose, ducking a swinging right and shooting a blow to the side, a kick slamming into his shoulder, before he threw it off and swept Batman's leg, taking the fight to the ground. Berserk with sorrow Jason straddled Batman's fallen form, raining punches into his face, into the raised arms, trying to break Bruce's guard, but he couldn't, wasn't strong enough, wasn't quick enough, wasn't good enough, and the counterattack rammed into his helmet and threw him off. Jason rolled, held to his feet by a boot that slammed into his ribs, fractured now and a hand that closed on his collar, and dragged him upright, blows pistoning into his helmet. Colors flashed across his vision, his back to a wall and he snarled, brought his hand up and closed his eyes. He heard Bruce cry out as the flashbang went off, slumping to the ground as Bruce let him go. "Get up," he told himself, "get up." His body wouldn't respond, couldn't respond. Jason gritted his teeth. "Get up before he kills you. Get up before he kills Damian." His will overcame the weakness of his flesh, and he rose, coughing out bloody spit, gasping for air. His fingers felt numb, but he wasn't done yet, his eyes fixing onto Bruce. He drew his knife. "Bruce." The name out more like a plea than a curse, his voice cracking halfway, but it drew Batman back. The man surged across the empty space between them, cape billowing, and Jason met him with a slice towards the eyes. Bruce blocked with his forearm, twisted the knife from his hand, the other arm slamming into his chest and forcing him against the wall. Jason felt every inch of the knife as it entered his side. The gun in his other hand pressed under Bruce's chin, and he sobbed as he pulled the trigger. "I'm sorry, Bruce," he whispered, falling to his knees next to the body. "Jason. Father." Damien was at his side, an arm hooked under his, a look of horror and anguish knotting his features. Jason choked out another sob, watching the body of the man who had been a better parent than his biological forebears ever managed, bleed onto the floor, and leaned on his brother in all but blood. "I'm sorry, Bruce. God, I. Damien wrapped an arm around him and helped him stand, tears streaming from under his mask. "We can't, Jason, we can't stay here. They'll be coming." I know, God. Damien, Save the apologies for later, Jason, Damien managed, his voice thick with mourning. "Live for now." The two of them forced themselves away from the body, limping into the vault. Jason slumped against the dimensional transporter, gasping for breath. Every breath came harder, and he suspected that a lung was punctured. No. Suspected had a chance of being wrong. He knew a lung was punctured. He knew that he was dying. But he still had something to do. He grabbed the device he was looking for from a shelf, pushing it into Damien's hand. "Here, take this. Take the teleporter out, quickly." "What? You're injured, you need to go first." "I'll blow the transporter and be right behind." "Go, Damien. Go." Harley was giving a quick report, the words fuzzy through the damaged helmet and possible cranial trauma, and Jason didn't waste any more time. He shoved Damien onto the teleporter and punched in the coordinates that he knew by heart. "Damien, listen. I need you to be better, you understand? Better than me, better than Bruce, better than Dick or Tim, better than anyone. I believe in you, little brother. Please believe in yourself." A look of confusion and horror painted itself across Damien's face as Jason stopped talking, a racking cough flashing his frame and spewing more blood onto the inside of his helmet. "Todd, what are you?" The roof blew in and Jason gritted his teeth. "Out of time. See you, kid," he rasped. Damien's yell faded as the teleporter activated, and Jason unloaded 4 bullets into the control panel, barely flinching as sparks showered across him. His last 4 bullets, he thought. Not that they would have mattered anymore. "And you call me a monster," Clark said, his voice regal as he descended. He was pristine in blue and red, the master control device sitting on his temples like the crown of Sumerian king. Jason coughed again, more blood filling his mouth, and reached into his jacket one last time. Clark chuckled before he moved faster than Jason could see, pinning Jason to the teleporter with easy strength. Jason choked on the pain for a moment, just a moment before he shut it out. Clark reached up, fingers stronger than steel peeling away Jason's helmet and throwing it over his shoulder. "Why wouldn't you join me, Jason? You know that criminals shouldn't be allowed to live. If you had only done the right thing, Bruce your father would still be alive. You could have a place in my utopia, Jason, if only you had done the right thing." Jason bared bloody teeth, a snarl of useless defiance. "I've already done the right thing, Clark." Superman chuckled again, the gleam of madness frighteningly clear in his crystal blue eyes. "What was it you said once, Jason? You can't fight crime without cracking a few skulls. Doesn't that make you just another hypocrite?" Jason spat blood in the perfectly chiseled face, earning nothing more than a roll of the eyes. "The regime cracked more than a few skulls, Clark. But that's gonna end." "I've heard that before, Jason." "Sure you have. But not from me." Jason slipped his hand out of his jacket, lifting it up. Clark glanced at it, blue eyes narrowing and hardening. "A dead man's switch, Jason. I expected better. I can be in orbit before those explosives ever go off." Jason laughed harshly, coughing whole way through. More blood spewed across Superman's chest, red even darker than the symbol on his chest. "You want to know what made Bruce a better hero than you ever were, Clark? He knew his own mortality." Jason grunted as Superman lifted him from his feet, jacket sliding slightly. Jason's left hand slid into his sleeve, grasping the weapon hidden there. Superman looked at him like an exterminator might view an insect, no sign of humanity there. Only the insanity that he had barely hidden since his wife and child had been murdered. "And I suppose you'll be the one to remind me of my mortality, Jason. You'll be the one to do what is needed and put the tyrant down. I wonder when I was defeated and imprisoned, did you argue that I should be executed, like a rabid dog?" Jason let his chin slump onto his chest, feeling the blood running out of him. He wasn't much longer for this world, he knew, but he'd never let an enemy get the last word in his life. Not unless he was literally unconscious. Behind him he felt the dimensional teleporter hum, energy causing the hairs to rise on the back of his neck. That could be bad, but he was a little beyond caring. "Yeah, Clark, I did. Looks like I was right, huh? Shame that I'll never get to tell Bruce that. Superman snorted. Tell him in the afterlife. Jason coughed, more blood drooling down his chin, his vision swing. I doubt we'll be in the same place. But you and me, Clark, you and me, maybe we'll see each other. Superman raised an eyebrow and drew back a fist, slowly. He wanted to make this last, the bastard, and Jason marked that down as the final straw. This man, this monster wasn't the hero Jason had once admired, and he never would be again. Any last words, Hood? Yeah, why did you assume Batman was the only one with kryptonite? Jason was only halfway through his sentence when the punch dagger in his left fist slammed into Superman's ribs and pierced his flesh, a savage twist of the blade snapping the mineral off, burying it deep into flesh. Superman dropped Jason, pain ripping distantly through his injuries as Clark staggered. What? Old kryptonite, Clark. Removes your powers. Wouldn't be permanent, but... Jason gave him a bloody, dying, triumphant smirk. Think you can still outrun the explosion? Jason would give Clark this, he was still fast. Superman was almost through the vault door as Jason's finger came off the button, the dimensional teleporter activating behind him. I'll see you in hell, Clark, Jason whispered, his eyes going blank and body keeling over a moment before the flames of the explosion carried him to whatever afterlife awaited, consuming the vault before the dimensional transporter could fully activate. Jason Todd, Red Hood, died in bittersweet victory. An uncountable number of dimensions away, in another multiverse entirely, Izuku Midoriya fell over as a stream of information poured into his mind. Izuku groaned aloud as he opened his eyes, a headache pulsing through his skull. He blinked, fuzzily registering the concrete under his hands, and pushed himself up. The roof's surface was gritty against his skin, and his left hand peeled stickily away, stinging. He turned his hand over and blinked at it bloody, but just a scrape. He wiped his hand against his trousers, wincing at the sting of cloth against raked raw flesh. His notebook had fallen a few feet away and he wandered across, moving sluggishly. He was tired, but he wasn't sure why. Also, I passed out and I don't know why, he said aloud. A moment later he staggered, almost losing his balance as his mind choked, almost, twisting horribly. His vision spun and he blinked hard. But the dimensional transporter. What is that? He took 2 more wavering steps and sank down, onto his knees, tears streaming from his eyes. Oh God, Bruce, I didn't want to, I didn't. Izuku bent over, fingers clawing at his chest, trying to scrape out the agony there, fingers curling and dragging at his shirt and blazer, clenching the material in his fists until they ached, frame racked with sobs. He wept for several minutes, overcome by an anguish that he couldn't explain, no matter how much he understood it, tears rolling down his cheeks and dripping fat from his chin. He spent almost 5 minutes there, curled over, before his tears dried and the shaking stopped, unhooking his fingers from his clothes with an effort. He kept his eyes clenched shut, thinking. Is this a quirk? But nobody has and I haven't seen anyone, so no, it's something else. Izuku slowly hauled himself to his feet, pulling a tissue from a pocket and wiping at his face with it. Memories hovered at the corner of his mind, at the tip of his tongue. Somehow he knew that they would explain what he was feeling, but he couldn't focus on them. They were like smoke in the air, like oil on water, ethereal. Drifting away. All he had was one memory. The dimensional transporter and an explosion. It didn't function correctly. The explosion. So it transported Izuku didn't follow that train of thought any longer, wiping his nose one last time, and picking himself up to limp over to his notebook. He must have dropped it when he fell. It was in a sorry state. Burned, waterlogged and now hurled across concrete. He wiped at it, sighing softly as a page fell out. He would have to rewrite it, he thought, walking slowly back to his bag and tucking the notebook away. He checked his phone for the time. He still had a few hours before his mom got back from work. He'd be home in plenty of time, even with spending half an hour unconscious on his school rooftop. He looked down, sighing at the dirt on his clothes. Great. What a great day. Grumbling softly to himself, he walked off the roof, heading back into the school building and slinging his bag over his back with a wince. His left hand still stung, the scrape smarting, but he would clean it when he got home. At least the school wasn't locked for another few hours. He walked through the corridors, careful to avoid the places that he knew were regularly used by teacher and caretakers. He didn't really want to have to answer any awkward questions. Not that they're likely to ask any, he mumbled. They didn't give a shit when Bakugo threw my notebook out the window. He stumbled a moment after saying that, catching himself on the wall and suddenly short of breath. Bakugo, I haven't called him that since we were. He's always been Kakin. The memories. The memories must be doing something to him. He needed to talk to someone, but does it really hurt? He whispered, eyes stinging with fresh tears. Would he even care? Izuku leaned against the wall for a minute, waiting until his breath had come back and sniffling slightly. No, No, he wouldn't talk to anyone. They already thought he was pathetic, there was no need to make everyone think he was mad as well. He pushed off the wall, staggering slightly, and kept walking. The pain was fading a little, the ache leaving him, but there was still a tiredness in his bones. He just wanted to get home and sleep, that was all. Just sleep, and hope that tomorrow was a better day. Christ, that sounded trite, even in his head. Izuku stumbled as he pushed through the front door and out of the school, thrown by a thought that wasn't quite his. Or it was his, but it sounded different, almost. Rougher. Harsher. More cynical. Actually, it was quite worrying. Except he wasn't really worried. Maybe I have gone crazy, Izuku whispered to himself, laughing a hysterical little giggle. He'd hoped that going insane would be more fun, but apparently not. Izuku bent over, fingers on his left hand clutching at the straps of his backpack, bending over at the waist as another memory invaded his consciousness. Helmet tied around his head, jacket heavy on his shoulders. Teeth bared and the rage snarling and clawing at his soul, the words echoing in his head. Which hurts more, forehand or backhand? Izuku coughed, spluttering on the thickness that coated his tongue before it cleared and he could straighten. The world looked a little clearer, memories not crowding so much, but whoever those memories had belonged to, Izuku shook his head and hurried on. He could have a breakdown once he was safely at home. Izuku knew his way by heart, which was good, because as he walked his vision flickered, the familiar buildings of his home city becoming dark and gothic, rain lashing around him and drumming on his leather jacket. His leather? He wasn't wearing a jacket, was he? Izuku reached up and pinched at his shoulder, feeling only the cloth of his school blazer. No leather. That's a memory, even if it was an intrusive one. The dark buildings were far too familiar. He'd never seen them in his life, so why did they feel so comfortable? Izuku hurried on, so lost in thought that he barely paid any attention to where his feet took him, just enough to prevent him from tripping and falling. He didn't notice that he'd walked down an alleyway and into a mugging until a hand grabbed him by the collar and rammed him against a wall. The impact was like a shock of cold water, rushing through his system and clearing the fog away in an instant. Izuku turned wide eyes onto the man who had him by the collar, absently noting the odd structure of his eyebrows, some sort of porcupine quirk, maybe, expressed in his hair. Oh. The man also had a knife, and he was waving it quite close to Izuku's face. And a few feet away there was another man, holding a woman in a very similar position. Something in Izuku went cold and hard. The man holding him moved his knife hand to point at his friend, and Izuku snapped. Maybe it was his own anger. Maybe it was the memories. In all fairness, the moves he made were definitely from the memories. Izuku didn't have skills like that. Izuku brought his right hand snapping up, catching the man across the bridge of the nose. The man's head snapped back, eyes snapping shut with the pain, the knife hand coming back in a clumsy swipe, and Izuku grabbed his wrist with both hands, and drove a knee into the mugger's groin. The grip on his collar fell away as the man doubled over and Izuku let him fall, tucked a hand into his pocket to wrap it in a tissue and ducked down, snatching an empty beer bottle off the ground. He threw it with an accuracy that he'd never possessed, hitting the other mugger in the temple, and sending him to the ground. The woman screamed and bolted, and Izuku jerked away, breath rasping, mind torn between helping the unconscious man and making an example. He yelped as the mugger who had grabbed him swung blindly at his feet, jumping away. He saw the man reaching for his knife, and the sudden anger flared in him again. Izuku was no stranger to anger, but when it came to it he never acted, was too much of a coward too. Izuku's foot came down on the mugger's hand, 3 fingers breaking. The man shrieked like a child and Izuku jolted away, suddenly panicking. He had to get away, had to go before anyone came, before a hero came and saw, and Izuku jumped into the air, springing off a dumpster, grabbing a fire escape, and hauling himself onto it with one smooth motion, making his escape onto the rooftops. That was the plan, anyway. He made the jump, but almost fell from the fire escape, fingers screaming and muscles protesting loudly, the breath huffing out of him as he impacted it. He kicked wildly at the air, somehow managing to keep hold of the cold metal and drag himself up, taking the steps up to the roof 3 at a time, before falling to his knees on the roof and gasping for air. His mind still swirled and twisted with thoughts he shouldn't have left, he should have broken more bones, he should have paid more attention and not gotten caught, and Izuku doubled over, dry heaving as the headache came back, pounding at his skull. He couldn't stay there though, he was too close, Bruce would know who was Bruce, and he dragged himself back up and across the rooftops, sliding back down to ground level with all the grace of a duck with one leg, and hurrying home as quickly as he could. He made it in, locking the door behind him with a trembling hand and stumbling to his room. He dropped his bag on the floor, wincing at the thought it made. A note. Gotta tell mom not to wake me up, he mumbled. He wasn't sure why, but he just knew that it was important. He knocked half the pens and paper off his desk as he found a post-it note, scrawling a note with fuzzy eyes and shaking hand before sticking it to the outside of his door, something about being ill and going to bed early. It wasn't a lie, after all. Izuku was too tired to do more than drape his blazer over his desk chair before he collapsed onto his bed, face smushing into his pillow and sleep crawling over him, a thick and irresistible blanket settling over his limbs. With a soft, exhausted sigh, Izuku let his eyes close, and the tiredness claimed him. And in the darkness, he dreamed. Roughly 10 hours later, Izuku woke himself up by falling out of bed and landing on his face. He yelped and flailed, pens that had fallen on the floor jabbing at him, and heard a mom call out from the kitchen, concerned. He rolled over and flipped back to his feet in a single movement, sucking in a breath as the muscles in his stomach reminded him that no, he wasn't really capable of that. His mom knocked on his door and he waved his hands around. "I am fine, Mom. Just fell out of bed." At least it was a Saturday. Maybe things were looking up after all and his headache was gone. He didn't think that the memories were going to stop, but oh. Yeah. The memories. Izuku pulled off his shirt, wincing at the smell of sweat that clung to it. He needed a shower. "You're distracting yourself," he whispered. "It's a bad habit." What would Bruce think? Izuku shuddered, arms wrapping around himself, as though he could stave off the chills that racked his frame. He'd only gotten the most basic of memories, the Cliff Notes version of Jason Todd, but apparently it was enough that he still referenced Batman. The dimensional teleporter broke down, but that can't have been something else Luther made, something in the vault. All of the memories, but I can't remember them, a failsafe. But those muggers, I knew how to, so more than memories. Skills. I need to test it. I need data. I need. Izuku was cut off by the growl of his empty stomach, blinking down at his torso. "I need to get a shower and some breakfast before I do anything else," he concluded softly, smiling slightly. He finished dressing and headed out of his room, smiling at his mom when he saw her in the kitchen. "Hey, Mom," he said, eyes watering. He never thought that he'd feel wistfulness for something he'd always known, but apparently it could happen. He hugged her, sniffling slightly, and she pulled away with concern on her face. "Izuku? Are you alright, honey? I saw your note, but you were asleep when I checked." Izuku rubbed a hand across his eyes, smiling. "Yeah, I'm okay, Mom. Just a bug or something. I was really tired when I got home from school." His mom sized him up for a moment before she nodded, smiling. "I'm glad you're feeling better, Izuku." "Thanks, Mom." The bowl of cereal All Might branded Mighty Oz, which made Izuku wonder if Cheerios were still around. What were Cheerios? And a quick shower later, Izuku felt even more human and retired to his room. He picked up his pens, putting them back on his desk, and sat with his charred and battered notebook open in front of him, toying nervously with a pencil. Normally his thoughts flowed easily to the page, but these ones Red Hood might be better left undocumented. Izuku tapped nervously, the quick rhythm of the pencil against his desk, clicking along with his racing thoughts. His notebook was ruined, he sadly noted. Needed to be replaced. And since he was going to replace it anyway, might as well do it now. Izuku rummaged through the desk drawers, finding a fresh notebook, and labeling it in careful, neat script. Hero Analysis for the Future, Volume 14. "That'll do," he murmured, letting the soft mumble of his voice soothe him alongside the scratch of pencil lead on paper. "First entry, Mount Lady. New hero, don't know what school she attended. Quirk allows her to increase size, wonder if she only has one size or if she can adjust it. Second would be more useful, can't expect it, though. Saw her enter with a flying kick, probably trained in combat. Costume was covers all of her, but its tight uses her sex appeal, maybe. Common in newer heroes. Press attention helps, but thin line between attention and scandal, normal size, wonder how her damage resistance works. Is she tougher when larger? How quickly can she grow? Is she bulletproof? Does her larger size have more resistance due to quirk, or just due to relative thickness of skin? If she was hit by gas in her normal state, would effects carry over too? There was a rippling, rustling noise behind him, and Izuku jolted, spinning on his chair. His hand snapped out without even thinking and the pencil whipped across the room, striking dead center on the poster that had fallen from the wall and pinning it in place. Izuku let out a barely muffled yelp and jerked backwards, toppling off his chair and rolling as he hit the ground, hard hammering. Izuku clenched his fists, gritting his teeth as adrenaline surged through him, staying crouched and drawing carefully measured breaths through his nose, forcing himself to calm down. He stayed crouched like that for several minutes, breathing slowly and carefully until his heart rate had returned to normal. Okay. That wasn't great. He wasn't normally anything near to that twitchy. Memories and possible PTSD. "Great job, Jason," he whispered, carefully putting a hand on his chair and using it to help him stand. Of all the things he could have inherited, it couldn't have been weight. Izuku's train of thought wandered as his eyes fell upon the pencil, pinning the poster to the wall. It had gone directly through the center of All Might's eyeline, which wasn't great, but I'm pretty sure I couldn't throw a pencil like that before, he mumbled. The thought was there, unbidden, whispering softly. He couldn't, but Jason Todd could. Izuku slowly rose to his feet, thoughts tumbling through his mind, scattering across each other. If he could throw like that, if the memories had come with skills, then. Izuku took a deep breath, closing his eyes and trying to remember. What had Bruce taught him? How had a memory drifted across his mind? Stood on a rooftop, helmet discarded to leave his face open to the air, exchanging desperate blows with Batman, the style still rough, and yet it was still there. Izuku opened his eyes, arms moving in swift motions, perfectly mimicking the motions, flowing through movements that he'd never practiced. His form was sloppy, he knew that, unrefined, poorly adapted for his shorter and slimmer frame, but it was there. It was there, skill eyeing at his fingertips, and he let out a breathless laugh and spun around in excitement, almost knocking his pens off the desk again. Maybe I should try this somewhere else, he conceded, walking over to his wall and pulling the pencil free. It had only sunk a short way into the plaster, but still. Accurate. He carefully pinned the poster back in place, hoping that no one would notice the hole now torn in it. Nobody really came in here. It would be fine. Izuku started to tap again, drumming the pencil against his hand in thought. There was a question, he knew, a question that had haunted him all his life, or ever since he was 4, at least. In a world where the majority of people had a quirk, had some sort of superpower, he'd always asked if someone without could do the same. Could someone quirkless, someone like him, become a hero? Jason Todd had been a hero, arguably. Nightwing. Batman. Green Arrow. They'd all been heroes, but not here. Not in this world. But Izuku knew that in 10 months' time the prestigious Hero High School, UA, would be taking on a fresh crop of students. If he wanted an answer to his question, he had 10 months to train and prepare. He had 10 months to 10 months wasn't very long. Izuku fell down onto his bed, enthusiasm briefly blunted. He wasn't even sure what the entrance exam to UA involved, all he knew was that there was one. He tapped the pencil against his leg jumping in time to the beat as he thought. Need to find that out. And then if I need to I can. Don't have funds like Bruce, but Jason could build some stuff. Grappling hook shouldn't be hard, and if I can't take it in. If he couldn't take his gear into the exam, then he might be in trouble. Also, it was kind of messed up, because half the heroes in existence used some sort of support gear, but he'd take it as it came. And to know his next move, he needed to find out about the entrance exam. Izuku swung off his bed again, practically jumping onto his laptop. The internet would have the answers he needed. The internet didn't let people down. The internet was a giving, if ruthless god. Maybe he should start a cult. Could be fun. But afterwards. Or if he didn't get into UA. Not until then. The internet was in a giving mood today, and offered him its bounty with only slight argument. He thought about it before, of course, practically every kid did if he guessed right, but it wasn't completely easy. Someone was deleting data, maybe. But thousands of kids took the exam every year, and it probably wasn't worth getting rid of all of the mentions of their exam. Someone had done a good job, though. Izuku had to put the pieces together, from the complaints about their quirks being useless in the exam, someone who, from their earlier posts, could cause momentary blindness in any person who met their eyes, to boasts about being able to use highly destructive quirks. Add to that the frequent use of robots in the sports festivals that UA liked to hold, and the answer was clear enough. Combat with robots, Izuku concluded, leaning back in his chair, good at picking out the people who have powerful quirks, as well as people who can adapt properly to weaker ones. Not a bad idea. Inherently biased, but I doubt UA is about to throw away everybody who doesn't have a combat quirk, so robots must be easy to take down. I wonder if they use the same ones for the sports festival. Maybe I should take a closer look. He couldn't take any gear with him, which sucked but made sense. Someone with a technology quirk could take in a fully armored war suit and demolish the whole place. Then again, was that any less fair than Kakin being able to make explosions from his hands? Izuku didn't think so. Maybe he was biased, though, on account of he'd want to be the person in the suit. The Mark 11 armor, now that would be an experience. Shame that Clark had destroyed it before it had ever been properly used. Sad thoughts like that aside, if Izuku wanted to have a chance at anything he needed to get serious. Analysis was cute and all, but if he wanted to kill robots with his bare hands, and dear God did he want to kill robots with his bare hands, he'd need more muscle than, say, the average noodle. Given that right now he had less muscle than the average noodle, he'd better get to it. At least he had 10 months, right? And maybe, just for fun, he could do a bit of gadgeteering. There was that beach turned scrap heap nearby, Dagaba he thought it was called, that might be a good place to scavenge something. And maybe there he could get some privacy and finally vent the scream of panic about finding himself host to the skills and memories of a vigilante who toed the line of villain that had been building since he woke up that morning. Yeah, that would be a good idea. There were a lot of things that Izuku was ashamed of. His inability to punch Kakin in the goddamn face even when the other boy deserved it. His tendency to mutter and mumble whenever he did any sort of deep thinking. Deep down, even that he was quirkless. That he was a burden. Yes, Izuku had a lot of things he was ashamed of. A therapist would have a field day. However, that wasn't the point. Izuku Midoriya wasn't ashamed to say that once he got some privacy he screamed like a girl and collapsed onto the sand. He just needed a minute. Maybe two. Just a little bit of time to process that he might actually be able to become a hero. It might not be an unattainable dream that he clung to in order to get through the drudgery of every day. So he was a little overwhelmed. That said, he could have done without his landing and scream somehow dislodging a fridge from the top of a junk pile. It almost landed on him, in fact, and only the sort of roll that left his arms throbbing from the effort got him out of the way. He stood up, brushed the dirt off himself, looked around at the absolute mess of garbage all over the beach, and said the first thing that came into his head. It's like being back in fucking Gotham. He clapped his hands over his mouth a second later, absolutely mortified. That had been pure Jason Todd, even his accent had changed a fraction. That was disconcerting. Memories have an actual effect, blending with mine, he muttered aloud, the words muffled through his fingers, but they were only for him anyway, it didn't matter. If I'm not careful I might react like Jason would to something. That could be a problem if I lose it near criminals like last night. Jason had gotten over killing every petty criminal he came across, but maiming them was still possible. Yeah. He'd need to keep an eye on that. Taking a baseball bat to the knees of half the muggers he came across might dissuade people from crime, but it wasn't exactly heroic. Easier to work within the system, at least at first. See how it goes, move from there, get the good gear, good suppliers, know your villains. Though Jason would probably have never admitted it, Izuku knew that he wouldn't have made it far without his time as Robin. Even the Cliff Notes version of Jason's life was enough to see that. Izuku sighed and sat down on the fridge, carefully looking over it first. Getting tetanus from a rusty nail would just be the punchline of the cosmic joke that his life had been so far. Looked like he'd be avoiding that for the moment though. In theory I shouldn't bother with the gear. I wouldn't be able to use it in the exam. But if I pass, then I'll need to keep putting on a good show. UA is supposed to have high standards, so better to practice with some of the gear I'm going to use. And it could be good exercise. And if I don't get into UA, then... Izuku didn't finish that thought, staying on the fridge and looking around. Part of him wanted to get started now, but the part of him that was, well, sensible decided against it. Better to come back with old clothes, gloves, that sort of thing. Preferably avoid getting tetanus. Izuku sighed, bringing his legs up and scooting around on the fridge to look towards the sea. It was just about visible, waves lapping endlessly against a bulwark of discarded items. Junk, left behind by society, abandoned and unloved. Izuku bit his lip, clenching his fist until he felt his fingernails biting into skin. He hated metaphors that applied to him. Full grappling harness, test 4. Hope the line doesn't give this time. Test 3 almost had me convinced to try a full test. Izuku mumbled into the small recorder that he had found in a pile of junk inside a broken microwave, if you would believe it, and fixed up. It wasn't amazing, but it was more convenient than a notepad. He sighed, turning a baleful eye on the gadget in his hand, a roughly put together mechanism that could fire the grappling dart at a frankly pathetic speed. It wasn't something that he would like to be flinging himself around the city on, but it would be good enough as proof of concept. Or it would be if it worked. The harness that wrapped around his torso to carry his body weight had stayed intact on the 7th iteration, but 3 months of work had yet to produce decent results with the actual grappling gun. At least he'd had the sense to test it by trying to latch onto a broken fridge and drag it to him, rather than leaping off a roof and hoping it worked. Given that the harness had fallen into 6 different pieces upon firing the gun in his first test, that wouldn't have gone well. Standard test, firing into the fridge and resisting retraction. Issues in last test, penetration is poor due to equipment quality. Wire snapped as soon as resistance was offered. That had been particularly unpleasant. Izuku still had a red mark on his forearm from the whipping impact of the wire. He should probably have invested in some sort of protective gear, but he could get that in his hero costume. No. He would get that in his hero costume. Positive thoughts. Positive thoughts, he mumbled, carefully aiming the grapple and squeezing the trigger. The gun itself was more like a block of metal than a gun, shaped to wrap around his fingers not unlike a set of knuckle dusters, and the trigger lay in his palm. The mechanism gave under his grip, and the dart whipped away, propelled by a small gas canister that was attached to the bottom of the gun. It wasn't comfortable and it wasn't safe, exactly, but it was the best he could do. The dart flashed across the open space between Izuku and the fridge, sinking into the thin metal with a reassuringly solid clunk, and he nodded. Alright. Dart deployment successful. Now for the retraction test. He reached back with his left hand, pressing a button that sat on the harness near to his hip. The small crank located near the small of his back started up, and Izuku braced himself in the sand, reaching up to wrap his left hand around his right. Better grip. In theory, the fridge should be dragged towards him or he towards the fridge, since it weighed more. In theory. In practice, the last 4 tests had included 1 failure to fire, 1 failure to penetrate the metal, and the disastrous wire breakage. Just a bad time overall, really. Maybe all the junk lying around here really did deserve to be thrown out. Izuku lifted his arm as the wire began to take the weight, keeping a hold on the gun. The wire ran to the harness around his torso too, but keeping a hold on the grapple gun let him better control the direction of the pull. He grunted as the harness tightened, pulling around his torso not that well balanced, but it would have to do. If he remembered rightly, Bruce hadn't needed a harness anymore, but Izuku didn't have the resources to build a high-strength wire and powerful motor into a bat-shaped device roughly the size of his hand. In all fairness, he also wasn't capable of lifting his whole body weight off the ground with just one hand. Maybe in the future. The winch behind him whirred and creaked and Izuku gritted his teeth, digging his feet into the sand and resisting the pull. The fridge moved an inch. Izuku was just opening his mouth to whoop in triumph when the ancient hinges on the fridge finally gave way and the door came off. Back. Izuku toppled over backwards, yelping as he hit the sand, losing his grip on the grapple. He was dragged a few inches before he dug into the sound, grit and sand sticking and getting under his clothes, the fridge door being dragged towards him much faster than before. Luckily the winch wasn't powerful enough to turn the door into a missile, but still. That was embarrassing, he grumbled, picking himself up and tipping his head towards the recorder attached to his jacket, but at least test 4, functional success. Winch worked but the fridge door came off, not sure if dart barbs or winch would have failed first. They're both due for it might be time for a full field test, but I don't really want to risk it. Plus the dart isn't Bruce had that smart grapple, but maybe adhesive would be better. Lexkerp was working on a variable adhesive before Luther got killed, maybe I could recreate that, but I'd need a whole app for that. Izuku walked over to the fridge and turned the door over, carefully pushing the barbs back into the grappling dart and extracting it from the metal. It had taken almost 3 weeks to put together a set of barbs that would move enough to only lock in place after going through the metal, but it was functionally useless in a city environment, even assuming they didn't fail. Wouldn't punch through brick after all. Personally he thought it was a bit weird anyway, to rely on the dart going into brick and sticking. Property damage. How had Bruce even managed it? Probably all that Wayne Industries tech that was too expensive for the public. Pockets that never empty would be real nice here, Izuku muttered, lifting the fridge door and moving it out of the way. He built up a little bit since inheriting Red Hood's memories, but not that much. He was only 15, after all. He managed to remember most of the training plan that Batman had devised for his Robins, but it had needed to be downgraded to account for not being a millionaire. Still, he had 7 months left. Should be enough. So long as the robots in the exam weren't too hard to destroy, but he was fairly sure that one of the sports festivals about 6 years ago had used them. He thought he tracked down a video of it, so he had that to look forward to when he got home. He had a fresh notebook ready to write in and everything. But before that temporary nirvana could be reached, he had a few more things to do. There were whole sections of the beach that he hadn't ventured into in his search for raw materials, and he was fairly sure that one of them contained a lot of electronic goods, like a great deal. A bounty. And if he was right, then he might be able to build a pair of stun knuckles. He'd only half remembered the design. It had taken a lot of research to get to something that he thought would work, but the only way to find out was to build and test them. And there was no time like the present. Could get lost on here easily, Izuku mumbled, still not sure how it got this bad. As he spoke he reached into an inside pocket of his hoodie and pulled out a much folded piece of paper, opening it up. There was a hand-drawn map on it, made in pencil and much erased and remade, as he tried to work out exactly where everything was on the beach. There was a whole section that was mostly abandoned cars. Cars. On a beach. Izuku still couldn't understand how getting a car halfway down a beach was easier than disposing of them properly. Still, they provided a lot of the materials for his grapple harness, since apparently people were happy to just leave all the engines inside, so he wasn't complaining too much. If I'm right, the place I'm looking for should be alright. It looked like there was a lot of TVs and stuff there when I looked over the beach with binoculars, so I hope I'm right. would be a waste of time otherwise. He was pretty sure it wouldn't be a waste of time. Maybe less useful than he hoped, depending on the quality of the materials he could find, but this whole place was a wonderland. All sorts of free things, so long as you didn't mind the risk of tetanus. Something good from bad, Izuku whispered, climbing over an abandoned wardrobe and squeezing down a narrow path. It was a little risky, but only a little. The stacks of crap here were older, more settled. Less likely to topple over. Really though, there's gotta be a scrapyard closer than this. Who takes the effort to climb up a mound of kitchen appliances and put a sink at the top? Unless it's people with a strength-enhancing quirk who have just thrown it. He paused to take a breath, staring over what he could see of the beach, and being careful not to inhale too deeply. The smell wasn't too bad here, but sometimes it got awful. Dead animals, probably. You know, Izuku, you really need to make some friends. Talking to yourself all the time can't be healthy, he said quietly, sniffing, just a shame that it's too late for that. 11 years too late, probably. Maybe if he'd had a really good friend before he was diagnosed quirkless they would have stuck with him. Then again, he'd always thought that Kakin would be the best friend he'd ever have, and look where that got him. If you really want to be a hero, Izuku mimicked, take a swan dive off the roof, and hope you get a quirk in the next life. His fingers closed, gloves preventing his fingernails from lacerating his skin, teeth gritting as the familiar acid warmth of rage spread up his chest. Izuku hadn't really been that much of an angry person before Jason. Or at least he'd never noticed it. Jason thought existed in a permanent state of smoldering anger, ever present even at the best of times. Really, it was a wonder that he hadn't started killing people earlier. Izuku hadn't inherited all of it, but there were times, especially when Kakin was being more of a dick than usual, that he found his thoughts taking a darker turn. Kakin was tough, but a blow to the back of the head in a back alley. Izuku scrunched his eyes shut and shook his head, forcefully dispelling the image. Fuck that guy, he whispered, his accent harsher than normal as some of Jason bled through. I'll be a hero whether he likes it or not. Not that it would make much of a difference to Kakin. Bastard had an ego the size of a planet. But it would definitely make Izuku happier. And if he was mostly driven by spite at this point, what of it? If he was going to drag someone out of a burning building, it hardly made a difference whether he did it out of altruism or just to prove someone wrong. Izuku sighed and started off again, picking his way through the ruins of a beautiful thing. 7 months to go. Some days, all Izuku wanted was to put a bullet through Katsuki Bakugo's big goddamn mouth. One of Red Hood's specials, the homemade bullets for big threats. One shot. It wouldn't even hurt. Some days, he'd trade every chance at a future in heroics just to get Bakugo to be quiet. Some days, Izuku found it hard to keep his mouth shut. But no. Not yet. He'd have to grit his teeth and bear the boasting, the teasing, and one day, when he was a hero, he'd catch Kakin in a back alley and knock his teeth out. Either that or he'd be the one member of the Batman family to actually get over his issues. Was it weird to think of himself as part of the Batman family? Probably, yeah, but he couldn't help it. Too much Jason. Either way, right now it didn't matter. Their teacher, a man possessed of a singular inability to keep his goddamn mouth shut, had once again brought up future prospects. When he'd done this 7 months ago, Izuku had been told to jump off a roof. He was kind of hoping that didn't happen again. Last time he'd been angry, but cowed by a flashy show of Bakugo's quirk. This time, with all that excess rage from Jason, well, there was a decent chance that Kakin would end up with a broken nose, and fighting always looked bad on a high school application. Idly Izuku wondered if it might be worth it to sabotage Kakin. Could be fun to watch him snap under pressure, but there was a good chance that it just wouldn't happen. Kakin wasn't stupid. Izuku's life would have been a lot simpler if he was. But no. Had to get a clever childhood friend turned bully. Still, it could be worse. Izuku kept a note of every time he dreamed of being tied to a chair, beaten to within an inch of his life with a crowbar. The tally was currently at 34. Christ, he needed therapy or some medication. He'd probably prefer the second. He could sneak some to Kakin, maybe it would get him to calm down. Probably better than the other method of calming him down that came to mind, anyway. Izuku forced the thought of beating Kakin with a crowbar out of his head, and went back to paying attention to what his old friend was shrieking about. Oh, right. This was the Katsuki Bakugo I'm going to be the greatest hero, and you're only part of my backstory speech, version 3. There was a lot of cursing and a definite lack of specific names, but Izuku wasn't sure that Bakugo ever remembered names. He was just special that way. And by special Izuku did, in fact, mean that Bakugo was a raging dickhead. And that's why you're nothing but extras in my story. You all hear me? Goddamn, how long could one person go on for? He'd been talking for almost 10 minutes. Izuku sighed, fully prepared to space out as Kakin continued to rant, the useless teacher doing absolutely nothing to shut him up. He was rudely awakened from his pleasant daydream when a hand slammed onto the desk in front of him, fire bursting from under the palm and licking around the fingers. The rush of hot air washed over his face, and Izuku blinked, looking up and meeting glaring crimson eyes. "Are you listening to me, Deku?" Bakugo asked, his harsh voice dropping to a low rasp. Izuku met his gaze without blinking, focusing mostly on not ramming his fingers into Kaken's eyes, and ripping that look off of his face. He really needed to get a handle on this temper he'd inherited, or he'd lose it at the worst possible time. Still, he knew that Bakugo wanted an answer. He was that kind of person. Sometimes you could head him off by just agreeing with him, nudge him back into boasting about himself. "Sorry, Kaken. I can only hear so many rants about how insignificant this place is before they all sound the same." Alright, he hadn't meant to say that. On the plus side, it seemed to strike Kaken dumb so silver linings. Nope, he was gonna get angrier. Alright. Best way to neutralize Katsuki Kaken Bakugo if it came to it. Quirk was explosion, sweated nitroglycerin or a chemical compound very similar, because the explosions didn't really act like high explosives, but that didn't matter and could ignite it at will. Used his palms. Izuku still wasn't sure if Kaken could only ignite blasts from his hands, but that was all he'd seen. Like to attack directly, utilizing talent for hand-to-hand combat and potent quirk. Best way to stop him: redirect the blast. Blind whip, blow to nose, cause eyes to shut, shove instinctive attack away, kick the desk into his midriff, and kick him unconscious, before Kaken knew what was going on. Go on the run for assault. Find a gun and a red helmet, leather jacket. Start killing criminals. Publish an inflammatory manifesto online. Die in a badly thought out shootout with police. Shit, he had his whole career as a failed revolutionary planned out. It needed work, especially the ending, but sometimes life was like that. Izuku kept his eyes on Bakugo and mentally gritted his teeth to take whatever the other boy was about to dish out. The bell rang and Izuku grabbed his bag and bolted before Kaken even realized something had happened. He had always been quick, and he made good use of it, sliding through the classroom door and sprinting down the corridor. The window at the end of the corridor was always open, and Parker's skills don't fail me now. Izuku slid through the window, descending the building at an alarming rate via the use of tiny handholds in the brick and concrete facing. God, he was glad that he practiced this. He'd be back at the beach before Kaken even cleared the school. Alright, maybe today was an okay day after all. 3 months left until the exam. The shock knuckles were an unmitigated success. Really, Izuku could cry over the fact that he couldn't take them into the entrance exam and demonstrate his genius to the world. In fact, he did cry over that. He was crying over it right now, because they were a thing of absolute beauty, and he didn't regret building them for an instant. A little bulky, but they fitted over his hands much like the grapple gun, the battery pack sitting in his palm to grip, and 5 slightly spiked points fitting perfectly over his knuckles. With this, every punch he delivered would, in addition to having the extra force that knuckle dusters always applied, send a jolt of electricity into his target. There wasn't very much he tested it on himself, because he never really had a sense of self-preservation, but it was enough to numb the direct area of the blow. Any sort of prolonged fight with these babies on, and anyone who didn't have a properly insulated costume was going to be feeling the effect. Izuku sniffed and wiped his eyes with a tissue, patting the gadget that sat on his desk. "You're a good gadget," he told it, "definitely my favorite." Izuku. Izuku, remaining his normal composed and dignified self, yelped and lurched sideways in his chair, arms flailing around his head and crashing onto his carpet. His mom yelped in exactly the same way, jumping in the air. "Izuku. I'm okay. I'm okay," he called, having somehow slid halfway under his bed in panic. He most certainly wasn't going for his grapple gun, no sir, and he definitely hadn't tested the impact dart to check that it could shatter his window and bury itself in the tree across the street. It has to be noted that since he'd inherited his memories, he'd become something of a liar, even to himself. Izuku wriggled out from under the bed and sat up, pushing a hank of black-green hair out of his eyes and blinking at his mom. "Mom? You surprised me." His mom waved her hands, a concerned look painted on her kind features, as he pulled himself to his feet. She immediately grabbed him, pulling at his jacket and brushing dust off his shoulders. Izuku reddened slightly but didn't protest as she fussed over him. It was nice. Familiar and comforting. Did you want something, Mom?" "Oh? No, I just wanted to check on you, Izuku. You've been quiet recently. Are you still going to try the UA entrance exam?" Well, at least she hadn't tried to beat around the bush. She let go of him and walked over to his desk, hands fluttering nervously around his gauntlets and the notepad. This was a different notepad, without any title. His own hero notepad, with a single sketch on the open page. Red Hood, in all his glory. Helmet, jacket, armor, little notes pointing out his grapple harness and his shock knuckles. It was something to remember when he was in class, something to dream about when his gadgets were refusing to work, something to aspire to, something to become. You? Yeah, Mom, I am. I want to all my life. I've asked if I can become a quirkless hero. Not number one, not the best, just a hero. Everybody's said that I can't, but I want to find out for myself, Mom. Oh, Izuku, she said softly, sniffling. She was a crier, Izuku Midoriya. It was where Izuku got it from. He sniffled quietly himself, mumbling about being an empathetic crier as she latched onto him, squeezing him tightly and sobbing. They got in a decent weep for a couple of minutes before they wound down, ending up with Izuku back on his chair and his mom on the bed, wiping her eyes on a tissue. Izuku smiled at her, still watery. Geez, Mom, there's no need to cry, he said, voice wobbly. She gave him a shaky smile. I just had seen you all grown up, honey. It's so, but I'm so worried, Izuku. You could get hurt. Izuku looked down, rubbing his hands together. I know, Mom, he said quietly. I don't want to get hurt, but I want this, Mom. I've always wanted this. I know, Izuku, she said, blinking tears away. I just worry. But you're really going to go to the exam. I hope you can make it, Izuku. She looked up, watery eyes meeting his, and smiled gently. I hope you can be a hero, Izuku. Izuku coughed, looking down and coughing at his eyes, tears soaking into his sleeve despite his smile. Thanks, Mom, he croaked. His mom nodded silently, shuffling her feet on the carpet. So what's that in your notebook? It's a bit different to your Mighty Boy jumpsuit design. Izuku pressed his hands over his face, mortified. Mom. I was 8. And it was very cute, she said, beaming, but this one looks very professional. Can you tell me about it? Izuku spun around on his chair a few times, hands still on his face and feet drawn off the floor, but secretly delighted to be able to ramble to an actual person about his designs. Yep. I thought about what I do and realized that, well, I can't really be a hero out in the daylight. Well, I can, but it wouldn't be best. Flashy quirks are too important for PR, and even if being quirkless would make me an interest piece for a while, I'd be sticking out. So, but anyway, being an underground hero is better. They usually work at night and off the streets. So I made a costume better for that. The vests, boots and gauntlets use a Kevlar composite. It's knife and bulletproof, so it'll help keep me safe without being too bulky. Long sleeves and cargo pants so I can carry stuff, and the grapple harness lets me move about easily. The shock knuckles will let me punch harder, and the helmet can have all sorts of things. It's a gas mask, a thermal visor, a well-protected communicator, head protection. It can do so much. One of the things Izuku loved most about his mom was how she could keep up with his rambling mumbles. She was nodding along with him, smiling indulgently, but there was a sort of relief in her eyes. Probably because he wasn't going to go out and punch things in a t-shirt, he thought. Her green eyes twinkled with mischief. And the leather jacket, Izuku. He dropped his head behind his arms, embarrassed again, and mumbled something. His mom laughed, soft and soothing. What was that, Izuku? She asked, obviously amused, and Izuku sighed. It's just for style, Mom. Her laughter rang through the house, and Izuku smiled. It was nice to see her happy. 1 week until the entrance exam. On the day of the entrance exam, Izuku Midoriya almost died before ever reaching UA. Okay, that was an exaggeration. He was on his way into the school when he caught his foot on a rock and stumbled, like an idiot, arms windmilling in an attempt to avoid planting his face into the concrete. He probably would have failed, to be honest, but he was an optimist at heart. Somehow. In the end, though, it hardly mattered. A hand touched him on the back, and his face first hobble turned into a mid-air spin. It was pretty fun, actually. Oh my gosh, are you alright? I thought you were going to fall. Sorry for using my quirk on you without warning. Izuku turned slowly, ending up upside down and blinking at his savior. She waved her hands around, bouncing slightly in her spot as he slowly rotated further. Oh, don't worry about it. I was gonna die anyway, so this is nicer. God damn it, Jason. Of all the times for Red Hood's voice to come out of Izuku's mouth. The girl laughed. Izuku retracted every bad thing he'd ever said about Jason. Oh, that's good. If you'll just let me. She reached across and turned him the right way up with alarmingly practiced ease, pointing his feet towards the ground before stepping back and pressing her fingers together. Release. The strange weightlessness vanished and Izuku landed on his feet, maintaining his balance through a great deal of practice in parkour, and maybe using his grapple harness on abandoned buildings, but he'd never admit that. His mom would kill him. Thanks, he said, a blush starting to creep across his cheeks because he'd never talked to before. And come on, Jason, give me that smoothness. And oh yeah, that was Dick, not Jason, but at least Jason had confidence. The girl waved her hands, beaming. Oh, it's no problem. It would have been bad luck to fall before the exam. Good luck, I'll see you inside. Izuku blinked as she positively sprinted off. What a nice girl, he absently thought as he followed, making his way through the school and following the signs, until he reached the hall where the paper portion of the exams were held. Well, this probably wouldn't be the hardest part of today. For once Izuku's tempting fate wasn't replied to with a kick in the face. The paper exam was tough, but not that hard, and he was pretty confident that he'd passed. After a half-hour break to get a drink and visit the bathroom, he retraced his steps, his heart squirming with nerves, as he walked through another set of doors and into something that he thought resembled a university lecture hall more than anything else. He found the whiteboard set up next to the door with a seating plan on it, locating his name and finding his seat. About halfway up, which wasn't too bad. Next to Kakin, which was terrible. Great. Well, he cheated death once today. Once more couldn't hurt. What are you doing here, fucking Deku? Kakin rasped at him. Izuku squeezed his fists close, forcing a smile onto his face. Nice to see you too, Kakin. Kakin growled, but he didn't make a scene. Not here. Too many unknowns, Izuku thought. Kakin was too smart to do anything without scoping out the situation, and getting thrown out of the UA exam for being a shithead would put a real crimp in his ambitions. Izuku took his seat, doing his best to relax into his seat and absolutely failing, limbs tense. He leaned back as best he could and concentrated on breathing, slow inhalations and exhalations as he waited. He didn't need to wait long. The auditorium doors burst open with an echoing slam. Half the attendees almost came out of their seats, probably most of the way to activating their quirks, and Izuku grinned. Well, it was supposed to be a grin. Probably looked more like a death rictus. Well, hello, little listeners. The announcer bellowed, projecting his voice throughout the auditorium as he sprang onto the podium. Izuku lost his grin as he quivered in barely repressed fanboy joy, clasping his hands over his mouth to hold in a shriek of excitement. Oh my god, it's the voice hero Present Mick. I love his radio show, all the teachers here are pro heroes, and it's so cool that. Izuku squeaked quietly, swallowing the rest of his rant and pressing his lips shut. Try not to draw attention. Also Bakugo might go absolutely off his nut if Izuku kept mumbling, and while seeing Bakugo getting thrown out for being a frothing lunatic might be incredibly cathartic, it would also probably involve bodily harm to Izuku, and he wanted to pass this thing. Can I get a yeah? Present Mick screamed. The silence that answered was absolutely resounding. Izuku throttled an inappropriate laugh, but Present Mick seemed completely unfazed. Alright. No reason to hold back here, let's get down to business. The UA practical exam. Once again, there were no cheers. Once again, Present Mick didn't care. The practical exam is very simple. You applicants. 1 replica city. 10 minutes. And a horde of killer robots. Goddamn, this man was loud. Then again, the dude had a quirk that gave him a loud as hell voice. Embracing that by being loud and proud and the punk rocker aesthetic was a real flex, as Jason had once heard Tim say. Good for Present Mick. Now then, Present Mick picked back up. All the deets are on your information cards, but I'll go over them anyway. You'll all go out to replica cities in the training grounds, and you'll have 10 minutes to destroy or disable. That's important, as many of the robots there as you can. There's 3 kinds of robots, worth 1, 2 or 3 points. The more points, the more dangerous, so let's not get overextended here. Oh, and no attacking other examinees. We don't roll with here at UA, you get me. Robots. Called it, Izuku thought, managing to keep his internal monologue internal for once. It was a good time, really. And if the robots were like the ones he'd seen used in the sports festival footage and the silhouettes on the wide screen behind Present Mick looked very similar, then they had weaknesses. Not obvious, but there were places where someone could reach through and yank the wiring out, and they were slow enough for it to be a feasible method of attack. Maybe he would be able to do this after all. Would be much easier with his grapple harness and a gun though. Pose up on a high building and start shooting. How many robots could he get then? Enough to give Bakugo an aneurysm, probably. What a cheery thought. Mick clapped his hands together, but was interrupted by an examinee standing up, a spotlight flicking onto him. Automatic, probably. Excuse me, sir, I have a question. Izuku had never heard something sound less like a question in his life. Present Mick pointed at him. Shoot, little listener. The examinee, who was about 6 feet tall and looked roughly as broad from where Izuku was standing, making Mick's epithet completely unsuitable, held up his information card. There are 4 types of robots on this information card, not 3. With all due respect, if this is an error then it is shameful. We are all exemplary students who have come here to earn a chance to attend a prestigious hero academy, and better standards should be expected. What a fucking square, Bakugo growled next to Izuku, who gave him a side-eyed glance. Bakugo didn't seem about to explode, though. Good. Izuku wasn't sure he'd get out of the blast zone in time. Mick beamed and held out 2 thumbs up. Alright, examinee number 7111, well spotted. The 4th villain type is worth 0 points. Think of it more as an obstacle than something to be defeated, you read me. There'll be one in every battle center, but there ain't no point in defeating it even if you can, so I wouldn't bother trying. The tall examinee 7111 was it bowed sharply. I see. Thank you, he declared, retaking his seat. Mick grinned toothily up at them. No problems, my dude. Alright then, kiddos, that's my part done, so let me lay some advice on you. The General Napoleon Bonaparte once said, a true hero is someone who overcomes life's misfortunes. Let's embody that here, Micah eyes, and here go beyond plus ultra. He would probably have gotten a better response to the UA motto in a graveyard, Izuku thought as they all started to shuffle up. Everyone was nervous, on edge, and why not? There was only the rest of their lives at stake. Sure, there were other hero schools, but UA had the prestige. If Izuku remembered rightly, something like 8 of the current top 10 ranked heroes had attended UA. All Might, the symbol of peace. Endeavor, relentlessly hard-working, most incidents resolved. And Best Jeanist, number 3, 8 times winner of the Best Jeanist Fashion Award. Yeah, Izuku didn't really get that last one. But it was cool anyway. But anyway. A 0-pointer, huh? That was interesting. Was it really there just to see who could stay on target and resist showing off, or was there something else behind it? Either way, all he could do was wait and see. He glanced down at his information card, noted the training ground he'd be sent to, and sneaked a peek at Kakkens in the crush. Different grounds. Probably to prevent people from the same school from working together, but in this case it just meant he wouldn't be dealing with an unstable lunatic with bomb hands. Silver linings, silver linings. The bus ride was short enough, and Izuku got off inside the crowd, avoiding attention as best as he could. The gate to the training ground was enormous. Was Bruce Wayne funding this place? Nah. Even Bruce wouldn't go so wild as to provide a whole fake city for people to trash. Seemed a bit excessive to Izuku, but he didn't have a powerful quirk to go wild with. He chewed on a knuckle to silence any mumbles as he strategized. Better to break away from the pack, they'll draw in the robots if they're moving together and causing a ruckus, so if I move away I can jump them one at a time. 10 minutes, don't know how many robots I need to take out, but hey, that guy has support gear, now I'm just insulted. Izuku let his mumbling trail off, swallowing it in an attempt to quiet his hammering heart. His blood fell cold with adrenaline, hands trembling with anticipation and chills running up his spine. He looked through the crowd in an attempt to distract himself, spotting the girl who had helped him earlier. She looked nervous, hand tapping at her mouth, so Izuku slid through the crowd. He could read people well enough to guess that she'd probably welcome some distraction, and he definitely would. Hey, he said, making sure to come into her line of sight before speaking. She beamed at him, white brown eyes crinkling at the corners, and brown hair bouncing as she nodded enthusiastically. Oh? Hey, it's you, the green boy from this morning. Well, he'd been called worse over his lifetime. You can call me that if you like, but my name's Izuku Midoriya. Thank you, Jason. Of all times for his confidence when talking to people to come through, it would be now. He would have really ruined his image if he'd been too tongue-tied to speak. The girl nodded. I'm Ichako Uraraka, nice to meet you. Izuku smiled. Nice to meet you. Nervous. Uraraka bounced a little, fingers fluttering around her mouth. Yeah. It's just so big, you know. Are you? Izuku looked around, smiling, before leaning in. I'm absolutely terrified, he told her, still smiling. She giggled and he leaned back, hands still tucked in his pockets. You'll do great, he told her, trying for the best pep talk he could manage. I've only known you for 5 minutes, and you stopped me from smearing myself on the pavement, so I think you're all good. She had a pretty adorable blush, really. Thank God for those memories. He'd probably be dead without them, but at least. Alright, you guys. President Mick hollered, standing on the gate, it's time to go, go. There was an instant where nobody knew what the hell to do, and then Mick opened his mouth again. There's no countdowns in real life, you're wasting time, so let's get moving. Izuku got moving. He sprinted through the gate with a pack of examinees in tow, hitting the main road through the city. There were already a swarm of robots there, 1-pointers with single wheels and 2 massive arms, and the insectal 2-pointers. The track 3-pointers were nowhere to be seen, but for now that was fine by him. Izuku met the first 1-pointer at a sprint, feinting right and then juking left, dodging a down-swinging claw and jumping onto the robot, ramming his right hand into the gap between its chest and long neck, and wrenching out a handful of wires. He jumped away as the robot went limp and collapsed, rolling to his feet. The rest had poured past, a whole smorgasbord of quirks being employed, and Izuku left them to it. The buildings were real, so he could go through there, and Izuku yelled as the wall gave way, a tracked and hulking three-pointer crashing through with murderous intent. Okay, this was pretty intense. Izuku ducked under a swing of a clawed hand, ducking behind the robot, and there was a big old off button on the back of its neck. Well, that was a waste of planning, even if it made it easier. He slapped the button, grinning as it powered down. 4 points. That's not bad, whoa. Izuku fell backwards off the robot as a laser beamed out, bisecting the robot and almost hitting him in the head. The boy who had fired it, the one with support gear Izuku had noticed earlier, with a wide belt around his stomach, posed dramatically. You make an excellent bait for my laser, mon ami. Au revoir. What a charmer. Izuku kinda liked him already, despite his recklessness. Huh. Apparently Jason came through a lot more strongly when in combat. Izuku grinned, blood pumping. Well, that was alright with him. Alright, Izuku. Let's go be a goddamn hero. He sprinted through the building the three-pointer had come from, hitting the back alleys. He'd been right. Robots were converging on the main road as the din of combat increased, and he could get the drop on them as he went. They didn't all have the centrally located off button. There were at least 3 actual variants of two-pointer, but none of them were fast or agile enough to catch him. The test was biased for destructive quirks, but not that badly someone with decent physical skills could keep up. Jason or Bruce would have demolished every robot in the city without breaking a sweat. Not as fit. He was only 15, after all. Izuku was sweating by 7 minutes in, but he'd rack up some good points. In addition to his 4 points at the entrance, he'd gotten 7 one-pointers, 5 two-pointers and 2 more three-pointers. That made, 27 points. He could work with that. He'd heard the big guy who interrupted President Mick shout that he'd got 45, but he had a quirk. And, more importantly, he was throwing hands in the main road alongside everyone else. Izuku was jumping robots in back alleys. Really, he was in his element. 3 minutes remaining, examines. Watch out for that zero-pointer. President Mick roared, probably over an intercom. Maybe just with his natural volume. What a guy. Izuku attracted his admiration as the whole city shook. What the hell, man? He whispered. There was a whole lot of screaming going on, so he headed back towards the main road at full speed. A three-pointer got in his way, leveling its Gatling arm and firing a spray of rubber bullets towards him. Izuku went into a forward roll, diving under the attack and popping to his feet in its face, too close for the gun. He reached up, ramming his arm into the gap under his shin, scratched his arm, careless, and tore out a handful of wires. It went limp and he ducked around it, slapping the off button near the tracks for good measure. Second variant of three-pointer, though he'd only seen 2 so far. Interesting. Less variation in the bigger robots. He ducked through a hole in a building, ran across the ground floor and got back onto the main street. The whole city was shaking with impacts the zero-pointer. There was dramatic and then there was overkill. Izuku vaulted through a shattered window, fighting the urge to get to higher ground and take a peek at what was happening, landing next to a robot that was leveling its arm at another examinee. He ducked around it, grabbing the arm and shoving it out of line, the low-powered laser blast missing the examinee, the boy with the support gear from earlier. Izuku threw him a wave, kicking the off button. You make excellent bait, mon ami, he parroted, grinning. The boy gave him a quick smile, still running, and Izuku turned to see what exactly everyone was running from. There was an absolutely enormous robot stomping through the streets towards him. Ha, Izuku said, not ashamed to admit that he really missed his guns right now. No, not his guns. Jason's guns. The guns that were loaded with anti-meta high explosive rounds in case of emergency. Be real comforting right now. The examinees were sprinting away from the robot in a straight line, having all apparently gone to the Prometheus school of running away from things. Izuku was about to duck back into the building and get away that way when he saw a familiar figure, closer to the robot, stumbling. Uraraka. And there was a building just behind her that the zero-pointer was about to plow right through. Always gotta be the hero, don't you? Izuku mumbled, even as he hit a sprint towards the zero-pointer and, more importantly, the girl. Uraraka had stumbled again. Tyrannus must be catching up to her. Izuku heard people yelling about quirks, and how insane he must be as he swung to his left, curving to approach Uraraka from her right at full speed. The robot rammed through the building, completely unconcerned with things like collateral damage and property costs. Half the building fell away. Uraraka looked up, her mouth opening in a silent gasp, and Izuku dived, tackling her out of the way. They both went rolling across the ground, hitting the door of the building right next to Uraraka, and crashing through in a tangle of limbs, Izuku yelping as an elbow found his ribs. He disentangled himself mid-roll, shoving Uraraka further away, and half the roof fell in. Uraraka avoided all of it. Izuku only avoided most of it. A chunk caught him across the shoulder, driving his face into the ground. As it glanced away, Izuku tasted blood. His vision went white as something landed hard on his leg, and his ankle crunched under it. Fuck. He hissed, starting at a yelp and dragging it down to a snarling rumble. The robot was still out there, and he was here, pinned on his stomach, with a bitten tongue and a viciously aching shoulder. Izuku spat blood on the ground and focused on not paying attention to his ankle. "Oh my god, are you alright?" Uraraka whispered, slowly pushing herself upright by the sound of it. Izuku tried to drag his leg free of the debris and almost passed out. "I'm still not dead, so that's a start," he managed, despite the agony currently shooting up his leg. "I don't suppose you could get the concrete off." "Pretty sure my ankle is broken, but I'd prefer sitting here bleeding to lying here bleeding. If you can, don't worry. Pretty sure UA won't let us die." Actually, that was a concern. UA had a colossal amount of influence. Would they be capable of covering up a death in an entrance exam? Was the whole hero system rotten? Maybe he should have just gone vigilante. The revolutionary plan was at version 3, although it still ended in a fatal police shootout. Really needed to work on that. "Is the robot still there?" he whispered, don't want to draw attention. There was a scuffling and a face came into his line of sight. Uraraka, scuffed and streaked with dirt. She looked worried, probably because he was slightly crushed, if he had to guess. "It's moving on. I can get the robot off you. My Quirk." "Right. Your Quirk," Izuku rambled, trying to distract himself from the pain. "It's telekinesis." "No. Not that. You move me physically, so it can't be. Lifting. Makes things lift. It takes gravity away from things I touch," Uraraka explained, carefully moving around him. He felt the weight on his leg lift and hissed, slowly rolling over. He didn't really want to look at his ankle, because he knew that it was going to look bad, but he probably had to. Yeah, that was a lot of blood, but he couldn't see bone. Sharp part of the concrete had gashed his shin, he thought. Broken ankle as well though. Izuku slowly rolled over, clenching his teeth to keep the scream in as his ankle moved, until he could sit straight, taking deep breaths. The pain ran up his leg, churning nausea into his gut. "That's a really cool Quirk, Uraraka," he said, watching as she moved the floating rubble away and pressed her fingers together. 5-point activation, probably. She looked ill, so maybe that was a side effect. Lot of Quirks had those. Then again, it could also be that the bottom part of his left leg was currently bleeding all over the place. Izuku moved his arm, wincing at the bruise on his shoulder, but it wasn't too bad. Just his leg, then. He might have to ask Uraraka to help him limp out. He closed his eyes, counting up in his mind. 32 points. That might be enough. And that's that, examinees. Time is up. Looked like it would have to be enough. Not that he could have gotten more points anyway. If it had been an arm out of commission, maybe, but not with a leg gone. Well, not gone. Still there. But he couldn't have gotten one of those fancy regenerating quirks or something. No, he could not. Are you alright? You're sort of mumbling. Uraraka said. Izuku turned his head to her, snapping out of his daze long enough to feel the absolute embarrassment that suffused him. "Oh yeah. I'm sorta high on adrenaline, I guess." Wow. What an awful excuse. Uraraka didn't seem to doubt him that much though, which was just great. What a wonderful person. "Did I say that out loud?" he asked, wondering if he'd gotten himself into trouble. He needed a voice filtering mask or something. Alternately, of course, he could try not getting hurt and therefore avoiding being drugged on pain. Uraraka waved her hands, blushing. No, it's fine. I just hang on, there's a nurse coming. Over here." Izuku pinched his eyes shut and folded his arm across his face, hoping that he wouldn't just combust from embarrassment. Or actually, maybe he should hope that he did. It would spare him a lot of trouble. Uraraka had leaned out of the door and waved someone over, a short woman in a hero costume that had some similarity to a nurse's outfit. Izuku heard someone whisper that it was the youthful heroine, Recovery Girl. The heroine looked 70 at least, but Izuku didn't judge. Maybe she was young at heart. "Oh dear. A broken ankle, dear?" Recovery Girl asked. Izuku shrugged. "I think so, yeah." He might have been suppressing a squeal of fanboy enthusiasm. Recovery Girl was just so cool. Healing powers were great. All that said, Izuku absolutely flinched as Recovery Girl leaned forwards, her lips extending like a nightmare proboscis. The kiss she pressed against his forehead was dry and papery, and Izuku winced, feeling energy leaching out of him. It was a bizarre feeling, his skin knitting back together and his bone cracking back into place, and his first attempt to get up completely failed. Recovery Girl clucked softly. "My Quirk takes a lot of energy out of the person being healed, dear. Here. Have some gummies, they're high energy." Izuku blinked at her, taking the handful of brightly colored sweets. Thank you. The covery girl beamed at him. Oh, no problem, young man. There were always a few injuries at the exams. Go on now, home you go. Izuku slowly pulled himself to his feet as recovery girl headed away, surprisingly quickly for someone of her age. He popped a gummy into his mouth, chewing absently. It was a bit sour for his liking but could be worse. He looked around, seeing that Uraraka was shifting from foot to foot, looking nervous. He rubbed the back of his head, tousling his hair in his own nervous movement. I guess we should head out then. Uraraka nodded. Yeah. Probably, yeah. The two of them left the training ground in silence, walking alongside each other. Izuku distracted himself by thinking about the exam, keeping his mumbling in check via steady application of gummies to his mouth. Beside him Uraraka was silent. He guessed that it made sense. There were some situations that just talking would cheapen the experience. They reached the exit and Izuku turned to her, offering a smile despite the blush that crawled up his skin. Hey, Uraraka, I guess this is where we part ways, right? But I look forwards to seeing you again when term starts. She blinked at him, the perpetual blush that reddened her cheeks deepening before her usual expression, one that was kinda cute, if Izuku was honest, turned into an absolutely terrifying look of determination. Izuku would probably be seeing it in his nightmares, it was simply so committed. It might even make a nice change from the whole tied to a chair and beaten with the crowbar thing. Yeah. Uraraka snapped, her fist clenched in front of her face, eyebrows drawn down in a fearsome glare. I'll see you then, Midoriya. Don't let me down. And then she was gone, turning and sprinting away into the crowd, and leaving Izuku to his increasing fear and confusion. Was this what making friends was like? He really hoped not. Izuku spent the next 2 weeks waiting calmly and patiently for his UA results to arrive. He had meditated, he had considered, and he had found inner peace. Whether he passed or not, he would be satisfied with the result. He had done his best, and he had no regrets. As noted before, Izuku Midoriya was a goddamn liar, even to himself. Especially to himself. More truthfully, he had been a bundle of nerves so terrible that his mom, suffering from empathetic nerves, had sent him out of the house with instructions to play around with his grapple harness and relax. It had only been 3 days since the exam. Izuku had spent an hour crying on the beach before regaining something that vaguely resembled composure, and going back to tinkering with his harness. He was still quite suspect of the wires, but in theory it should now hold twice his body weight and reel him in quite quickly. In practice he didn't really want to test it. But at least he calmed down a little bit, so he found himself a relatively comfortable and odor-free place and took a seat. From here he could see the ocean, endless waves washing onto the trash lot and sands. It was soothing, oddly enough, as though the very presence of the ocean reminded him that it was never the end. Some things couldn't be halted by human pettiness, Izuku mused as he cracked open his notebook, the grapple harness still fastened around himself. No real need to take it off, all he was doing was looking over his notes. The costume design for Red Hood was still there, of course, 1 page after his grapple harness and 1 before the shock knuckles, but the page he flipped to was closer to the center, past theoretical gear designs that he'd need a fully equipped workshop and a lot of trial and error to complete. No, the page he was looking for held something near and dear to his heart. All he could remember of the formula and method for making Wayne Luther Tech suppressive foam. Suppressive foam had been fairly new in Jason's universe, only being rolled out to police units the year before Clark had retaken power following Brainiac's invasion, but it had been long enough for Jason to become enamored with it. It was temperature resistant, so it couldn't be melted by most metas. It was breathable, so there was no chance of suffocation. And it expanded at an incredible rate, making it extremely good at pinning people down. For Jason, attempting to tone down the amount of killing he did, it had been a godsend. No need to kill a crook when you could stick him to the wall with a few foam bullets, and put the fear of God into him, and if Izuku could remember how to make it, it would level the playing field a lot against Quirks. The problem was that, well, he couldn't quite remember how to make it. He'd ordered a home chemistry set, so he could do some experimentation with a much weaker version of the adhesive, but there was no guarantee. And then the grapple gun, if I can find out the formula. I know that Bruce had a prototype, adhesive on the grapple that became inert when an electrical shock ran through it. He was too paranoid to use it, but I could much better, Izuku mumbled, feeling his anxiety fade away as he wrote and thought, his hair traits slowing down again, a small smile tugging at the edges of his lips. Maybe life wasn't so bad. Maybe he was on the road to finding inner peace. Inner peace is a lie, Izuku moaned, collapsed in his living room with his face buried in the carpet. His mom fluttered around the room. Izuku could tell that she was waving her arms in excitement, even without seeing her. She was babbling almost as quickly as he did, although it was with excitement as well as nerves. The letter containing his UA result sat on the table, innocent and innocuous. It might as well have been a nail bomb. Izuku tried to push himself up, but the fear-induced adrenaline spreading out from his chest left his arms shaking, and he collapsed with a soft woof of air, rolling over and whining. He might have laid there for longer, but with his mom on the verge of asphyxiating from her rush, he really needed to get this over and done with. More like a slug than a person, Izuku dragged himself over to the sofa and picked up the letter, completely unready to face his doom. I'm sure that I passed the written exam, even if only barely, so it's all on the practical. I know I got a decent number of points compared to the others, but I don't know how many points are needed. It's 1 in 300 people who get in, and they all had such good quirks and all the robots, and I got hurt at the end, and I don't know if... Izuku. His mom wailed, and Izuku clamped his mouth shut, teeth pinching his bottom lip. He reached out with a trembling hand and pulled open the letter, tipping the small discs contained within onto the table. He and his mom both froze, staring at it as it buzzed softly before lighting up the whole room. I am here as a hologram. Boomed the holographic representation of All Might, the enormous man looking slightly ridiculous in a yellow pinstriped suit, his famous grin taking up most of his face. All Might, the #1 ranked hero in Japan. All Might, perhaps the greatest hero in the world, golden-haired and square-jawed, and everything young heroes aspire to be. The hero held out a thumbs up, beaming. Izuku Midoriya. You passed the written test. And in the practical exam you scored 32 points. A respectable score, young Midoriya, but not enough to get you into the hero course alone. However, what sort of hero school would we be if we awarded points only for destruction? Izuku almost got a broken neck from the mood whiplash, nervous excitement, turning into crushing disappointment into overwhelming, suffocating anticipation. No, in the entrance exam there was another point system, hero points. Awarded for rescues and aiding your fellow examinees. And with those you received 15 hero points, giving you a total of 47 points. And that, young Midoriya, is enough to place you at number 18 in the total rankings. Allow me to be the first to congratulate you, and say to you, welcome, young Midoriya, to your hero academia. Izuku did the only reasonable thing he could think of. He fainted from happiness. What the fuck do you think you're doing, Deku? Kaken shrieked, slamming Izuku against the wall. Deku. Misreading of Izuku, meaning useless. Izuku's fingers twitched, a second away from closing into a fist and punching Bakugo's lights out. Distance was short, but Kaken liked to stay at arm's length. There was space to build a stomach punch that would wind the other boy. Bit the hands off his collar. But no. Not here. If he was honest, possibly not ever. Bakugo was, unfortunately, probably destined to be a high-ranking hero. I don't know what you're talking about, Kaken. Shit. Stutter was back. He thought he'd gotten over that, or at least was making headway. You know exactly what I'm talking about. Kaken howled, spit-spraying Izuku. It was disgusting, but common for Kaken. I'm supposed to be the only one from this shithole school to go to UA. I'm supposed to be the only one from this place to be anything. Leaving this place behind is my backstory. Oh, for Christ's sake. Who did he think would care? Oh? Oops. Said that out loud. Kaken was quite literally shaking with rage, which really just asked questions like how the fuck had this guy not been either put into therapy or arrested yet? Oh, right. Potential antisocial personality disorder that allowed him to act something like a sane person when required, added to a complete lack of care by adults in authority. Question answered. But Kaken was still on the verge of a violent explosion, so Izuku needed to defuse the bomb, speaking metaphorically. And maybe literally. Seriously, Kaken. And nobody will care where you came from other than UA. It's the same with all the top 10 right now. Why you can't name their J junior schools, can you? The stutter again. But who knew, maybe it would play to Bakugo's obnoxious ego, and get him to think Izuku wasn't worth it. Kaken leaned in until his face was inches away, and Izuku gritted his teeth. Kaken's hands were still on his collar, and a decent explosion could break his collarbone, and take him out of any potential fight before he even started. This wasn't a good situation, exactly, but maybe logic would work. It usually didn't, because Bakugo had breathtaking anger issues for no reason that Izuku had ever been able to work out, but it was always worth a try. Izuku was a diplomat at heart. And he supposed that if talking didn't work, he could always fall back on the Red Hood school of diplomacy and take his chances. Admittedly, that would involve a lot more trauma for both of them, probably, but it would be fine. Decent chance that nobody would even believe a quirkless kid could hurt Bakugo in the first place, so he might get away with it without even trying. Assuming he didn't get hurt too badly, of course. My backstory, Kaken rasped, face an inch away from Izuku, and with definite crazy eyes going on, doesn't include you, you quirkless, powerless fuck. I don't know how you cheated to get into UA, but I'm not going to let you ruin this for me. He was too close, Izuku absently analyzed. If this turned into a fight, Izuku was close enough to bite. Kakin was tough and had a powerful quirk, but he wasn't really used to close-in, dirty street fighting. In all fairness, though, if it weren't for Jason's memories not the time. Bakugo opened his mouth again, voice grating forth. You're nothing, you understand me. Nothing, a quirkless, useless, weakling. You don't get to be part of my backstory, not even a pebble in my way, and you're not going to UA. Frustration welled in Izuku's chest, thickened his throat. His eyes stung with tears of rage, and his voice came out choked. Why does it matter so much? If you're so sure you're going to be great, why do you care about putting me down so much? Kakin sneered at him. I don't care, Deku. You're in my way. You're always in my way. And if you don't get out of it. Bakugo let go of his collar and lifted a hand in front of his face, the palm sparking with small explosions. I'll make you move. Izuku stared at him, watching him laugh contemptuously and walk away, brushing at his blazer. Kakin was so confident. So strong. So arrogant. You might be a great hero, Kakin, Izuku said under his breath, too quietly to be heard, but you'll always be a shitty person. He took the window out of the school, seething with anger. His teacher had happily revealed to the whole class that he was going to the UA hero course probably on purpose, one last chance to mess with him, and he wanted to avoid as much attention from his classmates as possible. Kakin had only caught him because he'd worked out the routes Izuku took. Too clever for Izuku's liking. If I ever have to fight him, mostly uses explosions from his hands, though don't know if he can cause them anywhere else if he sweats nitroglycerin. Could I set it off? Is there something different about it compared to chemical nitroglycerin? Obvious answer is to break his arms, but what if his bones are reinforced to resist his explosions? How much more force would it take? Could I bait him into wearing himself out, blind him somehow? Can grapple explosions from his hands are too dangerous. He's good at hand-to-hand too, fast, quick, damn it. Izuku stayed away from crowds on his way homeward to the beach, in this case. He developed a fondness for just sitting there and watching the sea, despite the mess that the place was. It was quiet. Isolated. A good place to think without being interrupted, where he could mumble to himself without fear of being overheard. Still have the shock gauntlets. Not ideal unless I'm fighting someone who isn't a heavyweight, though although I shouldn't be fighting people like that in hand-to-hand. Jason struggled against Bane, and Bane was only just superpowered. Strength-enhancing quirks still always have a weakness. Like that girl, Uraraka. 5-point activation. Gravity control. Gravity removal. Can't assume she's correct about the full potential of her quirk. Useful. Can't swing properly without gravity, maybe. If you're floating, no solid grounding, weaker blows. Hard to take in close, hard to fight without getting touched. 5-finger touch to activate. Izuku had ended up on the beach almost without noticing. He took out a notepad, resting it on a knee and tapping the closed cover with a pencil, the slow drumming matching his heartbeat. His other hand went up to his head, rubbing at the back of his mess of curly hair. Of course, people would think to break the fingers. Harder than they assume. Hard not to get touched. Some sort of weapon baton. But what if the activation isn't 5-finger touch? What if it's available fingers touching? If she lost a finger, would her quirk be crippled, or would it activate with the remaining fingers? Is it all the fingers on one hand, 5 fingers on one hand, 5 fingers total? Too many variables. Close combat isn't feasible, I'd be quickly levitated. Grappling, maybe, but even then guns are an answer, but non-lethal the foam bullets, but I won't have those for a while. Izuku moved his hand from his hair to his mouth, covering his lips with his fingers. The pencil tapping continued, speeding up slightly. But I can throw things. I'm accurate, even, thanks to Jason. He used shuriken mostly, but even though they're unlikely to be lethal, the aesthetic might not be, but Bruce used bolas sometimes, right? So if I could incorporate the shock charge from my gauntlets, good enough to bring someone down, probably. There are heroes that use a lot of gear anyway. Plus its quiet guns aren't stealthy, even with the best silencer possible. Stealth. It all came down to stealth. He wasn't going to be able to compete with the strongest quirks well, unless they had some sort of flaw. A lot of powerful quirks didn't come with the same resilience that a lot of metas in Jason's universe had shown. Bakugo wasn't impossible to take down in a fist fight, or at least Izuku believed. Something like the later armor suits Bruce built might be able to compete, but I don't have the resources. Might never have them. I wonder how quirks work, exactly. Can they be suppressed? There's that hero, I think, can't remember his name, but that's a quirk. Could it be replicated by technology? Izuku grinned, a maniac expression that bared his teeth. Wouldn't that be a fun project? He caught himself after a moment, coughing into his hand and forcing the smile off his face, gut twisting uneasily at the flash of pure glee that had run through him. Not now, Jason. Rein it in, he whispered, slowly standing. It was probably time to head home, anyway. He had paperwork to fill in for UA. But bringing them down to my level maybe, it would teach a few people a lesson in humility. Put it on the back burner, he thought. Something for the future. The door to classroom 1 was aggressively large. Izuku wasn't that short. Or that tall, really about 5 feet 6 inches, but the door before him was about twice his height. I suppose it has to be, he whispered, in case people with quirks that make them much larger than normal attend. Still, it's a bit intimidating. He'd been hoping that he wouldn't have to deal with Kakin, but he was fairly sure that one of the voices he could hear from within the classroom was a lot more familiar than he liked. He'd heard that Kakin had come first in the entrance exam. Of course Bakugo had refused to shut up about it, but he'd hoped, given that there were 2 hero course classes. Oh well. At least it sounded like someone else had drawn the initial brunt of Kakin's personality. Izuku sighed, pushing at the door and swinging it open. It moved easily, perfectly balanced, and he walked into his new classroom, heart thumping painfully within his chest. He was nervous, he could tell, a coldness forming in his torso, adrenaline and anticipation. He glanced around the room, taking in as much as he could, cataloging escape routes and obstacles part his life spent being bullied, mostly Jason's professional paranoia, and useful enough as a skill that he'd made a point of honing it. Mostly the classroom contained people, students. There were so many interesting-looking people. Izuku quivered slightly with a hunger to analyze and assess their quirks in the slightly militaristic UA uniform. Gray, with epaulets and buttons and marking thread, a little ostentatious for Izuku, but he could bear it. And also, there was someone behind the desk. A man, in a yellow sleeping bag. Izuku did his best not to stare. The man was looking directly at him, a single eyebrow inching up, and Izuku tore his gaze away, wincing inside. He bit the inside of his cheek to keep his mumbling inside. That must be their teacher, either that or there was a kidnapper in the school, but being real he was probably safe in that case. He'd want a quirkless kid, but it looked like he didn't want to be noticed. Fine by Izuku. Staying low was a good time. And what the fuck's it matter to you, Four Eyes? Bakugo snarled. Huh. He sounded genuinely annoyed, rather than it being the standard aggression. Wasn't used to someone standing up to him, maybe. The guy he was arguing with was the tall boy who'd interrupted President Mick before the exam. Izuku hadn't caught his name. Still, maybe there'd be something to watch here. If he was lucky, the 2 of them might get into a fist fight, and he could assess their skills. If he was really lucky, the tall dude would put Kakin down for the count. God, even the thought was cathartic. Izuku should really consider therapy. Putting your feet on school property is disrespectful to the craftsmen who made the material, to your classmates, to UA itself. The tall boy declared. Kakin sneered up at him, arms folded across his chest. That was a good sign in and of itself. Kakin had very obvious tells when it came to violence, and one of them was letting his hands hang loosely by his side. If he was sitting like that, it made a sudden turn to violence a lot less likely. Also, he had his feet up on his desk, sitting tilted back in his chair. If he tried to start anything, the tall boy could kick the chair away, and Kakin would be on the floor, vulnerable. I don't give a fuck about any of them, you fucking square, and I don't give a fuck about you, Bakugo snarled, swinging his feet down to the ground. He came to his feet, planting both hands on the desk. Violence was imminent. Hopefully he was just trying to be intimidating. Otherwise Izuku dreaded the thought, but his desk was right behind Kakin's, if he remembered the seating plan right. He might have to actually intervene. He pushed down the thought that the best way to intervene with a rabid dog was a merciful shot to the skull. Not now, Jason. Kakin was still talking, and Izuku wanted to assess him. I'm Katsuki fucking Bakugo, Four Eyes, and I'm gonna be the #1 hero. You hear me? You're all just extras in my backstory, so get used to it. That ego was ridiculous. How did he fit his swollen head through doors? Didn't matter. The tall dude looked taken aback. You say you're going to be the #1 hero. I highly doubt that someone as uncouth as you. I don't give a fuck what you think. And what's with talking like that, you some kind of rich boy? Izuku scraped a shoe along the ground as he walked, loudly. Fun as this was, someone needed to be an adult, and the one in the room didn't seem interested. Izuku sympathized. Both Kakin and the tall boy turned to look at him, and Izuku raised a hand, swallowing. Hi. Hello. He saw the look of absolute disgust and rage that contorted Kakin's face, but refused to make eye contact. That was asking for an explosion. Metaphorically. Kakin probably wouldn't leap to his feet and try to blow his face off in the middle of an occupied classroom. The tall dude took a long step towards Izuku, his posture alarmingly straight. Also, he was like 6'2", which made Izuku feel like a child in comparison. Greetings. I am Tenya Ida, from Same Private Academy. He was kind of a square, but he seemed nice. Izuku managed to smile, fighting off his social anxiety long enough to be polite. I'm Izuku Midoriya. Nice to meet you. If you're here to socialize, a voice that sounded like about 6 days of chain smoking and rocket whiskey rasped, you might as well pack up and leave now. Izuku went absolutely still. The voice was different, but the tone if he turned around, he knew he'd see Bruce standing there, exhausted after too many nights running around Gotham, tired eyes that were far too forgiving resting on his wayward son. Blood and bone scattered, a harsh and uncertain smile of forgiveness, and Izuku closed his eyes, fingernails digging into his palms, as he dragged a harsh breath through his nose, and forced himself to turn. Bruce wasn't there. He wasn't caught in Gotham, in Bloodhaven, in Metropolis, in a vault far beneath the forest. He was in a classroom, sun streaming in through the window, and an exhausted-looking man in dark clothes standing next to the teacher's desk. 8 seconds to quiet down. Not good enough. Time is precious, and a rational class would know that. The guy looked even more tired than he sounded, which meant probably an underground hero. Teaching through the day and patrolling at night. That was extreme. Even Bruce hadn't after the first few years. Bruce had patrolled about half the days of any given week, keeping to an uncertain schedule. He was never going to be everywhere, but fear of the bat prevented more crimes than he ever could. Only the direst circumstances drew Bruce to patrol every single hour of every single night. And what had that gotten him? A broken back, when Bane exploited that weakness. Tiredness killed in this business, but whatever this guy in front of him did wasn't Izuku's business. The man swept tired eyes across the class and sighed. Alright. I'm your teacher, Shota Izawa. So. He reached into the yellow sleeping bag, discarded on the desk, and pulled out a gym uniform. Izuku almost had a heart attack at the thought of cramming 20 individual uniforms into a single sleeping bag. Put these on and let's head out. We're wasting time. Izawa threw the uniform at a random student. The rest of you'll find yours in the changing rooms. Let's get going. Izuku made for the door, heart beating unevenly. Something wasn't right here, and the look in Izawa's eyes, there was a crazy in that man. Izuku really hoped he didn't have to deal with it. Oh, never mind, Izuku whispered to himself. The class were lined up on a ground of compacted dirt, markings delineating athletics tracks painted on, with Izawa stood in front of them looking like a corpse freshly dragged from its grave. A Quirk assessment test. Should have been a vigilante, Izuku whispered to himself, too quiet for anyone with normal hearing to hear. Izawa sighed again, looking utterly done already. All Uraraka had done was ask about orientation, which the rest of the school was at. If you're gonna be a hero, you don't have time for trivial pursuits, he said, eyes raking across them. Here at UA, the teachers have a lot of freedom. It's one of the selling points of the school. So, I want to skip a pointless orientation for a Quirk assessment test. That's my privilege. Oh good, he had a maniac for a teacher. Live fast, die young, leave a messy corpse, that sort of thing. Well, his revolutionary plan was at revision 6. He'd even managed to get over the dying in a police shootout thing. Murdering himself in a suicidal attack on the largest and most powerful villain group he could find wasn't better, exactly, but he liked to think it was progress. You've been doing fitness tests like this your whole lives, Izawa continued. Thing is, the government is still clinging to the notion that all men are created equal. You've been doing these without your quirks. It's not rational to prevent those with the most power from excelling. Oh? That was a lot of rage that Izuku was feeling, welling up in his chest. Maybe it was the street rat Jason, being told that he deserved to be looked down on for something out of his control. Maybe it was Izuku, powerless in a powerful world, hungering for something more. Either way, it filled his heart with spite even after he wrestled the Black Fury down. Might makes right. Beloved catchphrase of tyrants everywhere. There was a glint in Izawa's dark eyes, something knowing when Izuku met his gaze. Izuku blinked and looked away. Either way, it's better to have a baseline for your skills so that you can improve later. Bakugo. You placed first in the entrance exam, right? What was the furthest distance you could throw a baseball back in junior high? Kakin raised an eyebrow, his expression twisting into something like confusion before he shrugged. 67 meters, I think. Izawa tossed him a baseball. Try again. Use your quirk, do whatever. Just stay in the circle. Bakugo looked at the ball in his hand and shrugged, striding over to the circle. Izuku watched him, unblinking. This would be easy, obvious. Simple application. Throw, add an explosion to add to the throw, get a good score. Great quirk. Very impressive. Very simple. Very heroic. There was the bitterness, festering in him. Good old bitterness, the friend that had never left him despite his refusal to acknowledge it. Thanks, Jason, for making him aware of it. Bakugo pitched well. Not perfect form, but excellent, and as the ball was about to leave his hand. Die. Kakin roared, his hand bursting with flame. The ball was sent hurtling through the air to the amazement of most of their classmates, although Izuku wasn't as impressed. How is this guy not in therapy? Sure, he'd launched a baseball a long way over 700 meters was a lot further than Izuku would manage, that was for sure, but it was one of the most basic applications of an incredibly simple quirk. And there was that bitterness again. He might actually have to be careful not to become a vigilante, because that right there could drive him right onto the path Jason had walked at the start of his career as the Red Hood. We can use our quirks as much as we want. This is great. Izawa turned a horrifying look upon the speaker, a girl with hot pink skin and horns, and smiled the sort of smile that was more suited to medieval paintings of hell than a skull. Alas, poor pink girl, we hardly knew ye. Great, huh? You've got 3 years to become a hero. You think it's going to be great? Think an attitude like that will get you through? Alright, then. Let's spice it up a bit. Today you're all gonna compete in 8 tests to judge your potential. Whoever comes last clearly has none and will be expelled. Evolution Plan, version 8.1 Get expelled from UA on account of the first 8 being a gauntlet. Izuku forced himself not to panic. A few inches away, Uraraka, he hadn't had a chance to talk to her yet, spoke up. Expelled. But it's the first day, that's so unfair. Izawa still had that slight, unsettling grin, showing far too many teeth. His eyes were bloodshot, Izuku noticed. Through his panic the thought slipped how much of this attitude was Izawa, and how much was the blatant sleep deprivation. Either way, it didn't matter. They were up against the wall now. Fair? Izawa asked, clearly rhetorical. You're right. It isn't fair. The world isn't fair. You think it's fair when some villain kills a dozen civilians because the hero he faced wasn't up to the task. You think it's fair when a tsunami crushes half a city, or an earthquake leaves hundreds dead. It's not fair. The world isn't fair, but it's a hero's job to counter that. That's why I only accept the best. 8 tests. Prove you deserve to be here. Izawa lost his grin, though the crazy eyes remained. Izuku wished for a rainy night in Gotham, armor and jacket and gun in hand, rather than here in the sunlight. It had only been a day and he was already feeling like an imposter. Calm down, Izuku, he whispered, barely louder than a breath, far too quiet to be heard. You don't have to outrun the bear. Yeah, that was right. He didn't have to beat everyone else, only someone else. They'd probably been training too, definitely been training too, but so had he. He could do this. God, he hoped he could do this. Alright, Izawa announced, you all saw Bakugo's demonstration. Now it's time for the real thing. First off, 50-meter sprint. Izuku would probably have found the quirks being used a lot more interesting if he hadn't been consumed by concern. Didn't help that the first 2 were obviously well suited. Iida, now that Izuku got a chance to actually study him, had engines in his calves. Izuku could see the deformation, and blazed across the 50 meters in barely more than 3 seconds. The other person running, a girl with a slightly hunched posture, cleared the 50 meters in 2 massive jumps and just under 6 seconds. Not great for him. Izuku reckoned he could manage about 7 seconds, if he did his best. No idea if that would be enough. He chewed his lip nervously, calculating as people went in front of him. 5.49 seconds, a guy with a tail who used it to hurl himself along. 7.15 seconds, Uraraka. 5.51 seconds, the blonde kid who'd almost pasted Izuku with his laser in the entrance exam. 5.3 seconds, the pink girl who slid along on a trail of some sort of liquid that came from her feet. And then Izuku was up, standing next to Kakin. Great. Start. Chirped the robot recorder at the side of the track, and Izuku bolted. He was never going to beat Kakin, the bastard had blown away by propelling himself with blasts from his hands, but even still. 6.49 seconds. The robot announced, cheery enough to make Izuku feel sick. He'd beaten any record he'd ever set, but that was so much slower than everyone else, except Uraraka, and if he was right, she'd blow through the baseball throw with ease. It was his first day, and he needed a break already. If he had access to his gear, but there was no point in complaining now. There were tests to complete. Second test. Grip strength. This one, Izuku was sort of confused on. Was it really that relevant to being a hero? He supposed that it was important to lifting something heavy, but at least Kakin didn't have a massive advantage on this one. Izuku took a petty satisfaction from that, even if he knew he'd come low on the score. He was much stronger than he had been 10 months ago, but at least 2 people in this class had some sort of strength quirk. He was never going to compete. Still, he didn't have to outrun the bear. Silver linings, silver linings. Assuming the final result was just an aggregate of their positions in each test, of course. If the actual results were taken into account, his limitations, that was, being a standard human who wasn't going to perform at an insane level on any test, might cripple him. In a moment of weakness, Izuku silently vowed vengeance on Izawa in the event that he was expelled. Heroism be damned. Long jump. Izuku did better here. Several of his classmates could boost themselves, doing much better than he did, but he was athletic enough. Probably top 8 in that, he guessed. Baseball throw, considerably worse. Izuku managed 68 meters, earning himself a bloody glare from Kakin at beating his old junior school record. Really, what did he expect? They were barely an inch apart in height and similarly built. Why would it be offensive that Izuku had done as well as Bakugo? Kakin had literally demonstrated a vastly better score 10 minutes ago. What was wrong with him? As Izuku had predicted, though, Uraraka stole the show. Cannons produced from flesh, super strength, a sweating wall of ice, none of the impressive, showy quirks demonstrated, could match the girl who just had to tap the ball with 5 fingers, before gently tossing it into orbit. Such a cool quirk. Izuku was amazed that he managed to keep his internal monologue internal. Maybe giving himself a set time to vent at the beach was helping. 5th test, sideways hops. Again, Izuku did alright. His Parker practice certainly helped, but a short boy with odd balls on his head stuck 2 clumps of the balls either side of the line and bounced between them at a dizzying speed. It violated the spirit of the exercise, in Izuku's opinion, but Izawa seemed amused rather than annoyed. Maybe he liked people who could exploit rules to their advantage. Maybe he was a sadist who got his jollies from seeing the dizzy kid fall over afterwards. Who could know? Number 6, long distance running. Turned out that all that running away from bullies really helped with some things, huh? Izuku actually did well in this one, coming fourth behind Ida. No surprise there, boy with a head best described as crow-like. His quirk manifested as a mass of shadows that coalesced into an avian-human hybrid form and carried him. And the girl who casually pulled a cannon from her skin. She broke out a bicycle this time. Alright, maybe the short kid with the balls Mineta, Izuku thought he was called, hadn't been too out of line in terms of stretching the exercises to their thinnest possible definition. Still, fourth was good. He must be somewhere in the middle of the pack. 7th test, sit-ups. Izuku did fine, but he didn't think anybody was breaking world records here. That was fine with him. The less he had to deal with, the better. And the last test, the seated toe touch, much the same. Izuku was fairly flexible thank you Robin training regime and your focus on acrobatics, but he didn't think he was first. Once they were all finished they lined up again, almost all of them shifting nervously. Izuku bit his lip, fighting to keep his panicked whispers inside. What if it wasn't about results? What if it was about how well he used his quirk? He didn't have a quirk, would that count against him? Would Izawa call him out and disqualify him, tell him that heroics needed a quirk? Would the invisible girl that he'd noticed get a lowered score, since she couldn't use her quirk without stripping off her school uniform and being obvious? Had he left the oven on? Why was the scarf Mr. Izawa wore so oddly familiar? Was he on the verge of a panic attack? Absolutely. Most of his classmates didn't seem to notice, or seemed vaguely sympathetic. Bakugo got annoyed. Would you quit fucking shaking, Deku? Shit, it's only the first day and you're already crying. The fact that Izuku was stressed enough that a little bit of Jason came out in reply probably wasn't surprising. Jason got confrontational when he was emotional. Why don't you try minding your own business for once, Kakin? Maybe if your ego wasn't so insufferable. What the fuck did you say to me? Bakugo barked, incensed. There was about 5 feet between them as he lunged, hands sparking, and the cold wash of adrenaline cut through Izuku. He bit his lip hard enough to draw blood, but his head cleared. Kakin always led with a heavy right hook when fighting. Either that or the grab to the collar. If it was the hook, grab. Flip. Kick to the head, keep kicking until the bastard stopped trying to get up. If it was the grab, knee to the groin. Shove the hands away, headbutt to break nose, hip throw to the ground, stomp into unconsciousness. Vigilante Revolutionary Plan, version 8.2, Step 1. Hospitalize Kakin. Kakin was halfway to Izuku when the explosions coming from his palm just stopped. Izuku heard him grunt in complete confusion before a loop of thin gray fabric wrapped around him and pulled, dragging Kakin back. Maybe it isn't obvious, as Alwa drawled, eyes glowing a malevolent crimson, but UA doesn't generally accept students beating on each other outside of approved sparring. Kakin heaved against the scarf, failing to budge any of it, teeth showing in a deranged snarl. How the fuck your scarf so damn strong? Izawa was apparently fluent in Japanese that was mangled by a rage that was probably half an inch away from an aneurysm, because he replied without blinking. It's not a scarf. It's a capture weapon made from military-grade alloys. Now, knock it off, you're giving me dry eye. Izuku stared, mind connecting the dots. The scarf. The dark clothes, underground hero. The red glow in Izawa's eyes. Kakin being unable to use his quirk, of course Izuku was in the line of fire too, but that hardly mattered to him. You Eraserhead. The pro eraser hero. Izawa glanced at him, one eyebrow lifting before the glow went out of his eyes, although he made a point of pulling Kakin back a few steps before the capture weapon or scarf, or whatever loosed itself, and wrapped around Izawa's neck again. It didn't move naturally, there must be some sort of technology in there, but that wasn't important. Izawa sighed, sounding exhausted. Every teacher here is a pro hero. I don't see the big deal. Bakugo, get into line. I'm going to show the results. Bakugo snarled but went without protest. Of course he did, Izuku thought. He tested the resident authority figure and seen that he couldn't get away with all of his old bullshit, so he'd gone back to treading the line of contemptuous obedience. A few members of the class whispered about Eraserhead, sounded like none of them had actually heard of him, but Izuku pushed it out of his mind. Izawa reached into a pocket and pulled out a small bottle of eye drops, applying them without a word. Making them wait. Sadist. He replaced the bottle and shrugged. I don't really care enough to give you all the results personally, so here, he said, laying his tablet on the ground and pressing a button. A hologram flickered and spun into place, a table of results slowly spinning on it, and Izuku felt his heart freeze mid-beat in frightened anticipation. Izuku Midoriya. 14th place, above several others. Last place, Tour Hagakure. Izuku chanced a glance along the line, seeing the invisible girl standing frozen in place. Her uniform was completely still at least, and felt his heart jolt with sympathy. She didn't have a quirk that was useful here. Her scores hadn't been low, from what he could remember, just lower than the rest. It was Izuku hated it. To be cast aside for no fault of your own. Heroics was more cutthroat than Izuku had realized. It left a vile taste in his mouth, and the relief he felt relief that he wasn't going home, that he hadn't received a negative answer to the question that had haunted his whole life, only made the sour bitterness worse. Hagakure, as always said, sounding absolutely bored, be sure to work on your physical scores. Strong quirks aren't anything. And in case you all missed it, nobody is going home. The threat of expulsion was just call it a logical ruse, to draw the best out of you. I knew it, the girl who produced items from her skin said, sounding confused. I thought the rest of you would have known that. Should I have told you? No, Izuku thought, looking Izawa in his bloodshot crazy man eyes. It hadn't been a lie. Maybe the threat had been to ensure they did their best, but he would have sent them home with barely a regret. Maybe more than just the person in last place. Izawa smirked, teeth on display again, and Izuku didn't bother to hide his shudder. Alright, that's it, we're done for the day, Izawa said, picking up his tablet and tucking it under his arm. Go and collect a syllabus from the classroom and head home. You'll need it for tomorrow. Oh, and I wouldn't get comfortable. It's all downhill from here. Midoriya might actually see that grin in his nightmares. Welcome to UA High School. Midoriya. A word. Izuku almost jumped out of his skin as Izawa materialized from the darkness of an empty classroom in front of him. The teacher raised an eyebrow, the bottom half of his mouth buried in his scarf and hands tucked into pockets. Somewhere to be. The support department. I have some things I wanted to ask about. For my costume, Izuku explained, shuffling. Izawa looked him over, nodding. Makes sense. At least you're trying. Speaking of trying, you noticed me this morning. Why not say something to your classmates? Well, he'd been distracted by the fight brewing between Ida and Kakin. But mostly, it had been paranoia. Izuku chose to answer honestly. There aren't many villains who could get into UA. If you were one of them, getting your attention wouldn't help. Be better to try and distract you mid whatever why you were doing. Izuku clenched his fist, bringing all his will to bear against his stutter. It rarely worked, since all it did was get him more tense and push the stutter further, but he always had hope that he could brute force things. Izawa smiled a fraction, the only indication a slight crinkling around his eyes. Izuku hoped it was a smile, at least. Trying to catch a potential villain off guard. Well, I guess you've got decent instincts. I guess I'm supposed to warn you that lone wolves don't do well at UA, but... Izawa gestured to himself with a single lazy wave of his hand. Just show me that you can work with others, too. And then he was gone, melting back into the darkness like an overdramatic teenager. Izuku was unbearably jealous. In the future he would be the shadow that flapped in the night, or whatever they wanted to call it. For the moment, though, he needed to take his grapple harness and shock knuckles to the support department, so that the head there could check them over and sign off on them, if the email correspondence he'd managed to talk himself into before arriving at UA had been true. He didn't think they'd lie to him, but Izuku's anxiety was like the Batman of his emotions. It knew all, it saw all, and it never seemed to sleep. Izuku tried not to think for the next 5 minutes, hoping to purge his mind of increasingly crazed metaphors before he went insane. It didn't really work, but he did his best, so that was cool. The support department section of the school was actually different to the rest, although the design was mostly the same, white paint and brushed steel. Every door was reinforced. Maybe the support department had a tendency to, Izuku didn't know, create and unleash killer robots. Nanobit swarms. Violent cleaning items. The horrors of science were varied and numerous. Trying to comprehend them all was the path to madness. Nonetheless, Izuku started mumbling about the threats to his person that he could encounter as he walked through the hallways. Paradoxically, it relaxed him. He might have to just accept that he was weird and live with it. He found the room he'd been directed to and raised his hand, knocking hard on the steel. His knuckles stung a little. Too enthusiastic. Come, I know. Wait a minute. The explosion that rocked the room beyond wasn't followed by any screams of pain, so Izuku just assumed that the support team didn't understand the concept of lab safety. It happened, really. Bruce had blown up more than one table while experimenting with his latest paranoia-fueled prototypes, and Jason had once burned most of an eyebrow off, while trying to make a grenade that would create a sort of clinging tar, to inconvenience people he got the drop on. It hadn't worked, in the end. Izuku still had the notes written down, and several possible changes recorded, though. He wanted to see it work. Alright, come in. Should be safe now, the voice called. Izuku shoved the door open and cautiously walked in, waving a skein of smoke away from his face. A girl with bright pink hair was stood on a table, cackling maniacally and being completely ignored by a grown adult, a man wearing heavy gauntlets and a helmet shaped like the blade of a digger truck. "You power loader, right?" Izuku asked. Well, it was half a squeak. Power loader was pretty cool. He was the only current pro hero to hold a full support license, one of less than half a dozen since the proper start of the hero system, and... I said that all out loud, didn't I? He asked. Power loader laughed. Don't worry about it, kid. Support has plenty of students who don't believe in internal monologues, and most are a lot more disturbing than that one. Power loader leaned in slightly, voice lowering a notch. One more student starts rambling about building a nuclear reactor in their basement, and I swear, but anyway. You're Izuku Midoriya, right? You have some support gear that you've built and one checked over. Yes, sir. I've got 2 pieces here. And some things I wanted to ask about, too. Power loader waved a hand. I'm supervising here for 2 hours more, so I've got plenty of time. Besides, always nice to see a hero student building their own gear. Even if we have to rebuild it all, at least you actually know what you want. Izuku followed Power Loader over to an empty table, the steel surface scarred and scored, and extracted his grapple harness from his bag, laying it on the surface. He followed that up with his shock knuckles and then his notebook, tapping it nervously on the surface. Power Loader picked up the grapple harness, inspecting it. Mobility, right. Let's see, harness goes around the torso. Winch and power system at the back. Needs refining, but we'll see. Dunno about the grapple dart, though. Solid design though, should be alright. You have some ideas to improve it, yeah? Izuku nodded, shakily. The brisk no-nonsense manner was a little bit unsettling, but given Izawa, maybe every UA teacher was like this. Yeah. I've got there's a sort of adhesive glue, for the dart. It becomes inert when electrified, so... reusable, right. Yeah, good idea. I know Izawa complains sometimes about needing to find anchor points for his scarf, although using it to swing around to begin with is, well, he's an adult. But yeah, I'll take a look at your formula for the adhesive. Have to rebuild the whole thing if we want to get that to work, but if you don't mind I'll get this tested as soon as I can. So long as it all clears I'll get it back to you. Now, these brass knuckle looking things, what do they do? They're like a low-powered taser. It pretty much just numbs the area around where they hit. They're too bulky, really, but I didn't really have the resources to. Built them in a cave with a box of scraps, right? It happens. They should be alright, but I'll get them tested too. And I can get you in touch with a few people who can improve these Hatsum. What have I said about personal space? Izuku was frozen stiff, gone utterly still as the pink-haired girl leaned around him, her arms slung casually across his shoulders, and her face less than an inch away from him. Dunno, boss. Wasn't listening, she said, far too cheerily for Izuku's liking. She studied his gear, turning to him. You built these, right? They're pretty boring. Power Loader mumbled something about poorly socialized geniuses. Izuku mumbled something about all he needed. Hatsum snatched his notebook out of his hands, bringing it up to his face with an exclamation of delight. Oh, this is more like it. Jesus Christ, Midoriya, what's in there? Do I need to tranquilize her? Power Loader whispered, his hand reaching for a dart gun lying on the desk a few feet away. Izuku consciously ignored the implications of the dart gun being so close at hand. It's, a sort of adhesive foam. It's supposed to help pin villains in place, or stick their limbs together, or anything really. I don't see why. This is great, Hatsum announced. Power Loader reached for the tranquilizer, his slow motions indicating an experience in catching people off guard. It's pretty simple, but really useful. And your formulas are nearly done, right? Greenie, you came up with this. Yes. Hatsum finally got away from him, practically jumping over to Power Loader. Look. Power Loader took the notebook with care, reading over it. Alright, May, I see what you mean. Midoriya, you couldn't get this to work. Izuku shuffled slightly. I got a version of it to work, but it only lasted for about 5 minutes and wasn't breathable. I didn't really have the best equipment plus. Yeah. Foam bullets, right. Snipe runs a course for that. You can get certified pretty quickly from UA. For students who have got quirks involving guns, you know. But yeah, we can work with this. Get you set up. I want it, Hatsum declared. Power Loader glanced at her. Hatsum, you're a first year. You really want. Yep. I'm better than most of the other students here, we both know it. You've got a bigger ego, that's for sure, Power Loader muttered. He looked back at Izuku. Choice is yours, kid. She's not lying, she's good at what she does. She's just a bit much sometimes. I'd recommend getting grouped with a support student, though. You've got good ideas and this way you can keep him in-house. Izuku looked at the girl, currently darting around the workshop collecting bits and pieces of gear, and sighed. Well, at least it wouldn't be boring. Alright, Hatsum. You've got a deal. May Hatsum had a grin almost as crazed as Izawa's, Izuku thought. Thinking back to Uraraka, maybe this was what making friends here would be like. Oh dear. Roughly 3 seconds after making his latest deal with the devil, Izuku ducked behind Power Loader, shamelessly hiding from Hatsum as she made grabby hands at him. Power Loader sighed. Well, at least she's got something to focus on now. Hatsum. Help me check his harness and knuckledisters, and then you can experiment as much as I'll let you. Oh. But that's boring. We all have to do boring things sometimes, Hatsum. Go and see what you can make of the formulas for the foam, if you want. Copy them down, then Midoriya can have his book back. Hatsum bounced away with Izuku's notebook in hand. Izuku shivered at the thought of it getting damaged, and Power Loader sighed, turning to him. Sorry about that, Midoriya, but there was no other way to distract her. She wants to set up a whole company, might be good for you, anyway. First call on any gear she comes up with. You're quirkless, right? Izuku swallowed against his dry throat, nodding. Power Loader tapped on the table, picking up Izuku's grapple harness and walking away with it. Yeah, thought so. We get quirkless students every so often. Usually they don't pass the entrance exam, or they're unlucky enough to get Izawa and quit still. Coming over here so early is a good sign. Lot of people look down on support gear, but given how potent it can be and you seem bright enough. Hatsum can be a nightmare, but she won't steer you wrong if you're careful. Hatsum returned, thrusting the notebook into Izuku's hands without a word and rushing off again, throwing a farewell over her shoulder. Power Loader chuckled. She's a menace, but it's good to see someone so enthusiastic. We'll get you gear in working condition as soon as we can, Midoriya. And, I dunno if someone said this to you yet, probably not, given how Izawa is, but good luck with the whole quirkless hero thing. You've managed the first step. Better keep walking, right? And with that odd pep talk given, Power Loader bent over Izuku's grappling harness. Izuku tucked his notebook back into his bag and headed out. This place was full of lunatics. He tried to ignore how that made him feel a warm sense of nostalgia that wasn't quite his. The second day at UA wasn't quite as bad as Izuku had assumed it might be. Or at least, it hadn't started that way. Izuku had been there for 3 whole hours, and nothing horrible had happened to him. Well, except for English and Maths class, which, despite being taught by pro heroes, were still high school English and Maths. He'd never really been anything more than decent at English, but the extra memories helped, actually. Good thing Jason spoke fluent Japanese, or he might have actual language difficulties at random times. That would be embarrassing. Still, he managed, and ended up eating lunch with Iida and Uraraka because he actually knew her, and Iida because Uraraka had walked to the train station with him after school on the first day, and had dragged Izuku along. Iida was still a little stiff, but he was pleasant enough. Uraraka was bright and cheerful enough for all 3 of them. It was a little blinding, honestly. It was. Nice. He still hadn't told anyone he was quirkless. Decent odds that Bakugo would be the one to drop that bombshell. Who knew, maybe he could make good enough friends with a couple of people that when it was revealed they'd still tolerate him. That would be nice. Hadn't worked with Bakugo, but maybe he was an outlier. Izuku glanced over to Bakugo, his face twisted into a look of absolute rage, as a boy with red hair chatted happily to him. Definitely an outlier. We've got foundational heroics next, right? I wonder who the teacher will be. Uraraka asked. Izuku tapped his chopsticks against his opposite forearm, repressing the urge to drum them against the table. All the teachers so far have been pro heroes, he said, so definitely a pro. But not all of them have been that well known. Yeah, I've never heard of Eraserhead. I could barely find anything about him online, either. Uraraka chirped. Izuku kept tapping. Eraserhead is an underground hero, so he stays out of the press and mostly works at night. He can look at people and cancel their quirks. His eyes were glowing red yesterday. That must be the indication that he's using his quirk. That's why he has the goggles, to hide who he's looking at. They were covered by the scarf, but I don't see why he didn't change his costume. Otherwise, I wonder how it works. Does it rely on his eyeballs? That muttering is really creepy, Midoriya. Uraraka said, tone entirely cheerful. Iida turned his head to her, murmuring something about rudeness even if she was right. Izuku toppled off his chair and almost took his eye out with the chopsticks. It's really cool too though, I didn't know any of that. Oh thank God, she had interrupted before he got into the paranoia-fueled sections of mumbling. They invariably became less of a cute hobby, and more of a highly concerning spiel on potential weaknesses, and horrible ways to cripple someone, and honestly Izuku was pretty sure that if anybody heard them he'd end up in a mental ward. None of his revolutionary plans had taken that into account, actually. Revolutionary Plan version 8, alternate MW. No. Not the time, anxiety. Thanks. I guess. You're welcome, she said, holding out a thumbs up to him. Izuku blinked at her but honestly couldn't find anything to say. Regardless of who the teacher is, Iida announced, we should leave soon. It is important to be punctual, of course. Oh of course, Izuku agreed, pulling himself to his feet using his chair and following as Iida strode out of the cafeteria. He's a bit intense, isn't he? Uraraka whispered, walking alongside Izuku and leaning across to him. Izuku shrugged. He's committed, he agreed softly, but I think his name sounds familiar, but I don't know why. Ha, Uraraka murmured, he kinda sounds like a rich kid, you know. From a rich family. I wonder if that's something. Izuku shrugged. Could be, he supposed, but he stopped speaking as he hurried to catch up with Iida, whose long strides had carried him ahead. They walked along in slightly awkward silence until they reached their classroom, filing in and waiting. Izuku took his seat, wincing as Bakugo walked in and gave him a poisonous glare, but nothing was said. His classmates started whispering theories about who would be teaching increasingly outlandish theories, ranging from a rotating cast of teachers to reformed villains, and Izuku sat, fingers drumming against his leg. The fact that Kaken was directly in front of him and Izuku could see the muscles standing out on his neck with his eternal, seething fury, didn't really help his anxiety, Izuku had to admit. The door flew open with an echoing crash, and Izuku definitely wasn't the only one to jump. I am here. Boomed a familiar voice, coming through the door like a normal person. All Might strode through the door in a manner completely unlike a normal person, wide grin in place, blonde spikes of hair immaculately placed, cloak flowing heroically behind him as he walked, crimson red bodysuit vibrant. Izuku nearly had a panic attack as Clark flashed before his eyes, teeth bared, fingers digging into his throat and prying a battered helmet away from his face, blue eyes glowing with murderous intent. All Might didn't look much like Clark. Wrong facial structure, wrong hair color, the bodysuit was red with blue cape, rather than blue with red cape, but they had a similar aura. An impression of complete confidence, of unassailable power. Izuku squeezed his left eye shut to control its twitching, left hand coming up to massage at his throat. Forcing the panic back down, covered by the excited yelling of his classmates. At least, he hoped it had been covered. Trying to explain that he was having a flashback to someone else's memories of Flashside, if you would probably wouldn't go down too well. Alright. Welcome to the most important class in UA High. You can think of it as Heroing 101. Here you'll learn the basics of being a pro hero. And to begin battle. Training. Izuku missed the days when he would be able to just fanboy over All Might. His little flashback had sort of ruined that ability. It was getting annoying. On a possibly related note, Izuku's count of dreams in which he was beaten with a crowbar was now up to 35. Except there had also been laughing from Kaken as well as the Joker involved. Medication looked more and more attractive every day. Still. But before we get onto that, there's a key part of being a hero that you need to learn. And that's looking good. All Might boomed, throwing out a dramatic arm. Slots in the wall he pointed at opened up, cases sliding out, each one numbered. These costumes have been created based on your Quirk registration forms and the designs you submitted before starting here. Suda, pick them up, get changed and meet me at Training Ground Beta. It's time to get started. So enthusiastic. Despite himself, Izuku found a smile forming on his face as he collected his costume. This day was turning out pretty great so far. He found an isolated space in the changing rooms, grabbing one of the few cubicles before anyone else could. More paranoia, although given his past anyway, and opened the case. The crimson helmet sat on top of everything else, staring up at him with blank eyes, and his heart beat loud in his ears, a heavy thumping. He reached out slowly, reverently, running his fingers over the hard plastic surface. "This is it, Jason," he whispered. "This is where it really starts." He picked up the helmet with both hands, setting it gently on the bench, and plucked up the note underneath. "Midoriya," he read, cutting it pretty fine with the gear, "but it all seems good. I replaced the power sources to make them smaller and more efficient, and made some upgrades to the grapple, but otherwise it's all on you, kid. Hatsune says she'll have replacements ready in 3 days. I'll try and make sure they don't explode on you, so give it a week. That girl is far too talented at causing explosions. Power loader." Izuku sniffled, touched. "Thanks, power loader," he whispered, tucking the note into his pocket before he pulled out the costume, changing quickly. Cargo pants and a long-sleeved shirt, the Kevlar plastic composite vest buckling closely around his torso. The grapple harness went over it, an unfortunate effect of the still too large winch motor, but the leather jacket he pulled on over that covered it, sleeves rolled up to his elbows. The shock knuckles he attached to his belt for the moment, and the black gauntlets and vambraces clicked into place over his forearms, solidly reassuring. The only color other than the brown of his jacket was his armored boots, plates covering from ankle to knee. In homage to his normal red trainers, they were the same crimson as his helmet. He scooped that up and slowly lowered it onto his head. His designs had been followed almost to the letter, his breath echoing softly as he clicked the latches near the back of his jaw shut, closing the helmet around him. "Alright Izuku," he whispered to himself, "time to be a goddamn hero. You all look so cool." All Might roared, holding out the most enthusiastic thumbs up Izuku had ever seen. Well, at least he was a lot more animated than Izawa. Izuku could feel his fanboy energy returning. And he was right, there were a lot of cool costumes around. More armor than Izuku had expected, actually. Aoyama, the blonde boy with the laser, was wearing something that looked like a suit of knight armor from a fantasy video game, and another of their class, Izuku suspected Iida, based on height and width, was about a recolor away from violating intellectual rights of the old mobile suit Gundam anime. On the other hand, there were also a lot of skin-tight costumes. The Writ who'd been talking to Kakin earlier wasn't even wearing a shirt, which Izuku personally thought was a pretty wild choice. At least it made him look a little less out of place. "Hey, is it you, Midoriya?" Izuku half turned at Uraraka's voice, immediately turning most of the rest of the way in embarrassment. "Ah yeah, it's me," he said. At least his helmet would hide his bright blush. Uraraka waved. "Ah, that's so cool. I wouldn't have thought it was your style, though." This girl was a master of backhanded compliments, and it didn't even seem intentional. What a wild child. Uraraka put a hand on the back of her head, smiling in an embarrassed fashion. "I should have been more specific with my design, though I didn't mean for the bodysuit to be skin-tight." Over his brief moment of absolute embarrassment at seeing her, Izuku made a quick assessment. "It's supposed to be a spacesuit, right? Pink and black, with armored pink boots and a clear visored helmet. It had a space theme vaguely. Personally he would have liked a lot more armor, but maybe that was just Jason coming through. Style was great, but body armor stopped bullets and knives a lot more effectively." And he was turning into a grump. Great. He did notice that Uraraka didn't have any gloves at all. He supposed it made sense, since her quirk was touch-based, but maybe she should have tried reinforced gloves with fingertips cut out. Well, it was a first edition, he guessed. Might get changed in the future. "Sir?" Presumably Iida said, confirming Izuku's guess. "This is one of the fake cities from the entrance exam. Are we going to be conducting urban battles again?" All Might laughed, setting his fists on his hips and beaming at them. "Not quite, young Iida. I'm going to move you ahead of that. Most villain fights that you see on the news are flashy, in public. But the most dastardly villains will wait inside their lairs to be confronted or be interrupted in a backroom deal, a home invasion, or some other deed. So, for this you will be split into 2-person teams, and will fight in indoor battle training, heroes against villains." All Might was bombarded with questions immediately. Izuku, distracted by relief that they weren't going to be doing anything like, for instance, single combat in an empty arena setting. Why did that feel like a premonition? Only caught one question, from Bakugo. "How much can we hurt the other team?" There were a lot of ways to say that. Anxious, worried not to overstep bounds. Cautious, because you didn't have a great grasp on your power. Inquisitive, interested in the specifics. And the way Bakugo said it. Hungry. Izuku didn't even need to think to know that his fingers had automatically twitched towards his hip, to where a pistol should lie. God help whoever went up against Kakin, he was practically frothing at the mouth at the prospect of violence. Alright, enough questions. Young Ida, we will be picking teams by random draw. Young Aoi Rosu, the winners will be obvious. Young Uraraka, no one will be expelled. And young Aoyama, your cape is indeed magnificent. Izuku wondered if All Might hadn't noticed Kaken's question or had chosen not to address it. Either way was fine with him, really. Ida brought a hand up to his chin, framing his jaw in armored fingers. Is there not a better way to choose teams than random draw? It seems very disorganized. Izuku perked up slightly from his position just slightly left of Ida. A lot of times heroes have to work with other heroes they don't really know, so this replicates that. Plus we don't really know each other, so it makes it fair, I guess. Of course. Ida exclaimed, with that intimidatingly loud voice of his. He bowed to All Might, a perfect 90-degree bend at the waist. My apologies. Think nothing of it. All Might boomed back, pointing at them. Now let's get to it. The exercise is pretty simple, really. 2 teams, hero and villain. The villain team will be defending a bomb or missile, whichever you want, as though they're trying to set it off. The hero team will have to assault the building and either capture and restrain the villain team or retrieve the bomb. The villains win if they hold out for 10 minutes or they capture and restrain the villains. Very simple. But just remember, you're up against people now, not robots, so at least try to show some restraint, young Bakugo. I will halt the match if any serious injuries are sustained, to answer your earlier question. Now, let's draw teams. They drew, forming 10 teams. Izuku suppressed the urge to try and analyze every single person he saw. If they were only facing one set of opponents, it could be a distraction. He chewed on his lip under his helmet, shoving his hands into his pockets to hide the fact that they were shaking with an almost obsessive mania. You have 3 years here, Izuku. You don't have to jump the gun, he mouthed to himself, closing his eyes long enough to compose himself. His composure was almost immediately lost when someone tapped him on the shoulder and he jumped, hopping to the side. A sort of squeak left his lips, but luckily his helmet muffled it. The person who had tapped him tilted her head slightly, her expression marred by just the faintest hint of confusion. Are you alright, Midoriya? She asked. Izuku waved his hands, swallowing. Oh? Yeah, fine. Just nervous. Acid, right. Call me Tsayu, she said, a faint noise following. It sounded almost like a soft ribbit to Izuku. And she could jump some sort of frog mutation, maybe. He managed not to say it out loud, better to keep it inside, prevent any of his classmates from getting an early advantage. That paranoia was really kicking in these days, huh? All Might reached into a box. The villain team will be Team C. Bakugo sneered, fire crackling on his palms. His partner, the short boy with purple orbs for hair, Mineta, cringed away from him. Izuku absolutely did not blame the kid. And for the heroes, Team F. Team F, Shadow Todoroki and Tsuru Hagakure. Invisible Girl and Izuku sincerely hoped that only her boots and glove were visible, because she had a bodysuit tailored to her powers, and therefore also invisible, and not that she was just naked, because if it was the second, then what the fuck, Yue and someone who Izuku had a sneaking suspicion about. Todoroki had demonstrated a great deal of control over ice. Even his costume was just a shirt and pants with a thick coating of ice over his left side, but Izuku had suspicions. He was fairly sure that he'd heard the name Todoroki before, and not in relation to an ice quirk. Still, Todoroki had come second in the assessment test yesterday, if Izuku remembered rightly. Kaken might be about to have a nasty wake-up call. Under his helmet, Izuku grinned. Alright, All Might called. Villains, you get 5 minutes to set up before the heroes come after you, so off you go. And do your best, plus ultra. The 2 teams who would be competing split away, All Might leading the rest of them to a ROM filled with monitors, all of them showing camera angles inside the building the exercise would take place in. Izuku looked over them, wondering. I wonder if the building will survive, he said quietly. A soft croak from his right reminded him that he wasn't alone. What was that, Midoriya? Ah. But it couldn't hurt, really. Kaken Bakugo, he's competitive. Really competitive. And he's got a powerful quirk, he's not going to back down. But Todoroki looks like he's got a really strong quirk too, so if they really fight with their all, there's going to be a lot of property damage, Asui mused, one finger pressed thoughtfully to the corner of her mouth, dark eyes crinkled in thought. You called Bakugo Kaken, Ribbit. Do you know him? Ah yeah. We went to school together. Our parents are friends. So you're his friend, yeah? Asked another classmate, the redheaded boy who wasn't wearing a shirt, for some reason. Kirishima. Izuku thought that was right. He swallowed again, chewing his lip in thought. Were they friends? 10 months ago he was likely to have said yes. But, no? No, we aren't, he said, his voice unwavering. Kirishima looked taken aback for a moment. Izuku was tempted to tell them what Kaken was really like. Tell them that he considered friendships ended when he was told to jump off a roof and pray he got a quirk in the next life. But no. He'd need to explain just why Kakin had said that. Besides, maybe Bakugo would see the error of his ways and become a decent person while at UA. Izuku doubted it, but he was an optimist at heart. It's complicated, he said, picking his words carefully. He's really driven and strong, so he can be a bit abrasive. In the same way holding your hand against a bell sander was a little abrasive, admittedly. But they'd probably learn that themselves soon. We were friends when we were little, but not anymore. Calling him Kakin is just old habits. Old habits. Right, Asui murmured, riveting softly. Izuku refused to look at her, instead turning to the cameras. He brought his left hand up and tucked his elbow against his chest, resting his chin in his hand. But he's strong. You'll see, he said quietly, you'll definitely see. On camera Kakin turned, snarling something at a shaking Mineta. Izuku frowned. Kakin was intimidating, yes, but Mineta looked on the verge of tears. Did they have a coward in the class? Not a good first start. Todoroki stood outside the building with Hagakure a few feet away, though she seemed nervous too. Hard to be sure with the invisibility, but the way her hands moved suggested that she was shifting from foot to foot. Anxious movement. Maybe it was just that Todoroki was a cold person. Izuku hadn't seen him exchange more than a single word with anyone so far. Mineta was less of a mystery. Kakin was definitely frothing at the mouth to fight. Mineta had probably suggested that they lie in wait for the hero team. There was no chance of that. Not after Kakin had been embarrassed by not coming first in the assessment test. You're quite insightful, Midoriya, Asui said. Izuku jolted again. Did I? Say it out loud. Yes. But quietly, I think I'm the only one who heard. So, you think Bakugo will go to fight the heroes? Izuku sighed. Yeah. He's always been his quirk is strong. Flashy. He's always been the top dog. He even came first in the entrance exam, boasted about it for weeks. Todoroki having such a strong quirk, Kakin will be feeling fragile. Why yeah. Fragile. So he'll want to go out and prove he's the best. Izuku paused, looking at the screen, studying the snarl etched onto Kakin's face, the way his fingers flexed as though choking the life out of some poor person. No. He needs to go out and prove he's the best. You don't sound like you're rooting for him, Asui murmured. Izuku shrugged. It's complicated, he offered, weakly. All Might cleared his throat. Alright, students. It's time to begin. On your marks, get set. Ready. And go. Bakugo waved a hand at Mineta, mouth still moving, and started towards the stairs. Izuku frowned. Mineta was pulling the orbs out of his hair and sticking them around the room. Izuku narrowed his eyes in thought. Wonder what they do. He bounced off them, so I wouldn't expect them to be adhesive, but they're sticking to the walls. Izuku bit his lip to keep his mumbling inside. Later. He'd have time to nerd out later. Hagakure was nowhere to be seen, but Todoroki had walked into the entrance. He laid a single hand against the wall, and ice blossomed on every surface of the building. Izuku sucked in a soft gasp at the display of power, white frost crackling across the walls and running through the building. 2 flights of stairs up. Bakugo halted as his feet were glued to the ground by ice that spread up to his ankles, his mouth opening. What's he saying? Kirishima asked, waving a hand in the air. Don't these cameras have audio? All Might shrugged. No audio, sorry. I can hear him through my earpiece. Both teams got 2 before the exercise, so they can communicate. But mostly it's just cursing. All Might winced, tapping at his ear. Very loud cursing. Asui croaked quietly, deep in her throat. It looks like Bakugo won't get a chance to do anything, she said, the class following Todoroki's progress up the stairs. Izuku saw the faint smirk curling the edge of his lips and winced. We'll see, he said, very quietly. He could see what was going to happen. Todoroki was far too confident. He was barely 2 feet away from Bakugo when Bakugo made his move. Both palms blazed with fire, ice shattered around his legs, and Izuku saw Todoroki's visible eye widen, moments before a savage right hook caught him in the jaw and knocked him off his feet. Holy crap! Someone exclaimed. Izuku leaned forwards. Kakin is wearing armored boots, so he was only a little inconvenienced by the cold. Plus, the armor meant that he could blast himself free without worrying about doing so much damage, and get a sucker punch in. Todoroki went with the punch, though, Yoi Rosa said, chin resting in the palm of her hand as she squinted at the camera. If he didn't, it would have been much worse. Fractured jaw, probably. Kakin had a lot of muscle, hit hard, and that punch had been well placed. Even if Todoroki had rolled with the blow and bled off much of the impact that had to have rattled him, especially since Bakugo was wearing heavy gloves under the massive grenade-shaped things that wrapped around his forearms. Honestly, Izuku was a little worried to think about what might be in there. Todoroki's had some training before, Izuku whispered. He went down too smoothly, even surprised. And the wall of ice grew from Todoroki's falling form, bursting through the smoke and rushing towards Bakugo. If it had contacted it would have crushed Kakin against the wall, but he jumped backwards, palms flaring to gain distance, mouth moving as he shouted something, eyes wild. Todoroki rose to his feet, a bruise already forming along his jawline, and thrust out his right hand. He always attacks with his right hand, Izuku muttered, frowning. There was something there, something he was missing. And speaking of missing, I wonder where Hagakure is, he murmured. That would be anticlimactic, wouldn't it? Probably serve Todoroki and Bakugo right, although maybe Todoroki was causing a distraction on purpose. Izuku didn't know him well enough to guess. Another wall of ice bloomed from Todoroki's hand, rushing down the corridor to meet Kakin, who put both hands together and blew it away. Izuku saw Todoroki flinch, and the stripe of crimson that formed along his cheek from a flying shard of ice. Bakugo swung his arms behind him and blew himself forwards. Izuku could imagine the berserk roar leaving his throat. Kakin launched through the air, his right fist coming back for a massive blow. Todoroki swept his hand, a wall of ice forming between them. Bakugo smashed through it with another massive explosion, and landed in empty space. Izuku saw him stagger, without the resistance he expected. Todoroki, having stepped to the side, drove his left fist into the side of Kakin's head. Ice splintered on impact and Kakin staggered, half turning, Todoroki pressing his advantage with a straight punch to the nose. Blood spattered crimson and Bakugo swung his right arm around, clubbing Todoroki across the shoulder with his grenade-shaped gauntlet. They're just beating on each other down there, Izuku murmured. They were both tough enough that it would take a heavy blow to put either of them down, but now they were brawling. Todoroki had sheathed his right hand in ice, hammering blows home, but Kakin was blocking with his gauntlets, protecting his arms from damage. Neither of them could get enough space to properly set up for a big attack. Out of the corner of his eye, Izuku saw a pair of boots sneak across the ice and grinned under his helmet. Asui, he said quietly, look at the third camera from the right, bottom side. Call me Tsayu, she said, ignoring the way Izuku flapped at the concept of calling somebody by their first name. Izuku saw her head move to follow the camera. Hagakure is sneaking in, she said, before almost absently adding, I wonder if they agreed on it beforehand. Izuku shrugged. I don't think so. But does it really matter? Asui riveted, although there was something about it that sounded like agreement. Who do you think will win? She asked. Izuku looked over the fighting pair, frowning. He saw something it almost looked like Todoroki's breath was coming out misty, vaporous. Interesting. Kakin's explosions come from his sweat. He sweats something like nitroglycerin. So when they started out the cold slowed him down, but the longer they fight for, the stronger he'll get. That's so manly. Kirishima cheered. Izuku blinked at him. Oh yeah. Manly. Right. But Todoroki can probably win if he can get distance. I'm not sure, but I think the Kakin gets tired from the explosions. They wear his wrists out if he goes too long. That's why he's just punching Todoroki in the face, Asui said. Izuku nodded. Yeah. Kakin swung 2 blows into Todoroki's raised arms, forcing him to keep a defense up before he flicked both hands outwards. The twin explosions burst in the air, smoke and steam from melted ice, filling the corridor and fogging the air. Izuku squinted at the cameras. Clever, he murmured, although I wonder what another sneak attack, probably. But how does Todoroki defend? The smoke cleared just enough that they could see Todoroki, in the middle of the corridor. He was shivering slightly, Izuku realized, his hands shaking just a little. Bakugo was nowhere to be seen, Todoroki turning on his heel to look around himself. Ice crawled along his arms, almost like it was automatically armoring him. He's not as used to brawling as Kakin, Izuku whispered. If he was Bakugo, how would he? There were rooms off the corridor. Easy to duck into. And given how much force Bakugo could produce with his explosions, he's going to come through the wall. What was that, Midoriya? Izuku opened his mouth to repeat himself and dust clouded across the camera view, flames licking at the edge of the clouds. Bakugo burst through his freshly made door, tackling Todoroki around the middle and sending them both to the ground, straddling the other boy and raining punches into his face. Christ almighty, I can't believe this is still going on, Izuku whispered, his accent turning slightly harsher as Jason came through more strongly. This was well beyond an exercise at this point. Why hadn't All Might broken it up? Todoroki had crossed his arms over his face, trying to protect himself from the punches raining down, but unless he got free soon it was all over. He couldn't take a beating like that. Kakin wasn't laughing, his face contorted into a snarl of effort, clearly enraged. It made him sloppy. He brought both hands up for a 2-handed smash downwards, and Todoroki lashed out, his fist slamming into Kakin's nose again. Bakugo reeled back, blood smearing across his face, broken nose almost certain, and Todoroki pressed a hand against the ground. Bakugo saw it just in time, blasting himself away as a flower of ice spikes grew under Todoroki's hand, unfolding outwards in a series of circles, every one filled with icicles. Izuku saw one catch Bakugo across the arm and knock him to the ground, not sharp enough to pierce skin. Obviously, Todoroki still had more control than that. Todoroki climbed to his feet, staggering, blood running down his face from a cut over his eyebrow. Bakugo rose too, bringing one arm up. His arm shook, his fingers quivering, they were both reaching their limits. Izuku couldn't believe All Might hadn't called it off yet. From the corner of his eye, in the camera watching over the bomb, Izuku saw a pair of boots enter through a window and skirt the room, carefully avoiding every ball on the ground. Mineta was pressed against a closed door, staring through it with a terrified expression. All Might suddenly started. "Young Bakugo, don't." Bakugo yelled something, reached up with a shaking hand, and yanked a pin on the right hand grenade gauntlet. Todoroki brought his hands up in front of his face, ice flooding the corridor before an explosion that shook the whole training ground, and the camera went black, fizzing out. The buzzer sounded and Izuku twitched his head to the bomb room, seeing Hagakure clamped onto the bomb, only her boots visible. "Hero team wins," All Might shouted, moments before he sprinted out of the room, and Izuku let out a long breath. That couldn't be a good sign. "Holy crap," someone whispered, "you think they killed each other?" "Nah," Kirishima said, though he didn't sound convinced. All Might wouldn't let it go that far. Right. Probably not with Hagakure and Mineta in the building, Izuku thought. Decent chance that the buildings were made with lightweight materials too, to lessen the risk. Hard to tell though. He wished the cameras were still working, it would be interesting to see the aftermath. Get a better understanding of the damage. There was a heavy thud outside the doors as All Might returned, strolling in with his grin still firmly in place. "No need to worry, class," he boomed. Young Bakugo and Todoroki merely became a little overenthusiastic. "Recovery girl will sort them out, no problems." Izuku understood the appeal of All Might's always smiling aesthetic, but that news delivered with that expression made him look like a maniac. Oh god, this school would be the death of him. Mineta wobbled in behind All Might, his knees still shaking, and a pair of gloves and boots followed him. Now then, the hero team won. And the MVP of the exercise is young Hagakure. The gloves waved wildly. All Might threw out a delighted thumbs up. "Now? Who can tell me why I picked Hagakure as MVP?" "Sir?" The girl said well, it was more like a declaration. Izuku was strongly reminded of Iidai Kan. Although Bakugo and Todoroki were much more active, they became bogged down in fighting each other. In addition, Bakugo abandoned his objective in order to confront the heroes, and although Todoroki's first attack was powerful, it ignored his ally, and he struggled to adapt when it failed. If this was a real situation, both of them might have brought down the building and set the bomb off, using extremely powerful attacks while indoors. Although Mineta remained by the bomb, he was distracted by the fighting. Hagakure assessed the situation and acted correctly on that assessment. From the way Hagakure waved, Izuku suspected that the assessment had been less of a cold calculation, and more of an instinct to stay away from the two maniacs, trying to murder each other, but really it worked out to the same thing. All Might stared at the girl who had spoken for a moment, as though surprised. "Oh yes, of course. Very well said, young Yaoi Rosu." The girl nodded, unsmiling. "Of course. An excellent grasp of the basics is the best way to become a top hero." That excellent grasp didn't seem to include sensible costume design, since she was wearing pretty much a red swimsuit, and not a very covering one, given that it bared most of her torso. Izuku was inclined to call it indecent. Maybe she had a quirk that required a lot of open skin. Still, wouldn't have flown back in Gotham. Asking for a bullet to the chest or to freeze. Gotham was a cold city. Anyway, All Might started, recovering from his apparent bafflement at the paragraph Yaoi Rosu had dropped on him. "Let's move on to the next building. The teams will be heroes. Team E. And villains will be Team J. Team C, Mizo Shoji and Uraraka against Team J, Fumikichi Tokoyami and Yuga Aoyama, the laser boy." This might be interesting, although Izuku thought that Team J had the advantage. Uraraka had an incredibly powerful quirk, but Tokoyami's quirk appeared to be made of shadow to begin with, and could possibly fly. That said, Izuku didn't know Shoji's quirk. He had 3 arms coming from each shoulder, but that was no guarantee. These days a lot of people had vestigial mutations. Izuku suspected that his own unusual hair color might be one, for instance. They waited patiently as the two teams split off into their building. Similarly to Bakugo and Mineta, Team J chose to place their bomb in the middle of the building, but they stayed close to it. They didn't seem to be communicating, although Aoyama was clearly speaking. And striking a pose. It was very dramatic. "I wonder what his quirk is." Asui said, watching as Shoji stepped into the building just ahead of Uraraka. He paused near the entrance and his arms shifting, the hands morphing into something that looked like ears as he spread them. Some sort of sensory quirk, Izuku murmured. And it wasn't as though he'd have problems in combat either, because he was absolutely enormous, slightly taller than Iida and massively built. Izuku watched, fascinated, as one of the ears turned into a mouth that leaned down to Uraraka. She nodded, that fierce determination on her face again. It was as terrifying now as it had been on the day of the entrance exam. He must have heard them, Izuku muttered as the hero team set off. Tokoyami and Aoyama were in separate rooms now, Aoyama still monologuing. Tokoyami had turned off all of the lights in his room, only the yellow glint of his beak visible. The shadows seemed to move around him. Does his quirk use existing shadows, or does it create them? Izuku wondered aloud. He caught the glance Asui sent him, although she seemed more amused than anything else. A heavy hand dropped on his shoulder, and Izuku barely suppressed his first instinct to jump away. So, bro, Kirishima said, grinning, who do you think will win this one? His teeth were oddly sharp, Izuku noticed, like a mouth crammed with shark teeth. He was friendly, though, so Izuku forced down his paranoia to reply. I think the heroes have the advantage at the moment. I think Shoji can hear Aoyama and Tokoyami, so the heroes can try to sneak around. And they're working together better. The villain team might be communicating over their earpieces, in which case splitting apart would be a better choice, as it allows them to attack from two sides at once, Yoirozu said, apparently overhearing. Izuku strongly doubted that but said nothing, feeling the stutter that would emerge if he tried to say anything. Kirishima took his hand from Izuku's shoulder, slamming it into his other hand. Either way, I'm pumped to see it go down after the first match. That was a wild one. Yeah, I'm kinda glad that two of the strongest people in the class took each other out, Izuku admitted. He had to admit, he didn't think he could have beaten either of them. Maybe with a sneak attack, but sometimes there was just no way around brute force. He could have had a chance against Kakin, but Todoroki. Depending on his reaction speed, maybe, an ambush, but then he was betting it all on a single shot. Izuku shook his head. They're on the same floor now. Asui croaked quietly beside him. It looks like they're going straight for the bomb. Kirishima clapped his hands together, flexing his biceps apparently without thinking. Oh, yeah. Straight in, so manly. Shoji must know about the ambush, but I wonder who'll face who, Izuku said, eyes locking on the screen and a frown wrinkling his forehead. Aoyama could only fire his laser for a few seconds yesterday, so if Uraraka can get her hands on him, she might be able to take him out of the fight. He can still move by firing his laser, but only in short bursts, and he won't be very controlled. Izuku chewed his lip, trying to reason his way through a strategy. Personally, he'd be inclined to just go around, there was no point in fighting, but maybe everyone was pumped up from seeing Kakin and Todoroki beat the crap out of each other. Plus there was the time limit to remember. Izuku noticed that Uraraka had a roll of tape in her hands. Tape? He said aloud. All Might must have overheard. Capture tape, young Midoriya. Each team has some, although our first participants made no use of it. If you can secure your opponent's arms in it, they are considered captured and are out of the match. Oh my god, All Might spoke to me, Izuku whispered, shaking with freshly renewed fanboy energy. He was not ready for this. Not even remotely. Kirishima bumped his arm. Hey, they're about to start, look. Most of the lights in the corridor had flickered off, leaving it in a sort of dim twilight as Tokoyami emerged. Aoyama remained in his own room, although the way he was posing made Izuku think that he was more likely to jump into the fight than remain. Tokoyami's dark cloak lifted at the back, two arms crawling out before a shape of shadows uncoiled itself, half bird and half human. Izuku saw Uraraka flinch before she dropped into a rudimentary combat pose, Shoji taking a place in front of her. Words were exchanged, but neither side was about to back down. Don't try and levitate him, Uraraka, Izuku whispered. He hadn't seen any definite side effects, but he'd seen how tired she had been during the entrance exam. Being levitated was unlikely to faze Tokoyami, just a waste of effort. Tokoyami's shadow surged forwards, blunt-clawed fingers reaching at Shoji. Shoji lunged in return, arms spread wide, and grappled with it, fingers interlocking, his other arms trying to wrap around the shadow, fingers sliding through shadow as it moved and twisted around him. It's more like a mist than a real thing, Izuku analyzed, eyes raking across the shadow. It looks like it can be solid as it wants to. It needs to stay anchored to keep Shoji contained, maybe, but it's struggling. That means that Aoyama will need to stop Uraraka. If Shoji can keep the shadow grappled, Uraraka can use the tape to capture Tokoyami. But what if Tokoyami knows how to fight? How strong is he? How would he react to being weightless? There were too many variables. Too many options, too many unknowns. Izuku bit his lip, squashing down his almost instinctive need to know. Know your enemy, the endless mantra of the Batman, and one that Jason had learned through hard experience. Wasn't helping at the moment though, more like feeding his nervousness. Uraraka ducked past Shoji and sprinted for the bomb room, and Tokoyami's shadow lifted Shoji off the ground and slammed him into a wall, stunning him enough that he let it go. It recoiled away from him, moving without regard for normal human physics, and swung towards Uraraka. At the same time Aoyama stepped out of his room, a beaming smile on his face, and his pose pointing the wide lens of his support gear belt directly at her. Izuku saw him say something an attack name maybe, or boast before the laser burst from his waist. Uraraka, distracted by the shadow, caught her foot and tripped. Aoyama has a tendency towards firing without thinking, Izuku said, remembering the entrance exam, and it might have cost their team here. The laser blasted over Uraraka, missed Tokoyami's shadow by an inch, and blew a sizable chunk from the wall it hit. Izuku, watching Tokoyami, saw him flinch and his shadow recoil. Aoyama cut his laser off, bending over to reach a hand to his stomach, and Uraraka rolled to her feet, slapped a hand on his breastplate, and flung the suddenly weightless missile at Tokoyami. Tokoyami ducked, right into Shoji's bear hug, and Uraraka sprinted through the door. Shoji couldn't hold on as Tokoyami's shadow regained strength, but it was too late. Hero team wins. I wonder who'll be MVP, Kirishima said. Gotta be Uraraka, right? Taking out Aoyama like that. Shoji found the villains though, argued Kirishima's team partner, the girl with hot pink skin Ashido, Izuku thought. She had a point as well. It could be Tokoyami as well, Izuku said, somehow preventing his voice from croaking. Kirishima peered at him. You think? Even though he lost. He might have won if Aoyama hadn't missed his laser. He was holding Uraraka and Shoji off at the same time, Izuku argued. Kirishima folded his arms, looking thoughtful. Yeah, I see that. Tokoyami and Aoyama didn't work together, though, which is a key part of being a hero, added Yaoirozu, having apparently been listening. It looked like Tokoyami's shadow was affected by the light of the laser, though, so it would be hard to work directly with each other. True, but being able to work around weaknesses is part of being a hero. You never know who you'll be working with, so being able to mitigate the downsides of your quirk is vital. Aoyama and Tokoyami didn't do that, other than staying apart. Personally, Izuku felt like it was a little overblown. In theory you might need to work with anyone in the field, but in practice if there was absolutely no organization, then things were already going wrong enough that you were just likely to make it worse. Still, he could always be wrong. Well, I suppose. But in that case, it should be Shoji as MVP. Yaoirozu nodded. Yes, I agree with Midoriya. Uraraka was lucky. Shoji led them to the villain team and managed to distract Tokoyami effectively. Very well reasoned, young heroes. Yes, I agree that all of the participants did well, but I will indeed give the MVP to young Shoji. Congratulations. All Might boomed from the front of the class. Shoji looked baffled, but seemed pleased nonetheless. All Might thrust one fist into the air and the other into his box of teams. Now then. Match 3. The villains will be Team B. And the heroes will be Team D. Team B, Masahiro Jiro and Tanya Iida. Team D, Momo Yaoirozu and Denki Kaminari. Iida had speed. That was absolutely unarguable. Jiro, comparatively, had a tail. He was also wearing a karate outfit as his costume, which made Izuku suspect that he knew karate. In fact, Izuku was hoping he knew karate, because as someone who had woken up 10 months ago knowing kung fu, he'd really like to see an example from this world, as opposed to what he remembered of Jason's. Yaoirozu was possibly the person in the room who intimidated Izuku the most, and he'd been intimidated a lot over his life, so he knew what that was like. She just gave off an aura of competence that set off almost every danger warning he had, and her quirk was he didn't really know what it was. Summoning. Creating. Who knew? He certainly didn't, but either way someone who could casually pull a cannon out of their stomach was someone to keep an eye on. Kaminari hadn't really used his quirk yesterday, so Izuku didn't have much of a clue about what it was. He had a lightning bolt dyed into his hair, but that could be a style thing. For the moment Izuku classed him under possible electric quirk. That reminded him, he should get an actual taser to go with his shock knuckles. And maybe some flashbangs, make the best use of his helmet. But he could deal with that later. For today he'd have to make do with his grapple, his knuckles and a handful of bullets. The villain team made their way into the building, with Iida already working to clear the area. It made sense if he was fast, then he'd want a clear area to work in. Stumbling over an obstacle at high speed was the bane of every speedster, even if it was hilarious for someone who wasn't involved. The hero team loitered outside to wait. Kaminari was clearly checking Yaoirozu out, even if he was a lot more subtle than Mineta had been earlier. Not exactly heroic behavior, no matter what her costume was made of or looked like. Still, he focused ahead as the timer went and the two of them headed into the building, so Izuku would give him credit for that. Yaoi Rozu did something. She was facing away from the camera, so Izuku could only guess that she was reaching for something on her torso, and came away with a baton and a riot shield. Izuku blinked. That she makes things, he said. He half-registered Kirishima and Asui leaning in to listen, but mostly he was focused on Yaoi Rozu. She made a cannon and a bicycle yesterday, or she pulled them from somewhere, but warp quirks are rare still. Producing things is even rarer, unless it's simple wonder what limits it has, if it even has a limit. If it doesn't, she has the right equipment for every situation, as long as she can think of it. But then why a baton and shield? Why not a net or adhesive glue, or unless she isn't sure what she needs? If she knows how to use them, then. I guess you think Yaoi Rozu and Kaminari are gonna win, then? Kirishima asked cheerfully. Izuku twitched slightly, hunching a little. Nobody had said anything bad about his mumbling, exactly, but years of being told to shut up didn't go away in an instant. Yes. I think so. I don't know enough about their quirks to really tell. Ijiro could have something really strong or really useful, and Iida has a good quirk. He's quick, and I think that he's stronger than normal. I saw him kicking through robots at the entrance exam, and even if they were made of lightweight materials, it would have hurt a normal person. Maybe his shoes were heavy enough, but to get to that sort of speed, his bones must be reinforced. I don't know. But he's cleared away as much of the rubble and debris as he can, and the bomb is placed at the end of the corridor, so he can use his speed. I wonder what Kaminari can do. I think he has an electric quirk, Ribbit. He said something about it earlier, Asui volunteered. Izuku nodded. That could be a problem, if both Iida and Ijiro need to fight him up close. I wonder if Iida's armor is insulated. Asui shrugged, her expression blank. Izuku suspected that she just wasn't very emotive to begin with, or it could be an aspect of her quirk. He still wanted to ask about it, but this wasn't the time or the place. The hero team was proceeding up the stairs, moving quickly, the time limit pushing them on, probably. Yaoi Rozu had put her baton into the same hand as her shield, and was pulling something else from her stomach. Izuku saw something slip from her hand to the ground. He let out a soft huff of laughter when he saw it. What was that? Kirishima asked, leaning forwards. I saw her drop something. It was a ball bearing, Izuku said, smiling. Iida might be in trouble here, but the audacity of it undercut any concern he had felt. And Iida was wearing armor, that should cushion the blow, assuming it had been made with sense. No guarantees, of course, but it should be fine. The hero team had reached the level where the bomb was stored, and Iida walked out to meet them, his arms waving. Izuku wondered what he was saying, something dramatic given the waving arms and the posing, right arm lifted and finger pointed. All Might was chuckling to himself, so probably something unintentionally hilarious. Iida dropped into a runner's stance, hands pressing against the ground. His calves seemed to flare. Yaoi Rozu flung her hand out and grabbed her baton again as Iida rocketed towards her, flinging herself out of the line of fire. Iida wobbled, arms flailing as he tried to retain his balance, and Yaoi Rozu threw her baton at him, tangling in his legs and sending him crashing to the ground. Izuku winced at the impact, seeing how Iida's armor bent as he bounced across the corridor, ending up at Kaminari's feet. Kaminari lifted both hands, Yaoi Rozu sprinting for the bomb room, and a crackling wall of electricity filled the corridor. Izuku looked away, shielding his eyes from the glare. That was a bit much, he whispered. Iida was already down, there was no need to go that large. Why wouldn't he use a smaller shock? Maybe he has trouble controlling it. Maybe he wanted to make sure that Iida stayed down. I wonder how it affects him, whether he's immune or... I don't think he's immune, Midoriya, Asui said, pointing. Look. On the camera, Kaminari was stumbling around the corridor, a dazed smile on his face as he wandered aimlessly. Iida was down, but it looked like Kaminari wouldn't be good for much until he recovered. I wonder what the recovery time is. Some kind of backlash that stuns him. If it's powerful, I suppose it might be worth it, but can he make a smaller shock? That would be a liability out in the field, so... Izuku clamped his lips shut, cutting off the rest of his words. If he can be baited into using that attack, he'll be helpless if his opponent isn't taken out. He'd be an excellent opportunity to take a hostage. Yeah, best not to say that out loud. He was trying to be a convincing hero, after all, no matter how much the memories he'd inherited pushed him towards violence and making an example. Jason had been only just considered a hero after his initial problems with Bruce had been resolved, and he'd never gotten over a tendency to break people's legs. Jason, 20 years old, 6 feet tall, established in Gotham, could get away with that. Izuku, unfortunately, couldn't. Unfortunately. He whispered, softly enough that nobody heard him. At least, nobody commented. Then again Yaoi Rosu was confronting Ejiro at the moment, so everybody was probably distracted, and Izuku didn't need to dwell on his own strange choice of words. Yaoi Rosu had a baton in hand again, entering the room with cautious but confident steps. Ejiro stood in front of the bomb, in a rigid karate stance. Izuku wasn't quite an expert, but he remembered enough to see that Ejiro knew what he was doing. Question was, how much did Yaoi Rosu know? And how well did Ejiro integrate his tail? Izuku hadn't seen much, but from what he could tell Ejiro's tail was about as thick and long as his leg, with considerably better flexibility. An extra limb could trip up most combatants. Yaoi Rosu pointed her baton, said something. Ejiro shook his head and Yaoi Rosu smiled, darting in with shield high. It was a small shield, more like a buckler, and Ejiro skipped away from it, twisting out of the way of the baton thrust aimed at his stomach and chopping his hand across. Yaoi Rosu blocked and stepped into the shield, pushing Ejiro back and sweeping the baton in quick motions. She had training, and she was stronger than she looked. Not the best matchup. I wonder what the shield is made from, and what Ejiro's pain tolerance is like. Yaoi Rosu is taller, but he's more heavily built. If he can grapple with her he'll get an advantage, Izuku murmured, without thinking. He heard the whisper well, it was more like an outright statement, but he tried to give people the benefit of the doubt from Mineta. I'd like to grapple Yaoi Rosu, ha ha ha. That attitude'll get you killed one day, Izuku muttered, nose wrinkling in disgust, but Ejiro might be able to fight a battle of attrition anyway. If he can keep Yaoi Rosu away from the bomb he might be able to run out the clock, and Kaminari is down. 5 minutes is a long time, though. Which is why you were wondering about his pain tolerance, right, Ribbit? Asui asked. Izuku nodded. Yaoi Rosu used her baton more like a rapier than a club, and it was affecting the damage she was doing slightly, but Izuku could see the grimace on Ejiro's face, and the darkening bruises starting across his arms. His tail hadn't come into play, which made Izuku suspect that Ejiro was too practiced at karate. Too practiced? Oh, right. Cause he can't use his quirk in karate, so he's used to not using it. Izuku nodded to Kirishima. Right. He's not hitting hard enough with his fists and feet, and Yaoi Rosu must know enough about karate to hold him off. His tail could throw her off, but he's not using it. Technically there were laws against quirk use in public. In the spirit of all people, those laws were pretty much ignored unless it was something major. Frankly the police force and the heroes had bigger things to deal with. But it's something like a karate school, with rules and regulations and possibly tournaments, not using quirks would be enforced. Ejiro caught the baton across his forearm, clumping his hand around Yaoi Rosu's wrist and driving a knee into her stomach, throwing her away. The baton went flying as Yaoi Rosu rolled across the ground, and Ejiro leapt after her, both feet leaving the ground in a jumping kick. Yaoi Rosu dropped her small shield, a much larger one falling into her hands, but she couldn't brace enough and was sent rolling again, Ejiro plunging after her. He's taking back momentum. He's stronger, that might count now, Asui said, large eyes unblinking as she watched the camera. Yaoi Rosu was stumbling, trying to stay away from the quick powerful strikes of fists and feet that Ejiro was sending at her, though he was hesitating. Maybe it was some sort of honor, attacking an unarmed opponent. Maybe it was embarrassment, she was basically wearing a skimpy swimming suit, after all. In all fairness, Izuku wasn't sure if he'd even be able to fight her, or if he'd just die of embarrassment. Either that or he'd snap and go full Jason, in which case there would be a particularly brutal fight without any real hesitation. Jason Todd was a big believer in flattening anyone who had the audacity to fight him. Men, women, children. Damien had been a right little bastard when younger. Anyone. Red Hood didn't discriminate. Izuku would have to try and pick that up. She's not as good when she isn't in control, he mumbled, analyzing the way she was moving. More shields and batons, but her movements weren't as crisp, her style sloppier. She was used to being on top, maybe. Ejiro flowed from punch to spinning kick to a tail swipe, the first time Izuku had seen him use his tail. The limb caught Yaoi Rosu across the midsection and sent her spinning. It must have winded her, hand pressed against her stomach, but it sent her far enough away that Ejiro had to run at her. It was the biggest mistake he'd made in the match. It proved to be his downfall. Ejiro jumped into a kick as Yaoi Rosu rolled to her knees, hands still clasped over her stomach. She flung her hand out, a net opening into the air, and dived to the side. Ejiro slammed into the net, rolling over and tangled, and Yaoi Rosu pushed herself to her feet and launched herself at the bomb, hands slapping into place. And with 1 minute to spare, the hero team wins. All Might bellowed. Izuku applauded along with the rest of the class. That was clever, he said, eyes watching the way Yaoi Rosu walked over to Ejiro and offered him a hand to help him up, but it was risky. She really was hurt from that tail blow. She's still standing with a hunch. From what he's shown, I guess that means that his tail hits about as hard as a kick, which is interesting. His costume could do with a bit of work too, he's not wearing any footwear so attacking the feet could. Izuku cut himself off with a cough, waving a hand in front of his face, as though to waft away the last few words. Asui riveted softly, chuckling. Do you always do that? Oh, yes, it drove Kakin mad. He was always really annoyed by it, and a lot of my teachers were too, but I'm not sure how I was more disruptive than his explos. And anyway, Yoi Rozu has to get MVP there, right? She beat Jiro, and even if Kaminari was important to taking out Iida, Yoi Rozu gave him the opening, right? Who do you think should be MVP? Asked Sui. I told you, call me Tsayu, she said, although it was more of an absent reminder, and I think you're right. It has to be Yoi Rozu. Izuku nodded, inwardly thankful that his brief foray into stream of consciousness babbling hadn't caused too much trouble. He'd like to be at least a week in before anything went too badly wrong. The team's returned Kaminari was slowly starting to come around, although it took much longer than would be practical in the field, as far as Izuku was concerned, and All Might announced Yoi Rozu as MVP, although he took the time to praise the other three as well. Iida seemed ruffled by his swift defeat despite his remaining grogginess from Kaminari's attack, but he perked up when All Might praised his forethought in clearing the way for a direct attack. And then it was time to draw the next teams, and there were only 4 left. The villain team will be Team H. And the heroes will be Team A. Team A and Team H. That meant that Izuku and Asui would be last, since they were Team G. And their opponents would be. Oh, rough break man. Kirishima said, sounding genuinely apologetic. I was gonna ask what your quirk was, but I guess I'll get to test it out myself. Kirishima and Ishido. Not the worst opponents, but still. Izuku would feel bad fighting them after they had been so friendly. Then again, he might feel bad about fighting anyone here. They were all far too nice. Either way, there was one more match before that. Team A, consisting of Koji Koda and Kyoka Jiro, against Team H Rikido Sato and Hanta Zero. Izuku could only really guess at the quirks that they had. Jiro appeared to have some sort of wires coming from her earlobes, something like earphone cords, maybe so presumably enhanced hearing, and Izuku really hoped that it wasn't enhanced enough to have caught all of his mumbling. No telling if there was something else to it. Zero had strangely shaped elbows, almost like canisters. Decent guess something would be happening there. Sato and Koda were a mystery, although from the assessment yesterday, Izuku thought that Sato had some sort of super strength, but they were also huge, tall and heavily built. Izuku spared a moment to wish that his class wasn't so crammed with people who looked like they could pick him up and break him in half. It really prodded at his insecurities, and he tried to avoid aggravating those. Team H broke away from the crowd, heading to their building, and the hero team followed. Izuku chewed his lip, bringing a hand up to his chin. The extra pressure helped him keep his mouth shut, preventing his mumbling from slipping through. He'd seen both Kirishima's and Ishido's quirks yesterday, which was both good and bad. Good because it meant that he had a decent idea of what they could do. Bad because it meant that they had quirks that were both potent and fairly easy to apply, which put him at a disadvantage. Kirishima had a transformative quirk, able to turn his body into stone. Or maybe it was just his skin. Izuku wasn't sure. Either way, it made him stronger and presumably tougher. No guarantee that he could even hurt the other boy, shock knuckles or not. The bolas, maybe. Take him out of the fight for as long as possible. That left Ishido, who had produced a trail of liquid from her feet. Not just her feet, Izuku thought, though he didn't really have any solid proof for that, only conjecture. Was it conductive? How tough was she? Izuku shook his head, forcing his attention back onto the cameras. Is that tape? He asked. Kirishima nodded. Zero makes it, from his elbows. He's put it all around the bomb, looks like it's pretty sticky. I guess that's a good idea. Izuku reached up, pulling at the collar of his jacket. It had ridden up slightly. A problem Jason had never solved. It might have been better to put it in other places, he volunteered quietly, so that he could force Jiro and Koda down a single path. This way, if Koda is stronger than the tape, it'll be too late to do anything about it. Do we know what Sato or Koda can do? Quirk-wise. Don't know about Koda, but I asked Sato yesterday at the assessment. He can get stronger if he eats sugar, he said. I don't think it lasts too long though. He saved it as long as he could in the assessment, and he seemed kinda sleepy afterwards. I wonder if his time limit is longer than the exercise time limit, ribbit. Izuku rubbed at his throat, a nervous gesture. Koda was probably a bad match for Sato given their similar sizes. If Sato couldn't get a win before his time limit was up, he'd have some problems, especially if the backlash was severe. But then, could Jiro stop Zero? Could Zero or Jiro get past the tape? There were always questions. Jiro turned on the camera and said something to Koda, who was slightly hunched over. Izuku recognized his stance. Koda was nervous. It looked slightly ridiculous, such a large and imposing person adopting a hunched posture that would be better suited to Izuku, but Izuku felt a sharp pang of sympathy nonetheless. He didn't say anything, watching Koda's hands move sign language. He couldn't quite work it out. Izuku knew very little sign language, and Jason was more familiar with American, even if Izuku had been able to remember more than snippets of it. It wasn't one of the memories that had been particularly prominent. If Koda is non-communicative, that'll make things more difficult, Izuku observed, but there are ways around that. It would be a huge handicap for a hero, though. A lot of heroes relied upon the use of earpieces to communicate and coordinate. Someone who could only listen would be a liability, unless their quirk was superbly powerful or well-suited. Hopefully Koda could find a way around it. Izuku leaned in, seeing Koda lean down. He left the camera for a moment, and Izuku saw Jiro raise an eyebrow. Exercise, begin. All Might called, and the hero team started into the building. Jiro paused by a wall and one of the cords on her ear lifted up before driving into the concrete. Izuku blinked in faint horror. I really hope those buildings are made of lightweight materials, he whispered, because she just put her ear cord through it no problem. Hey, at least you'll be fighting Kiri and me and not her, Ashido said, far too cheerfully. Izuku suppressed his instinctive wince because he didn't really think that was better, but he was too polite to say so. Jiro said something to Koda, pointing upwards. Do you think she's found Shiro and Sato? Kirishima asked. Asui leaned past Izuku, looking more closely at the screen. She must have. They're going directly to them. Jiro keeps looking down. You think there's something weird going on? Ashido asked. Izuku looked more closely, frowning. Jiro did seem to be walking carefully, but whatever was on the floor was out of sight. Near to the bomb, Sato had a small packet in his hand and was holding it ready. If it was sugar almost certainly to give him his boost, he would be facing a question. Save it and risk being caught off guard, or use it and risk running out too soon. Depending on how long it took him to recover, it might have been better to meet the heroes at the entrance, forcing them to confront him with Shiro's tape, and trying to take them both out. Failing that, doing enough damage that Shiro could finish them off. Even better, an ambush. Force the two of them to split up. But how could that work with Jiro's quirk? If you knew what it was, would she be able to tell the difference between the real people and a recording? Could she be deafened with a white noise machine? How sensitive was her hearing, and was normal talking as loud as shouting to her? Izuku had so many questions. And it looked like he'd said some of them aloud, given the way that Asui was looking blankly at him, while Kirishima and Ashido edged away. Kirishima raised a hand. All Might, can I switch teams? Midoriya is sort of. No matter how terrifying you may find Midoriya, you must face that fear, young Kirishima. That is the essence of heroism. All Might happily replied. Izuku blushed and hid his helmet behind his raised arms. Sorry. Kirishima shook it off and clapped him on the shoulder. Don't worry about it, bro. Just try and work with me next time. This man was far too friendly. Izuku wished him luck with befriending Bakugo. We should focus on the match. He tried. Kirishima pumped his fist into the air. Yeah? Alright, where are they? The hero team has almost reached the villains, Yaoi Rosa provided. She was considerably more ruffled than before, a bruise darkening on her jaw, but her aloof attitude was unshaken. She strolled over to stand next to them, eyes raking across the screen. If Jiro and Koda intend to engage directly, they will be at a disadvantage. I suspect that Sato will be able to overpower Koda, and Shiro has the strength and reach advantage over Jiro. We haven't seen Jiro's quirk in full action yet though, or Koda's. They could do anything. Something crossed the field of a camera and Yaoi Rosa tutted. A rat. Surprising that UA would tolerate them. Although I suppose we're in a city, and there must be sewers for them. But why would it be here? Could Koda's quirk have something to do with rats? Calling to them. A useful distraction, but I don't see how much else it could do. Personally, Izuku was more interested in Yaoi Rosa's own quirk, given the versatility it had already shown, but it would probably be rude to just start asking. Assuming she was right and Koda could command rats, a distraction would be useful in a lot of cases. Just, perhaps, not here. Jiro covered the scouting aspect, and needing to reach the bomb through a web of tape would need something more than rats could deliver. There was always a chance, though. Izuku wouldn't claim to be more of an expert on a quirk than someone who had possessed it for more than a decade. The heroes had taken a slightly different path to expected, moving around and into a room next to the bomb. Asui tapped him on the shoulder. Does it look like Jiro's boots have speakers on to you? She asked. Izuku leaned closer. Yeah. I wonder what. Jiro tilted her head, one ear cord snaking down to her boot and plugging in. She lifted her boot, pressing it against the wall, and Izuku saw the rippling waves of force that spread out before they reached Sato and Shiro, sending them both stumbling. The wall wobbled and Kota charged, slamming his shoulder into the weakened material and bursting through. His arms waved wildly, but his charge hit Sato in the chest, carrying them both into the skeins of tape. They both went down, rolling across the ground encased in the sticky lines, and Jiro followed, darting towards Zero as he staggered, shaking his head. The sonic attack brilliant. They took Sato out of the fight, and even if it cost them, Kota's Zero is disoriented. They worked around the problem, instead of through it, Izuku said, enthused. Yaoi Rozu nodded in agreement. Although they are taking a risk, assuming that Jiro can defeat Zero, they removed Sato from play before his powers could have an effect. That could be the best move possible, unless Zero is highly skilled. Zero retreated, tape unspooling from the canisters along his elbows and crossing in front of him. Jiro made a dash through, her ear cords extending and jabbing at him, sending him back and trying to block. Her hand was nearly on the bomb when a line of tape snared her wrist, dragging her back, more winding about. Zero moved in, trying to bull his way through the lashing jacks and wrap her up, the second line catching her other wrist, and a rat landed heavily on his shoulder. He jolted, jerking away with what Izuku guessed was a yelp, and Jiro pulled hard, her bound hand slamming into the bomb. Hero team wins. A victory by technicality, Yaoi Rozu said, sniffing. She won, but in a real fight she would be at a disadvantage. She took advantage of the rules of the exercise, rather than its spirit. If you're fighting fair, you're doing it wrong, Izuku argued, despite his reluctance. As a hero, it's our job to stop villains. Fairness shouldn't come into it. But as a hero, we should strive to set a better example, Yaoi Rozu replied, looking at Izuku. She didn't quite meet his eyes, due to the opaque nature of his helmet, but it was fairly imposing nonetheless. Izuku licked dry lips, somehow finding the will to reply in him. Sometimes, setting an example means being better and more principled. Sometimes it means never losing. Just ask Kakin and he'll tell you as far as he cares, a hero is someone who never loses. Look at Endeavor. He doesn't care about hurting his opponents, he just wins. I'm not condoning it. Yes you are, Izuku. You've taken on more of Jason than you want to admit. But sometimes you have to swallow your principles in order to do the right thing. That's what the world is about. Yaoi Rozu looked at him. Izuku felt like a bug, being dissected on a slide, even when she nodded. I suppose you might be right, Midoriya. It might be a dangerous way to look at things, though, Asui said, so softly that only Izuku heard. Her ribbon was quite thoughtful. The subdued nature of it sent a pang of guilt through Izuku, somehow. Sometimes, when he wasn't careful, sometimes he forgot that this wasn't the Earth of the regime. This wasn't a world where supervillains broke out of prison every month, killing more and more people. This wasn't a world where every day seemed to bring some fresh atrocity. Sometimes he forgot. Jiro was named MVP, although All Might acknowledged that Kota had been a key part when Jiro explained that the two of them had used Kota's rats to get a better understanding of the room layout. Izuku retracted his earlier thought that Jiro had rendered Kota's scouting abilities more or less redundant, since if he hadn't been there she wouldn't have known about the tape. They had worked well together. And now, it was time. Izuku's doom had come. The only question was if he'd be facing it as a hero or a villain. Alright, that was a bit dramatic. But Izuku was in a nervous mood. And the final match. Team G and Team I, who will win? Let's see, the villain team will be Team G. Every villain team so far had lost. Izuku didn't like his odds. Still, that would make it better if he won. Kirishima tapped him on the shoulder and held out a clenched fist. Izuku stared for an awkward moment before his mind caught up, and he bumped fists with Kirishima. Let's do our best, yeah. Let the best hero win. Why yeah, we will. Good luck, Kirishima. Kirishima raised his fist, grinning enthusiastically. Despite being his opponent, it lifted Izuku's spirits. Kirishima might possibly be too good for this world. Izuku would have to keep an eye on him if any actual villains ever turned up. He was a little tired of depressing origin stories, even if the only one he'd experienced directly was his own. Asui walked out first, leading the way, and Izuku trailed after her, half-thought strategies and plans falling from his lips in a soft mumble. She waited until they were in the building to clear her throat. All Might gave me these, she said, holding out a small earbud, since you seemed distracted. Oh? Yeah, sorry. Asui peered at him, white eyes dark. Her expression was bland, but he thought he detected sympathy in her gaze. Don't worry about it, Ribbit. So, what's the plan? And what's your quirk? This was it. This was the moment to steel himself, to announce what he was loud to the world, to stand defiant in the face of everyone who said he couldn't be a hero. To deny everything Kakin had ever said about the quirkless, to assert himself as equal. The moment had come. It won't be useful. It's not very useful, anyway. It doesn't really matter, I've got gear to compensate. The moment came, and Izuku didn't rise to meet it. In that moment the crushing weight of years fell upon him. He stared into the abyss of fear, and he recoiled before it. This last day had been like having friends. Genuine friends. And he wasn't ready to throw that away. He rubbed his hands together. Sorry. Don't worry about it, Midoriya. My quirk is called Frog. I've got frog-like abilities, Ribbit, so I can jump quite high, and my tongue is prehensile. And I can secrete mucus, but it only really stings. Nothing like a Shido can produce, and not very useful anyway. Izuku pulled his helmet off for a moment, blinking and dipping his head as he put the earpiece on, to hide the tears that glistened in his eyes. Asui was kinder than he deserved, really, to just accept his pathetic non-answer regarding his quirk. So, she said as he latched his helmet back into place, what do you think we should do? Izuku closed his eyes, thinking. Neither Kirishima or Shido seemed to have strong lateral movement abilities, so putting the bomb as far up as possible would be a good idea. And then, Izuku and Asui could try to confront them lower down, to feel out their abilities. So long as they didn't commit, they could retreat more easily, assuming Asui could jump between floors. I think I can, yes. And yes, you said that out loud. Again. Ribbit. Izuku choked on his tongue, trying to regain his balance. He needed to work on that, desperately needed to work on it. Or get a muffler in his mask. The second would probably be easier. Asui put a finger next to her mouth, looking up. Let's take the bomb to the top floor, then. We can talk on the way. The two of them picked up the bomb. It was light enough, being made from papier match, but it was bulky enough that they were both needed. Izuku led, walking awkwardly up the stairs. Kirishima can turn into rock, I think, and I think it's his whole body. That'll make him hard to stop. I don't know if I can hit hard enough to hurt him. But I have a few things that might slow him down, if I can aim them right. And a Shido, it might be better if I lead, since I've got armor on. If they've got anything surprising, I'll be better able to take it. And you can take them by surprise, or at least try to, Izuku said. Asui hummed below him. So long as you're careful. Remember that the heroes win if they catch us both in that tape. Izuku nodded. Right, yeah. Why yeah, that would be bad. That's why I want to start at the bottom, try to get a feel for their abilities, before we have to face them closer to the bomb. Ambush, sneak attack, fight a battle of attrition, and then come back better prepared. The Batman special. Jason preferred resorting to high explosive ammo and winning from the start, but he'd been well versed in what a sizable subset of heroes had called the Batman method. Hopefully it would work, although it would be restricted by the lack of preparation time. If he was lucky, the bullets would take Kirishima out of the fight, and then Izuku and Asui could overwhelm Shido. Plans rarely went as hoped though, so he might get to test his grapple sooner than he liked. The thought didn't really fill him with delight, even if he was quite sure that power loader would have upgraded it. They set the bomb down in the middle of the 5th floor, and Izuku, briefly overcome by paranoia, took out his grapple to check it over. It looked just about the same as it had to begin with, but the cable looked newer. Still, he'd prefer not to rely on the ability of the dart to pierce and lock into concrete. We should wait on the 2nd floor, near the stairs, Asui suggested, croaking softly, that way we can be sure to catch them. Izuku nodded. Ah yeah, agreed. Let's head down there. The two of them retraced their steps, back down, and Izuku nervously rubbed at his wrist. I'll try and take down Kirishima with my bola, or at least distract him. Do you want to try to stop a Shido, or try to capture Kirishima? Asui tilted her head, finger pressing at the corner of her mouth again, while Izuku shifted nervously. She nodded. I'll take Kirishima. If he gets free, what do you want to do? Retreat to the 3rd or 4th floor. Izuku nodded. Why yeah. I don't know how strong he is, but we should try to avoid just fighting them straight up. They both have strong combat quirks, and I don't. I'll just be a liability, I'm so sorry. Hey Midoriya. You'll be fine. I don't think you'll be a liability, alright. She paused for a moment, Izuku staring at her. Besides, they'll probably be more nervous than you. I think you scared them both with your assessments of our classmates. Izuku flailed nervously, worrying about if he'd upset them or come off as creepy. Asui watched silently, her expression blank. Well, at least he wasn't worried about being useless anymore. He managed to pull himself together as they reached the stairway. Asui looked up and jumped, using a pipe that ran along the wall to reach up and pull away ceiling tiles, slithering into the gap. Izuku chose to slip into a nearby room, hiding himself in the shadows and taking deep, slow breaths to calm himself down. He reached down, taking hold of his bola and letting the wire wrap around his fist. One quick strike, and if he couldn't win, retreat. Simple. Easy. Bound to go wrong. Once again Izuku keenly felt his lack of preparation. Smoke grenades or flashbangs, either would do a much better job of covering his retreat. But then it would leave Asui vulnerable, which would weaken his team far more, so maybe, but then, if he could carry a number of spear-breathing masks. But would they take up too much space? Would UA even give a student grenades? They had given Bakugo those gauntlets, but they use his quirk, so. Focus, Midoriya, Asui said softly, her voice sibilant over the earpiece. Izuku bit his lip. Right. Later. He barely repressed his urge to apologize. He needed to get his head in the game. Izuku closed his hands into fists, taking a deep breath. In for 10, out for 10, let the worries go. Let the steady coldness of adrenaline flow through you. It's not about running anymore. It's time to be a hero. Izuku opened his eyes, the trembling in his limbs gone, his breathing steady, calm and forced on him with a practice he'd never had. He could hear voices, drifting up the stairway, Kirishima and Ashido drawn closer. He shifted closer to the door, feeling his heartbeat speed up, anticipation coiling in his gut. So I guess they might hide on the top floor. Almost everyone else has waited near the bomb, Ashido said. Kirishima, a few steps ahead of her, shrugged. Yeah, but I think Midoriya might not want to wait. He said about not fighting near the bomb a few times, and we're not the type to sneak around, right? Izuku waited until the two of them had drawn level with him before he moved. The bull left his hand in a perfectly angled throw as he surged out of cover. Kirishima suddenly found his torso bound by a thin wire, his arms locked against his body. Izuku jumped at him, a leaping kick, both boots crashing into Kirishima's chest. It was like jumping into a wall, but Kirishima was hurled off his feet, and Izuku bounced off, rolling to his feet and surging towards Ashido. She was surprised, but she was quick. His fledgling plan had been to grab her, try to grapple her long enough that Asui could capture Kirishima and join in, but Ashido ducked away and pirouetted on a slick of liquid, a spray leaving her fingers and splattering across his chest and face. It hissed and spat against his jacket, eating at the leather. Acid. The plastic of his helmet and chest plate weren't nearly as badly off, and Izuku ignored it in favor of closing in, converting his attempted grab into a shoulder charge that took them both to the ground. Ashido rolled with the impact, throwing him off, and Izuku saw her twist and spin back to her feet in an uncomfortably acrobatic move, a foot swinging at his head as he rose to a knee. He stopped it with a raised hand, his arm shaking at the impact, but holding as he pushed to his feet, kicking her other leg out from under her, and throwing her to the ground. He heard Asui grunt in his earpiece, a sound of pain. Look out, Midoriya. Kirishima is. Izuku was lifted off his feet as Kirishima tackled him, lifting him and ramming him into the wall. Instincts flared and Izuku brought an arm up, driving his elbow into Kirishima's collarbone. It hurt like hell, rocky skin against leather, but Kirishima dropped him, and Izuku snaked an arm around his legs, throwing his body weight against Kirishima and sending him to the ground. Izuku wriggled free, pushing himself up. Ashido was on the offensive against Asui, forcing his partner back with wide sprays of acid. Izuku crossed the open ground, hooking his leg around Ashido's from behind and shoving her to the ground. Time to go. He snapped. Asui gave a croak of agreement, and the two of them bolted up the stairs, Asui using powerful leaps to clear the steps. Izuku just took them three at a time, counting on Kirishima and Ashido to be distracted as they split off from the main corridor, taking an agreed-on route until they reached a safer room. Izuku bent over, taking measured breaths to fill his aching lungs. Sorry, Midoriya, Asui croaked. Kirishima got over the surprise faster than I expected, and I couldn't get the tape around his arms in time. Izuku shook his head. I didn't expect Ashido to be so good, either. Guess I should have, she earned her place too. But I think we can win. I'm pretty sure that I can take Ashido, given a minute. You think you can hold Kirishima off for that long? Asui shrugged. I'll try, Ribbit. Izuku noticed that there was a graze on her jaw and a mark on her left shoulder that looked like a scrape mark, but didn't comment, since Asui seemed completely unruffled. He unhooked his shock knuckles from his belt, slipping one onto his left hand, leaving the right free to take up his second set of bullets. He'd give Asui as much of a chance as he could, and hoped that Ashido's acid was a decent conductor. They both hit again as voices drifted up the stairs, Kirishima and Ashido, in hot pursuit. The room they had chosen as a safe room was along one of the main corridors, so it would hopefully draw Ashido and Kirishima down it. Izuku tipped his head and listened carefully. Man, Midoriya hits harder than I expected, Kirishima said. You alright? Ashido asked. Izuku heard a faint scoff. Yeah, pretty sure he hurt his elbow more than he hurt me. But I wasn't expecting it. Alright. Might be best to split up, yeah. Take both paths. I dunno, Kiri. Midoriya and Asui might be waiting to get us two on one. Yeah, but look at it the other way, if they're both going after one of us, the other one can run up and find the bomb. Practically everyone else has done it that way, right? They're trying to lure us out, Izuku whispered to Asui. She nodded. They're talking loudly on purpose, Ribbit. Maybe they're worried about the time limit. It was a fair concern. 10 minutes wasn't that long to search a whole building, especially when there was resistance. And Izuku supposed that Kirishima had a decent reason to be confident, given that it had been Izuku and Asui who had retreated from their earlier clash. So now we've got a choice, he said. Do we risk fighting 2-on-1, or do we stay with the plan, and hope that we can both win? Asui crouched down, her tongue licking across her lips. Izuku watched her eyes, suspecting that they would be a better indicator of her thoughts than her body language. She shrugged. We should go with our first plan, Ribbit. We've got 2 floors left, and you're sure you can take out Ishido? Right. Right, Izuku said, because this was no time to doubt. Asui nodded. Then we'll go with that. I'll be careful with Kirishima, draw him up if I have to. Just don't take too long. I'll do my best, he said. Knowing that he wouldn't be facing Kirishima yet, he put away Hezbollah. Better to save it for the moment. Asui rose from her hunkered position, nodding to him. They've split up. Let's go. Izuku and Asui parted, heading out after their individual targets. Izuku moved quickly, taking his best guess as to where Shido had gone, and found her just as she reached another staircase. The upper levels had several rather than one. He trailed her up the staircase, matching his steps to hers and keeping his breathing soft, creeping closer and closer. A single surprise attack, and then he could help Asui. She reached the 3rd floor and paused, a hand coming up to her ear. At the same time Izuku's own earpiece crackled softly. Midoriya, I've found Kirishima. Could do with a hand, when you have the time. Izuku didn't reply, eyes locking onto Ishido. A grab into a chokehold, that was the plan. And then she paused. So if Midoriya isn't with Asui, oh shit. She spun around, a wave of acid coming from her hand, and Izuku moved. He lunged through the spray, feeling it spatter on his costume, caught her with a blow to the stomach. She went with it, sliding backwards on a trail of acid and bounding off the wall, her right fist coming at his head. Izuku blocked, forearm to wrist, drove the shock knuckle into her upper arm, and saw her arm go limp. Ishido hissed through her teeth and spun into a kick, the slick acid giving her easy movement. Izuku ducked under it, grabbing her ankle and pulling her leg out from under her. She hit the ground with a huff of air, and Izuku seized the chance to pull the capture tape from his belt and wrap it around her working wrist. He rolled to his feet, out of the acid as Ishido sprang up, leaning away from another kick and slipping behind her, kicking the back of her knee to bring her down, and forcing her arms behind her, wrapping her other wrist in the tape. Mina Ishido has been captured. All Might boomed over the speaker system, and Ishido went limp. Hell, she said, through heaving breaths, didn't think you'd be so good. Izuku took a few deep breaths. Sorry. Ishido laughed, don't sweat it, Midori. We're both here to win. So go and get wiped by Kiri so my team can win anyway. I'll get to the entrance on my own. Izuku managed a breathless laugh, scrambling to his feet and racing off. Asui, he said, where are you? Near the 4th floor, main staircase. He's not giving up. No, Izuku thought, Kirishima didn't give the vibes of someone who would give up. But hopefully, between the two of them, they could bring him down or delay him long enough for time to run out. They were looking at 3 minutes still, though. That was a long time in combat. I'm on my way. Izuku sprinted through rooms, running for the staircase. He crashed through a door, splintering the light wood, slid across a table and went through another door just in time to see Asui get clipped by a punch, the glancing blow ruining her dodge, and leaving her in Kirishima's grip. Izuku pulled the grapple launcher from his belt, prayed that it would work, and shot it into the wall. Kirishima spun his head to follow the dart, and Izuku jumped, hitting the winch, and hoping it had been upgraded. It had been. He shot through the air, not as fast as he would like but fast enough, and his boots caught Kirishima in the ribs. They all went down. Kirishima and Asui to the ground, while Izuku tumbled, still being dragged along by his grapple. He popped the latches on the harness, wriggling free of it in his coat, coming to his feet. Asui. Need help. I told you to call me Tsayu. Kirishima rose to his feet, rubbing at his ribs before laughing. Man, do you have to kick me in the chest so much? He rolled his neck and flexed his arms, grin made a lot more menacing by sharp teeth. Well, I guess we're supposed to win, right? So let's get to it. Kirishima didn't seem hurt at all, his whole body rocky and ridged. Asui, comparatively, was breathing more heavily, her hair messed up and another scrape on her cheek. Izuku glanced at her. Asui, stay back and try to jump in after I distract him. Catch your breath. Izuku stepped forwards, watching Kirishima sink into a ready stance, fists raised. Boxing, or something like it. Izuku bounced on the balls of his feet, settling both hands into his shock knuckles, looking Kirishima in the eye as best he could. A frozen moment, an instant between breaths, and Kirishima lunged with a harsh shout. Izuku darted forwards to meet him, ducking under a haymaker and slashing 2 quick blows into the ribs, hopping away from a downwards punch, and kicking Kirishima in the side of the knee. Kirishima grunted as Izuku's boot bounced off rocky flesh, an elbow hitting Izuku in the chest and knocking him back. Izuku went with it, skipping back a few steps to bleed off the impact, still light on his feet. Kirishima nodded. Alright. Pretty good, Midoriya. Guess the best man'll win. Kirishima burst forwards, 3 jabs coming in quick succession. Izuku felt his arms ache as he parried them, even through his vambraces, a forthcoming right at his chin, and he turned, let it pass, wrapped his right arm around Kirishima's wrist, and drove his left elbow back. Kirishima grunted as the elbow hit his face and Izuku spun around the arm, grip turning into a whip-quick punch to the mouth, left fist into the chest, knee to the stomach, hands on each shoulder into jumping knee to the solar plexus, and a forehead rammed into his helmet, staggered him, arms locking around him and lifting him off the ground. Izuku snarled out a breath as he tried to escape the bear hug, recriminations lashing through him because he tried to take a strength-based meta in a brawl, and how stupid was he, and Kirishima yelled, as something wrenched his leg out from under him. Izuku broke free as Kirishima hit the ground and rolled away, losing his shock knuckles, but at least he wasn't caught anymore. Asui pulled her tongue back, away from Kirishima's ankle, and nodded to him. Thanks, Asui. Finally, Ribbit. You think we can take him? Kirishima rolled over and pushed up to one knee, grunting as he did so. Izuku watched him through narrowed eyes, sucking in deep breaths. How long can you keep that up, Kirishima? He asked. Kirishima gave him a quick grin. Why don't you find out, Midoriya? Probably not that much longer, then. Izuku nodded. We can take him. Kirishima cracked his knuckles as he stood. Alright, Midoriya. That's the manly stuff I like to hear. Well, he wasn't out of juice yet. Playing the striking game wasn't working, so what was next? Grappling. Kirishima was bigger and heavier than Izuku, but did he know what he was doing? Izuku could only try, he supposed. Midoriya, if you can keep him in place, I'll hit him as hard as I can, as Sayu said softly. Izuku nodded. Do my best. Kirishima made the first move again, launching himself forwards. Sayu jumped away, clearing room, and Izuku dropped to a knee, ducking the punch and slipping behind Kirishima. Kirishima spun, an arm scything around, and Izuku caught it, pinning it between his left arm and chest, and hitting at the jaw, before letting go and backstepping away, avoiding a grab, darting in again. He put his shoulder into Kirishima's chest, pulled the grabbing arm over his shoulder, and jammed his hip into Kirishima, throwing him. It was hard. Izuku almost failed, but Kirishima left the ground and hit the floor hard, rolling. He lunged from his kneeling position, right arm thrown forwards in a punch aimed at Izuku's stomach. Izuku slipped aside, right arm curling round Kirishima's shoulder, left boot kicking at the back of the knee, forcing Kirishima down to the ground with a hand on the shoulder. Midoriya, move. Asui called and Izuku let go, diving away. Asui jumped at a wall, bouncing off to gain speed, and rammed both feet into Kirishima's chest. Kirishima went straight through a wall. Izuku caught Sayu as she rebounded from Kirishima, stopping her from hitting the ground. The girl winced. That hurt, Ribbit. Izuku gently set her down, Sayu rubbing at her ankles. Might have been poorly thought out. I dunno, Kirishima croaked. I feel like it worked pretty well. He slowly stood up and pulled himself out of the wall, hair a mess, red whitened with plaster. The rockiness had receded from his skin, only remaining on his chest, and his grin had turned into a grimace. That was a pretty good one, Asui. But I'm not down yet. Izuku glanced at Asui, saw that she was in no place to stand, and nodded. No. But I'm not down either. Kirishima grinned, a pained expression that was still lit with enthusiasm. Alright, bro. Let's do this man to man, then. Izuku took a deep breath. Kirishima bent over slightly, ready to charge, and Izuku widened his stance, waiting. Kirishima moved, a full body lunge from his crouched position, attempting to grab Izuku around the middle. Izuku slid to the side, slipping around Kirishima, kicking the back of the knee. He didn't leave it this time, going straight for the grapple. One arm around the throat, other arm under the armpit, forearms crossed to brace, pull back hard. Kirishima grunted, struggled, an elbow catching Izuku in the chest, but his armor absorbed the blow like it wasn't even there, and Kirishima was too tired to struggle for long. 10 seconds, 20, Kirishima had dropped his chin enough that Izuku couldn't choke him out before the grab had been completed. Not that Izuku wanted to choke someone out in a school exercise anyway, but he couldn't get free. The clock was ticking, and they both knew it. Izuku gritted his teeth, hauled back. Kirishima's free hand closed around Izuku's wrist, but couldn't crush through the gauntlet and vambrace, and the shrill siren rang. Time is up. Winners, Villain Team. Izuku let Kirishima go, falling over backwards as the tiredness registered, arms and legs aching but overridden by something else. Something sweeter. Something rare. Izuku Midoriya lay on the concrete and let out a breathless, elated laugh, as the greatest hero of all Japan announced, voice booming and delighted, that his team had been victorious. Thus concludes today's chapter. If you enjoyed the video, leave a like and subscribe with post notifications, so you'd be notified when the next chapter releases. Until next time.